Kingdom Hearts, one series spanning over 2 decades, and my favorite game series of all time. You know what that means, right? Kingdom Hearts was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2002 with a second updated version called Final Mix released later that year exclusively in Japan. So what is Kingdom Hearts? Let me try to break it down. In this game, you control Sora and have completely free movement in any direction on foot. You can jump, grab ledges, climb things including trees, ladders, and vines, and even pick up certain items and throw them. Sora can swim in various bodies of water too. As you progress through the game, Sora learns more advanced movement techniques like high jump, giving him a higher jump, and glide, which allows him to glide across vast distances quickly. These abilities are also granted to party members at the same time that Sora learns them and are called shared abilities. Through all of the diverse and unique locales across all of the worlds in this game, there's so much to explore. The game is full of platforming, environmental challenges, and general mini-puzzles depending on the location. There are all kinds of objects and little secrets to interact with in the worlds too. Some can be boxes that can be pushed, barrels that can be lifted, and items that you can outright break, all in service of making the environment feel more interactive. And with exploration, there's also discovery. While you can earn treasures through completing puzzles, challenges, or fights, most often you'll find treasures by opening treasure chests. Every world has a set amount of chests put in specific locations, and as you explore, you'll sometimes find that you can't reach a certain chest and have to come back later when you've learned a new movement ability or spell that brings the chest within your reach. Treasures you can find include consumable items, accessories, synthesis materials, and collectibles like Dalmatians. I will explain the Dalmatians later, but shoving Dalmatian puppies into treasure chests is kinda dark, right? Like, is someone feeding them? So I feel weird explaining this because it's such a simple concept, but in every world in this game there are save points, sometimes multiple in a single world. Not only can you save your game at these save points, but touching these points refills your party's health and MP too. You can use these save points to change your party composition and, outside of a couple of exceptions, travel back to the world map. These save points also function as fast travel points to specific areas of each world from the world map. Usually you can find save points in safe areas that don't have any enemies or toward the entrances and exits of areas. On the bottom right side of the screen, you'll find Sora's HUD, including his HP and MP. HP is your health and MP are your magic points, which are broken down into segments. On the bottom left, you'll find the command menu, and on the top right, you'll find your party members and their associated HP and MP bars. If you have the scan ability activated, you can see the targeted enemy's HP in the top left corner. The enemy's HP is shown in the form of one bar, the first represented by green. Any additional HP bars are layered on top with different colors for each HP bar. When not in combat, you can visit the menus by hitting the start button to change up your party's equipped weapons, accessories, and consumable items. There's more to these menus too, but I'll focus on the equipment for now. Starting with weapons, Sora's main weapon is called a Keyblade. We'll get into what a Keyblade is in the game's lore a little bit later. In this game and all future games, the Keyblade's different forms are officially called keychains. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just gonna call them Keyblades from here on out. The default and most iconic Keyblade, the one that you've probably seen before if you're not familiar with the series, is the Kingdom Key. As a general rule, when you complete a world, you earn that world's Keyblade. Every Keyblade has its own stats, and sometimes, depending on the game, its own passive effects too. Keyblades can also be earned through other means like defeating certain bosses or otherwise completing certain requirements like synthesis, which I'll get to. Other party members have their own unique weapons, but outside of Donald and Goofy, these weapons can't be changed, nor do the guest party members have more than one weapon anyways. Combat is incredibly straightforward and intuitive, but very deep. Like I said earlier, on the bottom left side of the screen, you have the command menu. This menu can be scrolled through at any time with the D-pad and includes the attack, magic, item, and summon commands. When you press the attack button, you swing the Keyblade, or whatever weapon you happen to be holding. It's almost always the Keyblade though. You can continue to press the attack button to chain the attacks into a combo, and you can attack both on the ground and in the air. At the beginning of the game, you have a standard 3-hit combo, but as you level up, you unlock skills that not only can increase the number of hits that you can use in each combo, combo, but also their strength and even what move Sora can use as his big combo finisher. While you can attack any enemy closest to you, you can also select which enemy you want to target by locking onto them. This makes all of Sora's attacks automatically target the locked on opponent. While you can still hit other enemies that come between Sora and the target, the focus will always be on the targeted enemy. In the worlds of Kingdom Hearts, you encounter a variety of enemies. While there are some humanoid and animal enemies, a vast majority of the enemies in this game are called the Heartless. The Heartless come in so many forms and basically animal breeds, and as you encounter and defeat them, you can see them in sort of a bestiary that's built into the game's journal. Every enemy in this game can drop items and consumables like HP orbs, which recover your HP, MP orbs, which recover your MP, money, spelled not at all how you'd expect, and even sometimes items in the form of little boxes to represent them. In addition to physical attacks, Sora has a number of other combat options. First are magical attacks. Each spell Sora can use has an NP cost. MP can be recovered through various means, including collecting the MP orbs dropped by enemies or by touching a save point. For offensive magic, there's basic elemental attacks like the projectile fire and blizzard attacks. Fire shoots a fireball straight out of the end of the Keyblade and can home onto enemies Sora's locked onto. Blizzard, on the other hand, is more of a spread out shotgun type of attack that doesn't home in on enemies, but can deal quite a bit of damage to enemies directly in front of you. There's also the thunder and gravity spells. Thunder is actually lightning, but it's an area of effect attack where Sora calls down lightning strikes on the targeted enemy. Gravity is another area of effect attack which deals damage to enemies in its wake, but also can ground aerial enemies too. On top of offensive spells, you also have defensive spells. There's Stop, which can straight up stop time for enemies, freezing them in place for a period of time. Arrow, which gives its target a wind barrier that reduces damage taken, while more powerful versions can also inflict damage. And finally, there's the greatest support spell, Cure. This spell cures its target. Plain and simple. As you progress through the game and reach milestones through the story, or beating certain bosses or worlds, your spells are given upgrades, and each upgrade increases the spell's potency. So for Fire, for example, you can upgrade it to Fira and then Firaga. Thunder goes from Thundara to Thundaga, and Cure goes from Cura to Curaga. Not only is the potency increased, but also the visual effect of the spell changes too. Spells are also sometimes necessary to solve some of the environmental challenges and puzzles that are littered all over the game. In some places, you can light fires with the fire spell or put them out with Blizzard. One of my favorites is finding a chest like this one floating on a small platform in Hollow Bastion, which you can lower by using the magnet spell. Like the environmental platforming challenges, there's just so many of these challenges scattered throughout the game's worlds, and it really makes this game feel really interactive and full of wonder as you're conditioned to constantly seek out all of these little challenges and interact with them, sometimes not quite having the toolset yet and having to come back later when you unlock an ability, and then it just clicks. But anyways, another use of your magic gauge is through abilities. Before I explain abilities though, let me explain leveling up. Earning enough experience through defeating enemies increases your level. Leveling up can increase your stats, including attack power, defense, health points, and magic points. Leveling up also, depending on the level and a couple of other factors, grants you new abilities that you can equip anytime you're not in combat from the main menu. These abilities have a wide range of effects. There's new movement and defensive mechanics like dodge, rolling, and guarding, or abilities that can increase the number of hits in your combos, and even some abilities that change up the attacks in your combos, giving you special moves or even new attacks altogether. There's also a secondary way to learn abilities, which is through straight up game progression and clearing certain milestones, just like upgrading spells. While some abilities are what I'd call passive, like the ones that increase combo hits or add movement abilities, there are others that are just straight up combat abilities. My favorite example that you're gonna see a lot here is an ability called Strike Raid. Strike Raid is an ability where Sora hurls the Keyblade in a spinning arc at the targeted enemy, or just straight out if you're not targeting an enemy. If you get the timing right, you can catch and toss the Keyblade a few more times before finishing it off with Judgment, a powerful final hit. If you mash the button to throw the Keyblade though, it can cancel out the rest of the move entirely. You do have to time it properly. There's a few other abilities that work just like Strike Raid, including Ars Arcanum and Sonic Blade too. These combat abilities aren't free though, and cost Sora anywhere from 1 to 5 MP for each use. Every ability you equip also has an ability point or AP cost, and all party members including Sora have a max AP limit that can be increased through leveling up or the use of certain equipable items. A big part of this game is balancing which abilities you want equipped without going over your AP limit. This means that sometimes you have to choose whether you want, an extra combo hit or a special finisher. As this is an RPG, there's a big focus on items too. There's a few types of items, including equipable items, consumable items, and materials. Equipable items include Sora's Keyblades, weapons for each party member, and accessories. Accessories are equipable items that Sora and all of his party members can equip. The number of accessories a character can equip varies and can increase over time through leveling up. There's a nice variety of accessories that have bonuses to stats, HP, MP, and even AP. You can earn these accessories through finding them in chests around the world, buying them from shops, and synthesizing them. The game also features quite a few consumable items too. There's items that you can use at any time in or out of battle, like potions, which restore HP, ethers, which restore MP, and elixirs, which restore both. Then there's some consumable items that can only be used from the out-of-battle menus. Tents, camping sets, and cottages are items that restore the entire party's HP and MP to different degrees. There's also stat booster items. These include AP up, power up, and defense up, and using one of these increases the target stat permanently by 1 for the party member it's used on. In Traverse Town, Sora meets a group of Moogles in an item workshop who can synthesize items for him. To synthesize items, you need to bring the Moogles synthesis materials, and these can be found through defeating enemies, opening chests in different worlds, and sometimes straight up buying them in the shop. Initially, you can only craft a handful of items, but as you craft more and more, you learn the recipes for more and more items. You can craft consumable items like potions and stat increases, along with accessories, and eventually, the ultimate weapons for Sora, Donald, and Goofy. The synthesis materials for these items can typically be found passively by defeating enemies and opening chests in the worlds that you're already visiting. However, for the higher tier and rarer items, like Sora's strongest Keyblade, the Ultima weapon, you need a lot of materials that you probably won't have until the end of the game, and that's only if you've actually been going out of your way to explore and open chests and grind for them. And even then, it's likely you won't obtain the quantity of synthesis materials you need without some dedicated effort, and oh boy, this can be tedious. For example, after I had completed the game, I had to go back to Agrabah to farm some mithril stones. These are only dropped by a certain enemy, the pot scorpion. In order to get one mithril stone, you have to do a sort of roundabout puzzle where you have to break every pot that doesn't have the enemy in it before finally fighting the enemy to even get a chance at getting the mithril stone. I say chance because even after all of this effort, I don't think it's guaranteed to drop every time, and only has a percentage of dropping. Fortunately, there are some abilities in the game that mitigate this because they increase your luck and thus item drop rates, but hopefully this gives you an idea about how farming each and every one of these materials can be super tedious. But back on track, Sora's final offensive tactic in this game is summons. Summons are a type of magic, and each summon costs a certain amount of MP. As you progress through the game, you can either unlock a summon outright after clearing their world, like with Genie, or you can find a summon stone that you can bring to the Fairy Godmother in Traverse Town to unlock the summon. Every summon has their own special abilities and benefits. When you bring out a summon, it slowly depletes your magic gauge and will disappear either when the gauge runs out or when you dismiss it manually using the command menu. The unlockable summons are Simba, Genie, Tinkerbell, Dumbo, Bambi, and Mushu. Simba is obtained through the Earthshine gem, and his ability is Proud Roar. Genie is unlocked after completing Agrabah. His summon requires you to lock onto an enemy before using his Showtime command, which casts spells on the targeted enemy. Tinkerbell is obtained after completing the Neverland world. She constantly heals you and your party over time with basically no downside, not even the replacement of your party members like the normal summons. Dumbo is obtained from the Water Gleam gem that you find in the Monstro world. Sora summons him and then rides around on him while he shoots water. This summon is not the most useful in my opinion though. Bambi is obtained through the Nature Spark gem found in the 100-acre wood. Bambi constantly drops MP orbs, keeping your MP basically full so you can spam spells as much as you want. Finally, Mushu is obtained from the Fire Glow gem after defeating the Dragon Maleficent boss. Mushu has a special attack called Fire Breath that basically fires a targeted machine gun-like fire attack at enemies you're targeting. The summons are really nice and can help you cheese a few of the tougher fights in this game. However, there is a huge downside. You have to replace both of your party members with the summon for the duration of the summon. Not only that, you can only summon when both party members are alive and not knocked out. So it's kind of risk versus reward, I guess. Of course, a massive cornerstone of the series is the party members. Kingdom Hearts features a huge cast of Disney characters, and a lot of them can join your party. Your default party consists of Sora, Donald, and Goofy. Donald is a mage who uses magic spells and wields a staff. Goofy is a knight whose main weapon is, funnily enough, a shield that he can bash, spin, and ram with. Your party members have their own experience levels, stats, equipment, abilities, item stocks, and even customizable tactics. You can tell a party member how often they should use certain abilities, how much they should or shouldn't target certain enemies or use certain items, and more. This is a fairly deep RPG mechanic for what is basically an action-adventure game, and something that's still really cool to dig into today. Throughout the game, as you visit each world, you have the option of replacing Donald or Goofy with that world's character. Unfortunately, this means that you can't have Donald, Goofy, and the guest character in the party at the same time, though. The guest characters for each world are Tarzan in Deep Jungle, Peter Pan in Neverland, Aladdin in Agrabah, Jack Skellington in Halloween Town, Ariel in Atlantica, and Beast in Hollow Bastion. The guest characters all function otherwise normally like your standard party members and have their own abilities, equipment, and items. They also sometimes have contextual actions that can only be performed if they're in the party. For example, in order to use Trinities, you have to have Donald and Goofy specifically in your party, no matter which world you're visiting. In Hollow Bastion, Beast can be called to destroy certain walls, while in Agrabah, you can have Aladdin use Abu to activate certain objects in the Cave of Wonders. commanders. The guest characters are actually where a lot of the wonder of Kingdom Hearts came from, at least for me as a kid. You know, outside of visiting the worlds themselves. Working side by side with these characters in these worlds is so much cooler than if they just had, I don't know, Sora, Donald, and Goofy exploring the worlds almost as tourists, I guess. The whole idea is that Sora, Donald, and Goofy aren't supposed to mess with the world order or reveal that they're from another world, but clearly they're still allowed to interact with the world itself, and it does lead to some fun and interesting gameplay and story moments. I couldn't really think of a natural place to talk about this, so I'll quickly mention it here. In this game, there are 4 big collectibles in the form of Trinities, Torn Pages, Ansem Reports, and Dalmatians. Early in the game, you visit the Traverse Town world, and in Traverse Town, there's the Dalmatians' house. This is the home of Pongo and Perdita, who have lost all of their 99 Dalmatian puppies because of the destruction of their original world. You're tasked with finding all of them and bringing them back in exchange for rewards at certain milestones. These Dalmatians can be found in chests in almost every world in the game, 3 at a time. The rewards can be claimed by returning to the Dalmatians' house and can include things like gummy blocks for your gummy ship, consumable items, and synthesis materials. Another thing that you can find across all these worlds are Trinity marks. These are small little emblem marks that you can find and come in 5 different colors, each with a different function. In order to activate these, you have to have Donald and Goofy specifically in your party, and even then, not all colors can be activated before hitting certain story or gameplay milestones. The Trinity mark types are blue Trinities, which is a Trinity jump and rewards you with money and items, red Trinities, called the Trinity Charge, which opens up new paths through clearing obstacles, green Trinities, called Trinity Ladder, which gives you access to high up treasures, yellow Trinities, called Trinity Push, which lets you, push things, and white Trinities, called Trinity Detect, which materializes a treasure chest. The rewards from activating Trinities have a huge range and can basically be anything. Sometimes it's just money or consumable items, sometimes it's just access to a new area, but there are some that have incredibly valuable items like Wonderland's Lady Luck Keyblade or Olympus's Keyhole, the thing that basically signifies that you've completed the world. Finally, there's Ansem Reports. There are 13 total pages of Ansem Reports, and you obtain them through defeating world bosses and secret bosses, with the exception of a couple that you received through talking to Aerith and Hollow Bastion. These reports are written as journal entries by someone identified as Ansem and give quite a bit of background on the lore of the series. The mysterious nature of these reports is only increased due to how both infrequently you collect them and the fact that it's not a guarantee you'll collect them all or in order. What's more is that once you learn that the main villain of the game is called Ansem, which really raises the question, is it the same Ansem that you just met who's writing these entries, or does the story go deeper? I'll talk about Torn Pages in just a little bit because it's almost time to talk about the worlds themselves, but before we can do that, we have to talk about how you visit these worlds. In Kingdom Hearts, the worlds are separated by vast space, and in order to traverse that space, Sora, Donald, and Goofy fly a ship called a gummy ship. Gummy ships are made up of small individual blocks and components called gummy blocks, and in Kingdom Hearts, you can use pre-made ships, modify the pre-made ships, and even make ships from scratch using these individual blocks. When you first unlock the ability to use the gummy ship after completing Traverse Town, you're taken to what is called the world map. It's kind of funny that a map with a bunch of worlds on it is called the world map though, right? On the world map, you can see all of the worlds that you have currently unlocked. At first, you can only see Traverse Town along with an inaccessible Disney castle, but as far as the worlds that you can visit, it's just Traverse Town. On a branching path, you have the choice between 2 unknown worlds. Each world has what is called a battle level, which is basically just the difficulty of enemies in that world. If it's your first time playing this game, you don't know what these worlds are going to be, but going into the unknown, you select a world and embark on your gummy ship. The gummy ship missions are a completely different kind of gameplay from the standard action RPG gameplay. These are on-rails space shooter missions where you're flying in a straight line towards the destination world. On this straight line, you fly the ship, which can be moved in any direction on a single axis, up, down, left, and right, also diagonally, of course. The HUD is similar to the standard HUD in normal gameplay, with your HP represented by a green bar and your power represented by a blue bar. If you have the shield gummy equipped, you can see the shield on the HUD as well. Your initial gummy ship, the High Wind, has a single attack gummy giving you a single rapid-fire cannon that can be held to fire constantly straight ahead. Further into the game, you unlock more powerful cannons with different firing patterns and speeds, along with a secondary laser weapon type, which is fired using a different button entirely and uses your power gauge. As you move along the on-rails path, you encounter a ton of obstacles, which kind of just come at you. Most of them are stationary, while others might move around. Hitting these obstacles will lower your ship's HP, and losing all of your HP, of course, fails the mission. Some obstacles can be destroyed by firing weapons at them too. When they're destroyed, these obstacles will usually drop an item in the form of a gummy block that can be used to customize and create ships. Some obstacles have higher durability than others though, and you may not always have enough firepower to destroy them in time. Fortunately, you can go back and replay these gummy missions anytime after you complete them, meaning that you can come back with way more firepower later on. Additionally, there's a break which temporarily slows the ship. This is good for collecting gummy items that a broken obstacle dropped but you couldn't reach in time, or giving you a little bit of extra time to avoid an obstacle that you're about to hit. Eventually, you unlock an equipable gummy that adds boost functionality to your ship, giving you a short boost that can be activated at any time at the cost of a boost gauge on your HUD. Now, sometimes during these missions, you'll run into what are called warp holes. You can choose to enter these in order to quickly visit a world further into the world map without having to fly manually from world to world. There are predefined warp hole locations on the map, and while they can save a ton of time, you eventually unlock what's called a warp gummy. The warp gummy allows you to warp directly to any world you want on the world map without having to fly the gummy route at all, as long as you visited that world before. Because of the nature of customizing these ships, each gummy ship performs a little differently based on its equipped gummies and stats. Maneuverability is a big part of surviving these missions, but so is firepower depending on the mission or route. And yeah, these missions aren't all just obstacles. There's also a ton of enemy ships that will appear either in waves or alongside the obstacles. These ships usually move around dynamically, making them tricky to hit, and will also fire their own projectiles at you, though some of them do stay still and become tough obstacles that take a ton of firepower to destroy themselves. There's a pretty big variety of enemies here, all with their own movement patterns and attacks. When destroyed, these enemies also drop gummy blocks, but sometimes additional things like blueprints, which are designs of pre-made ships that you can use later on. Ship making and customization in the Gummy Garage is pretty in-depth for what is definitely not the main focus of this game. Anytime you're on the world map, you can go into the Gummy Garage and customize as much as you want. In the Gummy Block menu, you can choose an existing saved or pre-made ship blueprint, or you can go in and create or customize a ship. When creating a custom ship, you select a save slot for that ship, and then you're taken directly into the Gummy Editor. Now listen, right off the bat, the Gummy Editor's UI and control scheme is kind of a mess by modern standards. Once you figure it out, you can kind of adapt to it though. It's still not great. In the bottom left of the UI, you've got your Gummy Block category, with the categories being cockpits, engines, armors, wings, specials, weapons, and design gummies. At the top left UI of the editor, you can cycle through each individual gummy you own of the selected category. In the center, you have the actual ship design itself. This is a 3D box broken into a grid that you can move the cursor through in 2 dimensions at a time. You can use the right stick to rotate the workspace, which also changes the perspective of your cursor. It's kind of hard to explain, but it works in practice, and I'm sure you understand how it works just by seeing me use it. Every gummy block has stats associated with it, and those stats are all added to your ship's total stats. The stats are armor, which allows you to take more damage, speed, which increases the movement speed of the ship in the missions, handling, which affects how responsive and fast the ship moves around, and power, which affects how much damage the ship's weapons deal. Unfortunately, the pieces can only be rotated and not actually flipped, meaning that you have to use 2 separate pieces if you want a symmetrical look on both sides of your ship. While each piece does have a symmetrical flipped version, that's just one extra thing that you have to find and collect. Now, just to be clear, a gummy ship can be as simple or as complicated in design as you want. The only real limitations to your creativity are the size of your workspace, the relatively limited color selections of gummy pieces, and the overall gummy pieces available to you at any given time. These things can be rectified a little bit by buying gummy pieces from Sid in Traverse Town though. Not only does he sell standard gummy pieces, but also upgrades to the workspace size through sys upgrades, the gummy block limit through com upgrades, and also upgrades that allow you to change the base colors of gummy blocks while you place them. On the other side of things though, it's kind of hard to make what I'd consider a good looking gummy ship in this game. The gummy blocks come in both geometric and rounded varieties, but at the end of the day, even with color options, you're probably gonna end up with a mess of rainbow palette monstrosities unless you've got way more patience and creativity than I do. On the other hand, the minimum you need for a ship is just a cockpit and an engine, which is actually totally viable. Just ask Violin, who is the world record holder as of this video for the Kingdom Hearts 1 speedrun.
We use a very minimal gummy ship in Kingdom Hearts 1 to go fast, because all of the armor that's on the Highwind default gummy ship actually slows you down. So removing all of the parts makes the base speed of the ship faster. However, adding a new engine or a new booster does not add any weight onto the ship. It's just the armor pieces that slows the gummy ship down. So by not having any armor, you're going as fast as possible.
So once you have a gummy ship together, you can name it whatever you want and select it in the gummy menu. Of course, you can choose to ignore the gummy editor entirely and just use one of your blueprints too. All of these blueprints have unique designs that are named after iconic Final Fantasy characters and enemies. You can earn these blueprints through defeating certain gummy ship enemy types, clearing game milestones, and speaking with Geppetto in Traverse Town. Oh, and obviously clearing gummy missions too. Now, I've probably been a tiny bit unclear because I've called the act of traveling to different worlds in the gummy ships as missions, when gummy missions are actually their own concept. Every world on the world map has its own set of technically optional gummy missions. Some missions require you to defeat a certain number of enemies or complete the whole route with only a certain number number of weapons, or using a certain ability a minimum number of times. There are different levels of missions, with each subsequent level unlocking through completing the one before. Clearing these missions have rewards in the form of items and blueprints, and you can completely ignore these if you want. They're entirely optional, and I'll be honest, I really didn't dedicate a whole ton of time to the gummy ship missions, because I'm really not that big of a fan of the gummy ship stuff overall. I know that makes me a fake fan, but I think the gummy ships are definitely a big part of Kingdom Hearts' identity. They're just not my personal favorite thing to focus on. There's one last thing that I need to mention before we can move on though, the start menu. Here you get an overview of your party member status with a fun walking cycle, along with your total playtime and accrued money. Here you can also see the options for items, equipment, abilities, customization, a more detailed status screen, and Jiminy's journal. To quickly summarize the ones that I haven't already talked about, Customize is where you can control your party's AI behavior and also set Sora's shortcuts. When you hold down L1 in or out of battle, you have access to shortcuts, and these can be consumable items or spells. I usually have them set as spells, but it can definitely vary depending on the challenge I'm facing. And of course, there's Jiminy Cricket's journal. This journal contains information about the game's story, characters, worlds you've visited, mini-games you've played, and collections like Trinities, Ansem Reports, and Dalmatians. You can get recaps of the events of all the worlds Sora's visited and the characters he's met, and while this is helpful for the player, this journal is also canon to the story and comes into play multiple times over the course of the series. In the games, Jiminy is actually keeping this journal, not just for the player. One of my favorite touches of the journal, and something that exists in some form in almost every game, is that for the character files, there's a little button that lets you look at the character's 3D models and rotate them around. It's one of those little features that I thought was so cool as a kid, because it felt like I almost had a behind-the-scenes pass to this world, and seeing the list of characters fill up over time was also really satisfying. Anyways, we've covered all of the basic concepts of Kingdom Hearts. For the most part, every future game in the series uses these concepts with some tweaks and changes, which I'll do my best to point out. Of course, some games go in wildly different directions for some things, but it'll be obvious, and I will definitely go into those differences in detail when we get to those games. But in general, assume that most concepts that I explained here are brought forward in some way. So with all of that said, Kingdom Hearts is a game that, while fairly old now, still feels fine to pick up over 20 years later. Of course, some things were changed from the original PS2 release to the HD version, like improved camera controls, changes to contextual commands on top of visual and audio changes, but the core gameplay still feels really good. Look at it this way, if Square Enix took this game and remade everything in a modern engine to look like a brand new game, but kept the gameplay and engine exactly the same, I think this would still be an excellent and well-received video game today. That to me is a testament to how well they nailed it on their first try, because remember, this company had never made a game like this before. Square Enix actually made this game as an answer to Super Mario 64. They wanted their own platformer RPG game, but they didn't think that they had any characters that could come even close to competing with Mario's fame, and I don't blame them. According to an interview with Tetsuya Nomura, one of the primary directors of the series, Square Enix jokingly said that they'd have to resort to working with Disney and using their characters, and while that started as a joke, we see what it turned into, and I think it's an incredible experience. But to compound on that even further, imagine being a kid back when this game came out. You know, like I was. The game sells itself on the Disney crossovers alone, because at this point, we'd seen all these Disney movies, but having these characters and settings coexist in the same game, let alone the addition of Final Fantasy characters like Cloud, Sephiroth, Squall, Yuffie, and more, believe it or not, these characters were new at the time. Final Fantasy VII had only come out a few years before Kingdom Hearts, and I don't know if you know this, but Final Fantasy VII was huge. I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope the point that I'm trying to make comes across here. Kingdom Hearts didn't need amazing gameplay to be a hit, at least when it came to general audience interest, but the fact that they delivered with groundbreaking action gameplay that just felt good was icing on the cake and made Kingdom Hearts an iconic game that, again, stands the test of time. I'll have more to say about this in my post-game breakdown thing, so we'll get into that later. For now, let's finally talk about the story of Kingdom Hearts, followed by a deep dive into its worlds.
Sora, a young boy from the world of Destiny Islands, dreams of arriving in a mysterious place surrounded by a vast void of nothingness. An unknown voice speaks to him, guiding him on a path forward. After being tossed around into a plethora of stained glass platforms, Sora is attacked by a massive creature manifested from his own shadow. Sora fights the creature, but is consumed by a dark, shadowy portal. As he drowns in the darkness, the voice tells him that he is the one who will open the door. With this message, Sora awakens on the beach of his home islands. After he wakes up, he's greeted by one of his best friends, Kairi. They briefly talk about the place Kairi originally came from. Kairi can't remember anything from her original home before she came to Destiny Islands, and Sora asks if she would ever want to go back. She says that she's happy on the islands, but wouldn't mind someday seeing her original home again. They agree to see all the worlds they can together. Riku, another one of Sora's friends, interrupts the conversation, asking to be included in their plans to see all of the worlds. Sora, Riku, and Kairi grew up together on the Destiny Islands, and since they were young children, they dreamed of leaving the islands to see other worlds. The trio band together to build a raft in the hopes of sailing off in search of these new worlds. While they spend their days collecting materials to build the raft, they spend their evenings sitting in a secluded spot together. One day, they discuss their planned journey, with Riku pondering why, out of all worlds, did they end up on Destiny Islands. He tells Kairi that if she had never arrived there, he might not have even considered that there were other worlds at all. Later, as they all head home, Riku stops Sora and tosses him a Paopu fruit native to the Destiny Islands. As the legend goes, if two people share a Paopu fruit, their destinies become intertwined and they forever remain a part of each other's lives. Riku teases Sora about sharing the Paopu fruit with Kairi. The next day, Sora visits the secret place, a small secluded cave on the islands where the kids leave their own carved drawings all along its walls. Sora sits in front of the chalk drawing of himself and Kairi for a moment and scrapes in a depiction of himself giving Kairi a Paopu fruit. As soon as he's finished with the drawing, a mysterious man in brown robes appears in the cave. He tells Sora that he's come to see the door to this world, that this world has been connected and is now tied to the darkness. Sora tries to question the man, but the man only tells him that Sora knows nothing. Sora looks to the large door inside the cave and the man disappears. That night, a great darkness is unleashed across the islands. Dark creatures flood the islands and Sora desperately searches for his friends while vainly attempting to fight them off with his wooden play sword. Sora quickly encounters Riku, who insists that accepting the darkness consuming the islands is a way to reach the other worlds. Sora attempts to reach out to him, but darkness begins to consume them both. Suddenly, a key-like sword materializes in Sora's hand. A voice tells him it's called a Keyblade, and this Keyblade allows him to combat the monsters while Riku sinks into the darkness, leaving his fate unknown. Sora finally finds Kairi in the secret place. In a fugue state, she calls out his name, and the door behind her opens. Darkness floods out, pushing Kairi, who disappears through him. Thrust out of the cave, Sora continues to fight the dark creatures, including the same massive one from his dream, but the islands are fully consumed by darkness and Sora falls into the abyss. Meanwhile, in the world of Disney Castle, Donald and Goofy go about their daily duties as royal servants of the king. Donald, who is a mage, enters the throne room to greet the king, but realizes that his throat is empty and the king is missing, leaving behind only a letter with Pluto the dog. Donald, in a panic, rushes to find Goofy, who is a knight. In the letter he left behind, the king tells him that the stars have been blinking out one by one. He left the castle to investigate and is entrusting Donald and Goofy with a mission to find someone who has a key. This key, in his words, is the key to their survival. Donald and Goofy, along with Jiminy Cricket, depart the other worlds in their gummy ship in search of this key. Sora awakens in Traverse Town, a world where those who survive their own world's destruction are sent. There he encounters Leon, who recognizes his Keyblade. After a short scuffle with Leon attempting to take the Keyblade, Sora is knocked out and taken to Leon and his allies' headquarters, located in a small house. Sora awakens and meets Yuffie, one of Leon's allies. They explain to Sora that he is chosen by the Keyblade, a weapon that can vanquish the dark creatures. These creatures, called the Heartless, are creatures born from darkness in people's hearts, and when they are consumed and otherwise destroyed. Additionally, the Keyblade is picky with its wielder, and not just anyone can wield it unless they're specifically chosen, but at the cost of the Heartless pursuing the chosen wielder. Elsewhere, Donald and Goofy are in Traverse Town as their first stop in search of both the king and this mysterious key. As they search the town, they run into Aerith, another one of Leon's allies. Aerith explains to them that all the worlds have been disconnected from each other until recently. This connection has allowed the Heartless to spread and infest the worlds. The direct cause of the Heartless infestation is unknown, with the only hints lying in the written reports of a scientist called Ansem, who once studied the Heartless. Leon eventually introduces Sora to Donald and Goofy, who he explains are also looking for his Keyblade. They invite Sora to join them on their mission, allowing Sora to visit other worlds to find his friends while they search for their king. Sora, Donald, and Goofy venture off to many worlds together in their search, meeting grandiose and fantastical characters wherever they go, along with mischievous and evil foes every step of the way. Sora learns and grows in power with the help of both the Keyblade and the power to conjure magic and summon magical allies, thanks to Merlin and the fairy godmother. In each world, the Heartless have invaded, threatening the people of their world and their way of life. As Sora, Donald, and Goofy visit each world, they work with their new allies to not only defeat the Heartless, but to help them solve their individual problems as well. During this time, Sora bonds with Donald and Goofy, and they quickly become close friends who care for each other. As the trio help each world in their search, they find the world's keyholes, which Sora can lock with his Keyblade. The world's keyholes are the heart of each world. These keyholes are also vectors that a bad actor like the Heartless can use to destroy the heart of the world, and using the Keyblade to lock these keyholes renders these worlds safe, allowing the trio to continue their search in the next world without worry. During this time, Riku has embarked on his own search for his friends. After the destruction of the islands, Riku awoke in a different world, Hollow Bastion, and is taken under the evil Maleficent's wing. He begins his own search for Sora and Kairi. Riku has a brief reunion with Sora in Traverse Town. Sora summons his Keyblade to defeat a Heartless, and Riku is able to effortlessly hold it, much to Sora's surprise. Sora tries to invite Riku to come with him, but Donald says he can't. Riku flees without explanation as he's manipulated by Maleficent to believe that Sora doesn't care about finding Kairi and has replaced him with his new friends. From the beginning, Maleficent has dark plans to achieve her ultimate goal, using the light-filled hearts of the 7 princesses of Heart to unlock the final keyhole, the keyhole leading to Kingdom Hearts itself. To accomplish this, she has enlisted the help of evil foes from many worlds, the same worlds Sora, Donald, and Goofy are searching. One by one, the evil foes are defeated, making Sora, Donald, and Goofy a thorn in Maleficent's side. Still, her plan on kidnapping the princesses is moving along otherwise smoothly, especially with Riku's assistance in exchange for the promise of helping him get Kairi back. Maleficent does eventually help Riku find Kairi, but she's nothing but an empty shell, a body without a heart. In Traverse Town, Leon, along with his allies Aerith and Sid, explain to Sora that they believe Maleficent is the cause of the Heartless infestations, as she has the power to control them. They tell him that 9 years before, a swarm of Heartless summoned by Maleficent took over their world. The ruler of that world was the scientist Ansem, and his detailed reports on the Heartless might hold the secret to defeating them once and for all. Unfortunately, the pages of the reports were scattered across the worlds, and the group concludes that the king must be on a mission to retrieve them. As they continue to search more worlds, Sora, Donald, and Goofy encounter Riku more and more. Riku, now fully under the influence of Maleficent, searches for a way to restore Kairi's heart while antagonizing the trio. Under the belief that Sora has abandoned him and Kairi, Riku takes the mission to save her into his own hands with the help of Maleficent and her evil allies. Sora, Donald, and Goofy's search finally lead them to Hollow Bastion, a place Sora almost seems to recognize through a feeling in his heart, though he'd never been there before. He previously had a vision of Kairi as a child, her grandmother recounting about a time long ago where everyone lived in peace. This vision implies that Hollow Bastion is the world Kairi originally came from. Shortly after arriving at Hollow Bastion, Sora and Riku have another encounter. After a short fight with the Beast, Riku tells Sora that there can't be 2 Keyblade Masters and says the Keyblade should choose its true master. Sora's Keyblade violently leaves his hands, materializing in Riku's instead. He tells Sora that only he is strong enough to save Kairi, and that only the Keyblade Master can open the secret door. Sora protests, and Riku taunts him, giving him the wooden toy sword like the ones they used to play with. Riku departs for Maleficent's castle, with Donald and Goofy hesitantly following to fulfill their duty to follow the key on behalf of the king. Donald apologizes to a defeated Sora before leaving him alone with Beast. Beast tells Sora that he is in Hollow Bastion because Belle, one of the princesses of Heart, was abducted. He intends to fight his way into the castle to save her. Inspired by Beast's plight, Sora resolves to save Kairi even without the Keyblade, and the two team up. With Beast's help, Sora fights his way into Hollow Bastion's castle and faces Riku once again. Riku, now draped in a dark armor, attacks Sora with a ball of energy. Goofy chooses his friendship with Sora over their mission and protects him from the attack, with Donald taking Sora's side as well. Goofy says that while he won't betray the king, he won't betray Sora either. Sora tells Riku that he doesn't need the Keyblade because his heart is his best weapon. The hearts of the friends he's made have bonded with his, making it strong enough to overcome anything. He says he doesn't need a weapon because his friends are his power. In this moment of bravery, the Keyblade leaves Riku, rematerializing in Sora's hands. Riku materializes his Soul Eater sword and he and Sora battle. Sora triumphs and Riku flees. As Riku runs away defeated in the halls of the castle, he's approached by a same-robed man Sora met on Destiny Islands. The man tells Riku that his heart is weaker than Sora's, but Riku can become stronger by opening himself up to darkness. Riku accepts the man's offer and begins to glow with a mysterious energy, giving the man control of his body. The now possessed Riku meets with Maleficent at the heart of Hollow Bastion in order to unlock the world's keyhole, which they call the keyhole to the darkness. Maleficent tells him that she intends to use the keyhole's darkness to rule all worlds. The possessed Riku summons a Keyblade and attempts to unlock the keyhole, but it fails. They realize that the keyhole won't open because Kairi is the final princess, but is missing the crucial thing they need for their plan, her heart. Maleficent leaves to face Sora, Donald, and Goofy to prevent them from interfering with her plans. Maleficent faces the trio, telling them of her plan to shroud the world in darkness. Sora battles Maleficent and defeats her. She flees, meeting back up with the possessed Riku with Sora and company following closely behind. Possessed Riku stabs Maleficent with his Keyblade, unlocking her heart and opening it to a great darkness. This transforms Maleficent into a powerful dragon, like in the movies. Sora battles and defeats the dragon Maleficent and she fades away. The possessed Riku disappointedly retreats to the heart of Hollow Bastion where its keyhole resides. Sora, Donald, and Goofy fight through the castle and reach the room with the keyhole and find Kairi's lifeless body. The possessed Riku reveals to Sora that Kairi is the final princess, whose heart is the final thing he needs to complete the world's keyhole. He tells Sora that Kairi's heart is inside of Sora, and the only way to get Kairi back is to release it. Riku's possessor reveals himself to be Ansem, the Seeker of Darkness. Ansem approaches Sora, intent on using the Keyblade to release Kairi's heart from within Sora to complete the keyhole. Hearing Kairi call out to him, Sora fights back, resolving to keep Kairi's heart out of Ansem's hands. Sora battles Ansem, both now wielding Keyblades. Sora wins the fight and Ansem disappears, dropping his heart-releasing Keyblade. Sora attempts to use his own Keyblade to seal the keyhole, but it doesn't work because the keyhole is incomplete. Realizing that the only way to seal it is to free Kairi Kairi's heart and return it to her so she can awaken, Sora sacrifices himself by plunging Ansem's Keyblade into his own heart. The hearts of all the princesses return to them, Kairi's included. Sora collapses, disappearing in a burst of energy. Ansem returns, revealing his true form. Pleased with the completion of the keyhole, Ansem threateningly approaches Kairi, Donald, and Goofy. Finally realizing he's been manipulated and refusing to be used, Riku manages to take control for a moment and briefly stops Ansem in his tracks, allowing Kairi, Donald, and Goofy to escape to the castle's entrance as a small shadow Heartless watches on. This small Heartless born from Sora's heart wanders the castle following Kairi, Donald, and Goofy. Reuniting at the castle's entrance, Kairi recognizes the Heartless as Sora. Suddenly, a storm of Heartless attacks the group, Kairi telling Sora she'll protect him. Kairi embraces Sora's Heartless, miraculously restoring Sora to his original form. The beast fights off the Heartless, allowing the group to escape to the castle to the safety of Traverse Town. Sora informs Leon and his allies of the events that unfolded in Hollow Bastion. Sora resolves to go back and seal Hollow Bastion's keyhole in spite of the danger because he doesn't want to abandon Riku. Sora and Kairi reunite in safety, thankful they're finally together again. Sora tells her that he's going to get Riku back, but that she can't join them on their mission because it's too dangerous. Wanting to help in her own way, she gives him her lucky charm, a charm she made of shells from the Destiny Islands. She makes Sora promise to return it to her. She assures him that even when they're apart, wherever he goes, she's always with him. In an unknown void of darkness, a regretful Riku walks on a seemingly endless path. He vows not to give up until he gets a chance to see Sora and Kairi again. Piercing through the darkness, a voice reaches out to him, claiming to have a Keyblade belonging to this world and assuring Riku that the voice is on its way to find him. It tells Riku that his heart won the battle against the darkness, but it was too late for his body, leaving Riku stranded in a place of darkness where hearts are gathered. The voice tells Riku that the door to darkness will open soon, but it's a door that they can't enter. In order to close the door, they'll need 2 keys on either side to close it at the same time. The voice assures Riku that Sora and Kairi are okay, and Riku begins the trek to find the door of darkness. Sora, Donald, and Goofy make the decision to seal Hollow Bastion's keyhole and return to the world. Leon and his allies return as well, telling Sora that once he defeats Ansem, all of the worlds will be restored and their inhabitants will return. Sora seals Hollow Bastion's keyhole, revealing a gate to the end of the world, a world composed of the remaining fragments of all the worlds lost to darkness. Sora, Donald, and Goofy fight their way through the end of the world to find Ansem. Sora remembering his promise to return Kairi's lucky charm to her. After many hard-fought battles, the trio finally arrive in a place that looks identical to Destiny Islands. There, they encounter Ansem himself, who echoes the words he said to Sora when they first met in the secret place as the world is overtaken with a dark corruption. Ansem tells Sora that the true essence of a heart is darkness, using Riku as an example. Sora confidently exclaims that the heart has a light that never goes out, enraging Ansem, who begins their grueling final battle. Sora, Donald, and Goofy battle Ansem and his Dark Guardian, an entity he can summon at will. Ansem's defeat only seems to make him more and more powerful, with the fights finally leading the group to a dark abyss in front of a massive door. Ansem proclaims that behind this door is Kingdom Hearts, which is full of nothing but an infinite darkness. He says that all hearts are born from the dark depths of Kingdom Hearts, attacking one final time. Losing this final battle, Ansem pleads to the door. He tells Sora that the Keyblade alone can't seal the door to darkness and demands Kingdom Hearts open and fill him with the power of darkness. As the door opens, darkness seemingly begins to pour out of it, but Sora exclaims that Kingdom Hearts is actually light, reiterating what he told Ansem earlier about the light within hearts. The door bursts open, bathing Ansem in a brilliant light to his dismay. Ansem disappears, defeated once and for all. Sora, Donald, and Goofy rush to the door to close it, seeing that it now leads to a dark void full of endless Heartless. Their efforts to close the door are in vain, but suddenly Riku appears behind the door to help, telling Sora that they can do it if they work together. In the same moment, King Mickey finally reveals himself, using a golden Keyblade to hold back a wave of Heartless. He tells everyone that there will always be a door to the light and thanks Donald and Goofy. Together, Sora, Donald, and Goofy push the door closed. Riku asks Sora to take care of Kairi as the door closes, sealing him and King Mickey within the Dark Realm. Sora and King Mickey use their Keyblades together to seal the door and it vanishes. The lost worlds begin to restore themselves, and Kairi suddenly arrives at the fragmented islands with Sora, and Sora rushes to her. As the ground begins to move and reform below them, Sora and Kairi only have a short moment for their heartfelt reunion. Sora takes Kairi's hand, telling her that like she said to him before, he's always with her too. He promises to come back to her, the two becoming separated as Sora reaches out to her, drifting into the distance of an unknown void. Around Kairi, the Destiny Islands begin to reform in a grand spectacle. Later, Kairi visits the secret place and comes across the carving Sora made of him giving her a Powerpoo fruit. Kairi tearfully adds an addition of her own, giving Sora a fruit in return. Sometime later, Sora, Donald, and Goofy walk aimlessly along a winding path, pondering where they should go to find Riku and King Mickey. Before they can discuss it further, Pluto appears ahead of them, holding what looks like a letter from King Mickey. With newfound purpose, the trio chase after him and into the unknown. A hooded figure appears in a rainy city unlike any we've seen before, with towering skyscrapers and brightly lit screens on them. Creatures that appear to be heartless flood the area en masse, and the hooded figure manifests two Keyblades at once, both the Oblivion and the Oathkeeper. A man in a blindfold, who looks a lot like Riku, appears atop a tower in the city before removing the blindfold and asks, "Where's Sora?" The blindfolded man dives from the tower as the hooded figure runs up along its walls. The blindfolded man catches one of the Keyblades and falls further down the tower as familiar scenes flash along the way, counting down from 13. Mickey appears, Keyblade in hand, wearing the same robes as the hooded man. On a dark beach, two hooded men speak. One of them says, "He looks just like you." At the same time, Sora soars weightlessly through the air over a vast ocean.
To be perfectly honest, the story of the first Kingdom Hearts is simple. It's clean. You could argue it's both.
Kid loses friends and the island and wakes up and dog and big key darkness.
It's a journey to find friends that turns into an evil plot, that turns into a bittersweet grand-scale adventure with plenty of opportunity to expand. Don't you want to know where that winding path leads? One of the strong points of this story is how simple it is, yet it still establishes and touches on a lot of the prevailing themes we see throughout the rest of the series. It's also got this sense of darkness, no pun intended, that you'd hope for from both a Disney story and a Square Enix story. But now let's talk about the worlds of Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, welcome to the format. I definitely will stick strictly to this format. This definitely isn't foreshadowing. Bet you didn't expect me to start with the title screen, huh? Well, the title screens in the Kingdom Hearts series have had an incredible influence on me, so I want to take some time to talk about them. In the first Kingdom Hearts, the title screen features the original rendition of Dearly Beloved, a melancholic but beautiful piece that loops endlessly with the sound of ocean waves peacefully rushing in the background. The artwork on this title screen is that of Sora standing in the water holding a stick, which to me is meant to indicate a sort of beginning. In the final mix version of the game, this artwork is changed to Sora holding up a flag, but with the hood of his outfit up above his hair. I actually think this is the only time we've ever seen the hood up in any official artwork too. When you begin a new game, you have the option to select the difficulty, and in Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, the difficulty options are Beginner, Standard, and Proud mode, though they are formatted as Final Mix Beginner mode, Final Mix mode, and Final Mix Proud mode. The difficulty option you choose has a few ramifications, including the balancing of enemy encounters, gummy ship weapon and shield strength, and how difficult it is to unlock the secret endings. Once you begin the game, you're taken to the introduction. Kingdom Hearts begins with a pre-rendered introduction sequence. The first thing you hear is Sora's voice saying,
"I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real or not?"
Then we transition into a really cool and trippy sequence showing all kinds of things happening. This is a sick sequence because there's a ton of nods to events that'll happen in the game, but it's also really just for stylistic effect. The music in the background is the PLANiTb remix of Simple and Clean by Hikaru Utada, also called Hikari in Japanese. This song is so iconic, and while I'd love to get more into it, there's a whole dedicated section to the music at the end of this video, so stay tuned. At the end of the introduction sequence, Sora stands on a large circular platform, and this is where the journey begins. This is the very first place you visit in Kingdom Hearts. This place functions as both a basic gameplay tutorial and also a place where you get to choose how your gameplay experience is tailored. Every area here is a different circular platform with artwork of a Disney princess on it. Here you learn how to attack and target enemies, open chests, save the game, push blocks, and do other stuff like throw barrels. A really cool tone setter in this place is the dynamic music that changes and evolves as you move further and further in. The song picks up and becomes more and more intense as time goes on. At one point, you arrive in an area where you have to choose between 3 dream weapons: a sword, a staff, or a shield. You choose a weapon to keep, followed by a weapon to give up. This choice is actually kind of important and affects both your starting stats and the order in which you learn abilities through leveling up for the rest of the game. By the time you've finished the game, the impact of these choices is pretty negligible, but early on, it can really affect the overall experience depending on your personal playstyle. Shortly after this segment, you're taken to a small area in the Destiny Islands where you have to speak to Titus, Waka, and Selphie. Each of them asks you a question, and your answers determine the pace in which you level up in the game. There are 3 outcomes: Dawn, which has you level up faster for the first 50 levels and then slower for the last 50, Midnight, which is the opposite, and Midday, which has a consistent pace for all 100 experience levels. After you complete this segment, you move on and eventually encounter the first boss, the Dark Side. This is a boss we're gonna see a ton in this series, probably more than any any other boss. The dark side has a couple of attacks, but the fight is otherwise pretty straightforward. You attack its hands to hurt it, but it moves them around quite a bit. Sometimes it'll put one hand on the ground, making it easier to hit, but it'll summon the Shadow Heartless at the same time, making it easier to take damage too. Once you beat or lose against it in this segment, you're finished, and you move on to the Destiny Islands. The real journey begins on Sora, Riku, and Kairi's home, the Destiny Islands. While the actual world is implied to be much larger, we only see a small portion of the islands that the kids of the world spend their free time on. This world is, for all intents and purposes, a tutorial sandbox, and depicts classic beach scenery against a vast ocean that extends into the horizon. The world is broken up into a few distinct wards, the main one housing a plateau with an overhanging tree where the main characters spend most of their time. This is an iconic location and one that we see appear a lot. The overhanging tree is especially important, and this is where the group spends their time and grows together. There's this nice little nook in the main area that houses the entrance to the secret place, which is a small cave covered in carved drawings but also a mysterious, ornate wooden door. A neat little touch in the secret place is that some of these drawings on the walls are actually Easter eggs, like a Donald Duck cameo next to a crossed out chocobo. I guess they want to make it clear that there's only room for one kind of bird in this world. Destiny Islands is obviously an iconic location in this series, and it appears in nearly every game in some capacity. While it isn't based on any specific Disney property, its role in the series is only ever made more and more important. For the most part, you spend your time in this world collecting different resources that Sora, Riku, and Kairi plan to put on their raft, but there's a pretty good amount of exploration too, even though this world is pretty small overall. While you explore, there's some optional fights here on the main beachfront against Titus, Waka, Selphie, and Riku using your wooden sword as a weapon. These are super basic fights with no real stakes, though Riku does frustratingly keep count of your wins and losses, so I guess a bruised ego is a stake depending on your outlook. The fights work pretty well for establishing some basic gameplay principles though. Waka throws the blitzball at you that you can deflect back at him with good timing. Titus uses up-close melee attacks that you can parry for tech points, a concept that only exists in this game, and Selphie uses ranged whip attacks with her jump rope. The Riku fight is a bit more challenging than the others in my opinion though. He guards attacks and uses Sora's knockback as openings to attack himself. If you attack him enough and knock him over, he can damage you when he gets back up too. Still, this is a great way to learn some gameplay concepts pretty quickly and early on. At one point in the world, you're able to race Riku from one point to another and then back to the start. This race is a platforming challenge where you can take multiple routes to get to the goal, but it can be tricky since there's a falling platform and a zip line that can trip you up if you keep holding forward on the analog stick, since for some reason, Sora will just jump off of it and slow you down significantly. If Riku gets too far ahead, he'll just stop moving. I don't know if this is a pity mechanic or a taunt, but it definitely feels like a taunt. You can do this race multiple times and Sora and Riku also keep score of it, adding to that, taunting feeling. The story of this world consists of Sora, Riku, and Kairi working together to collect resources to build a raft that they can use to visit other worlds. It's probably for the best that this doesn't work out, which we'll find later, but after collecting all of the materials, the world is overtaken by the Heartless. This part is actually pretty intense because Sora's wooden sword doesn't do anything against these enemies. It just goes right through them and leaves Sora open to taking damage. Fortunately, you get the Keyblade pretty quickly, and I don't think most people have probably ever gotten a game over at this part, at least by accident. After getting the Kingdom Key, you're faced with another dark side boss battle. This fight is nearly identical to the first though. So yeah, Destiny Islands is an iconic world for many reasons, but I can't deny that the main one is just because it's the very first place you visit in the entire series. It's Sora, Riku, and Kairi's home, and there's this factor of nostalgia that plays both into the story and the experience of the people who played this game for the first time as kids, myself included. And the theme song is this upbeat island jam with all kinds of percussion and a fun repeated guitar riff in the background. That is important to note because we'll talk about it more later. We see a lot of Destiny Islands later on in the series, but as of this video, this is the only game where you get to explore this place really in its entirety and in its original form. Every future version is either a different layout or limited in some way. I think Traverse Town was a stroke of genius from a game design perspective. Let me explain. Traverse Town is the real introduction to the wider universe of Kingdom Hearts, but in a really clever way. Instead of just dropping you straight into a Disney world, for example, the game brings you to a place where the crossover elements can be gradually introduced. Sora is woken up by Pluto, a non-verbal character who is Disney, but can't explain or reveal anything to Sora right off the bat. This is the first real crossover, but again, nothing is revealed to Sora. Once he's awake, he realizes he's in a new world, but that's it. Pluto can't offer him anything and just kind of runs off. Traverse Town in general gives off a really comforting vibe, and it feels almost like home, which is sort of its intended purpose. The whole idea behind Traverse Town is to serve as a refuge for people who lost their own worlds. The mixture of an infinite night, the warm glow of streetlights, asymmetrical buildings, and the cobbled pathways all make for a very unique and inviting atmosphere. The background music enhances this atmosphere even more too. It's a smooth, jazzy saxophone tune that feels almost like it was scientifically crafted to calm anyone who hears it.
Traverse Town. Love Traverse Town. I don't know, Traverse Town is just home. It is home. It feels like a hug. Like the theme and like I said, the vibe, it's just like, it feels like I'm getting a hug.
I'd have to say Traverse Town is probably my favorite because of its vibes, dude. I could get lost in that world. Like as a kid, I did. You know, that world has just immaculate energy. There's so much vibes going into it. I'm just saying vibes and energy at this point, but people that know will know. It's a world that you can literally traverse throughout like the entirety of the game. You return to it over and over again, and it feels homey. You know?
I think any of the original worlds I just love so much because they're exciting and they're new, and it's always like you're finding something wondrous in them, right? I think that it's just cool to see these worlds that have so much life to them and have so much character to them be put alongside these very rich Disney worlds.
For the layout, Traverse Town is broken up into districts. The first is where you can find most of the NPCs and shops, like the item shop run by Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and the accessory shop, which is initially run by Sid until he eventually relocates to the outside area. Upstairs from the accessory shop is the Moogle Workshop, but it's only accessible from the base level after activating the Trinity mark to drop the ladder. Later on in the game, the shop is manned by a different unnamed NPC, and Sid moves to an area outside the shop where he sells gummy blocks and upgrades. Once you've cleared Monstro, Geppetto and Pinocchio move into a house on the corner near the accessory shop too. In the second district, there's a bunch of shops and businesses along the maze-like array of buildings, but none of them are actually accessible. Still, it's neat to see a shop clearly run by the Mad Hatter here, and this implies that the population of Traverse Town is a bit bigger than we actually see in the game. You can also find the Dalmatians house here, which is where you meet with Pongo and Perdita to return the lost Dalmatian puppies you've collected. I have no idea who's feeding these dogs, but hey, at least they're reunited, I guess. In the third district, there's initially not a whole lot to see outside of a large central plaza with a Lady and the Tramp art installation in the corner, but if you go down this narrow passage, you'll find a door with a fire icon, and if you use the fire spell on the door, you're able to access a large cave that leads to Merlin's house. To get to this house, you have to do some light platforming over these moving stones, and if you fall in the water, you have to swim all the way back to the first platform to try again. Fortunately, once you make it to Merlin's house, there's a save point that also functions as a world entry point from the World Select. So if you just want to go to Merlin's house from the world map, you can do so pretty easily without bothering with all this platforming. Inside of Merlin's house, you can find the Fairy Godmother, who unlocks summons from your summon stones, the book that takes you to 100 Acre Wood, and Merlin himself. Speaking to Merlin, you have the option of taking the passage to the underground cavern area or practicing magic. When you practice magic, you're taken to a special room where you can endlessly cast any magic against either moving or stationary furniture to test your spells. I really love Traverse Town, and it made a huge impression on me as a kid. It's got so many little nooks and crannies to explore, and it's the big introduction to this game's environmental puzzles, including some that aren't that clear at first, like this chest in the first district's cafe, which you can only open if you put out all the candles with Blizzard. If Destiny Islands was a tutorial world, Traverse Town is like an appetizer before the main course. You're introduced to so many new elements here, including just what kind of threat the Heartless can be, since you straight up watch a dude get murdered here. Though it does seem like this same guy takes over the accessory shop, so I guess he turns out fine. Plus, some of the most impactful moments in the overall story happen here too, like Riku and Sora reuniting for the first time, or Kairi giving Sora the Promise Charm. I don't want to mundanely list moments from the story, I just want to stress that this is an important world in so many ways throughout the entire series. Traverse Town has two distinct boss fights, though I wouldn't really consider the first a true boss. When you first arrive, you're challenged to a fight by Leon, and while you can win this fight, you're more than likely gonna lose the first time. Winning gives you extra experience, but there's no penalty for losing and the story moves on either way. The real boss fight here is against Guard Armor in the 3rd District. This boss Heartless is a big set of medieval style armor, and each of its appendages are individual targets with their own attacks and patterns. You can take out both hands and and feet to limit its ability to hurt you, and then you can finish it off by destroying its midsection to complete your first visit to the world. At this point, you leave the world and head off to the next one, but later on in the game you revisit Traverse Town to seal its keyhole. The second visit has you exploring even more of the world and maybe even seeing stuff that you might have missed the first time, like the Gizmo Shop in the second district, which is this big clockwork building full of spinning gears and moving platforms. Climbing up the ladder outside the Gizmo Shop takes you to the bell tower, and ringing the bell reveals the keyhole in the district's central fountain, which you can seal after a second guard armor boss battle, this time called Opposite Armor. In this one, the fight begins like normal, but after the first phase, it starts flipping around and all of the armor pieces flip upside down, turning it into the opposite armor. The actual strategy to defeat it feels the same, but the boss's attacks are a lot faster and more powerful, plus it now freely floats around at high speed. Once the boss is defeated and the keyhole is sealed, you're done with Traverse Town's second visit. You do have to revisit Traverse Town again for the story later on, but there's no more bosses or required fights or anything. However, you are likely to visit Traverse Town a bunch over the course of the game, since this is the only place where you can find the shops and item synthesis, along with the stuff in Merlin's study. This is pretty much the game's hub world, and one of the two worlds you'll probably find yourself coming back to over and over. The other likely being Olympus Coliseum, and that's only if you care to finish the tournament cups. I'm not counting 100 Acre Wood since you access it from Merlin's study in this world though. So after you complete Traverse Town for the first time, the world map opens up and you're able to choose which world you want to visit next, meaning that the order in which you visit the worlds might differ between playthroughs, but either way, the next world that I visited in this playthrough was Wonderland. Wonderland, based obviously on Alice in Wonderland, is aesthetically interesting in that it's almost ugly on purpose. It very much matches the aesthetic of the movie, but in a really almost janky way. There's no open sky, but instead a walled-in box with what is almost a painting of the sky on it. The walls are the same, with hedge mazes and scenery in the faux distance, but overall it's got this almost intentionally confusing appearance, which actually works really well for this world. In this world, you meet, of course, Alice, along with the Queen of Hearts, the card soldiers who you actually have to fight, the rabbit, the Cheshire Cat, and more. Unfortunately, you don't meet the Mad Hatter directly, but there is a tea party room that you can visit which directly references him. I think the implication is that he's in Traverse Town, but I'm not entirely sure how that works since Wonderland still exists. I'm not gonna think about it too much. I think one of the coolest things this world does though is the growth mechanic. There are a couple of places where Sora can grow or shrink, one of them being the main bazaar room. In fact, Sora has to shrink to visit anywhere beyond this first area when he visits. He does this by drinking a potion on the table. Growing back up to normal size is done in the same way, but getting onto the table requires a bit of platforming. And it's not just you changing size relative to the room. There's a couple of instances where you've changed size relative to the enemy too, making it much larger and a lot more challenging to take on when you're small. Another really neat thing is that sometimes the bazaar room can change orientation depending on where you enter. There's a totally sideways version of the room with its own layout and interactive elements, and it's kind of a small thing, but I think it's super cool because it takes an existing location and refreshes it to make it feel unique, even if it is technically the same area. The main area connecting all these rooms is the Lotus Forest, a winding area full of vegetation, both implied and implicit since the walls are flat paintings of a swampy locale. Littered around the room are lily pad platforms and mushrooms you can jump on to navigate, and there's also these flower buds that can open up if you use certain items or spells on them. Some of them will grant an item when you open them up, while others will do things like make Sora grow large, allowing him to activate a big wooden pedestal platform. My overall opinion on this world is pretty positive, but Wonderland's music is, I think this is my least favorite track in the entire Kingdom Hearts series, and I have no idea why. I think it's maybe a childhood connotation or something, because hearing this song is like nails on a chalkboard for me. It's a whimsical woodwind piece with a string breakdown, and while it's not offensive or anything, it's the only song in the game that I can somehow feel looping, I guess? I don't know, I hated this world with a passion as a kid, but as I've grown older, it's actually grown on me. At least this version. But it could mean that my childhood hate might have given me a lifelong disdain for the theme in like my subconscious or something, I don't know. The battle theme doesn't bother me, it's a high tempo tune using most of the same instruments and influences as the main theme, and I think maybe the increased tempo is what sets it apart in my mind. Either way, they're both solid themes, I guess I just have a lifelong bias. There's a part of this world where Alice is put on trial and the Queen of Hearts accuses her of trying to steal her heart, and this leads to a little event fight where you have to fight the card soldiers and strike this cogwheel to lower Alice's holding cage while fending them off. Once the fight is over, the cage is revealed to be suddenly empty and Alice is nowhere to be found. After this, Sora eventually encounters the world's boss in the bazaar room, the Trick Trick Master. The Trick Master is a tall, almost slinky-like Heartless that juggles? This thing's big gimmick is its height though, and trying to strike it from the ground usually means you'll just attack its knees, which are totally invulnerable. You can get a single hit in with an aerial attack if you time it right, but that's a bit tedious. To really hit this thing, you can climb up onto the chair and the table in the center of the room to match its height, and you can hit it with physical attacks and spells. If you hit it enough, you can stun it for a short while to make attacking with aerial combos from the ground easier too. The main threat from the Trick Master is its wide-range swinging attacks, but really, at the end of the day, it's not a super hard fight as long as you're not under-leveled like I was, because I actually struggled quite a bit. It took me a couple of tries, but with the help of a couple of potions, I was able to scrape by. Olympus Coliseum is the smallest world in Kingdom Hearts, but features quite a bit of meat despite this. Aesthetically, this is based on Hercules, but is original and not taken directly from the movie. Still, the visual style has that golden and bronze color scheme that you'd expect from an ancient Greek Colosseum from Hercules, with the fun swirly art style in full force. There's only 3 real areas to explore, which are the main entrance area with a wide open square plaza with towering columns, the Colosseum lobby, and the Colosseum arena. Unfortunately, you can't really explore the arena itself outside of the battles. This world is set up a bit differently from the others in this game due to its non-exploratory nature. In lieu of exploration, Olympus Coliseum has the game run by Phil, who is unfortunately not voiced by Danny DeVito, though the actor does make a great impression. Olympus's story is deceptively meaty and actually features a lot of character development. It's all about Sora and company learning what it means to be true heroes, including the work that goes into it. It really nicely pays homage to the original story of the Hercules movie, just with that fun Kingdom Hearts spin. It all starts with Phil putting Sora through some trials, and these consist of a timed minigame where Sora has to break a specific number of barrels under a certain time limit. The arena itself is actually changed in layout to include extra platforms and obstacles too. After the trials, you get into the games themselves, and these have the same standard layout for almost all of the cups. Each cup has a preset series of fights broken into rounds. The first few rounds are usually a wave of smaller Heartless, and every so often, you'll get a round with a more powerful enemy or boss. The beginning of each round shows the round name, which is usually a clever name or pun that describes the types of enemies that you'll be fighting. But with special enemies and bosses, it'll just say the name of the enemy outright. When you win a round, you get a short victory cutscene with the round's participants doing a fun little victory animation. Losing a round ends the run and sends you back to the Colosseum lobby after a losing animation. There are 6, technically 7 total playable cups in the game. The preliminaries are the first, and they're only played one time when you first visit the world. When Traverse Town's keyhole is sealed, you have access to the Fill Cup. When you beat this cup, you unlock the Olympia Keyblade and you get a closing scene for the world. After that, all additional cups are unlocked as you progress through the rest of the game or clear previous cups. The Pegasus Cup and Hercules Cup are unlocked through completing worlds and sealing their keyholes. Completing the Hercules Cup allows you to seal the Olympus's keyhole, and the Hades Cup is unlocked through sealing Hollow Bastion's keyhole. The Gold Match is unlocked from winning the Hades Cup, and the Platinum Match is unlocked through unlocking the Hercules Cup and clearing Hollow Bastion. What a mouthful! While the cups are just a bunch of fights against all kinds of waves of Heartless, there are a few standout fights either inside the cups or as their final battle. At the end of the preliminaries, you're up against Cloud. Fighting Cloud, there's actually a lot of him just kind of standing and guarding, and every so often he'll do a sword swing. But his super powerful move is Sonic Blade, a homing attack where he jumps back and forth and charges in a straight line at you. Sometimes he'll do it just once, but he can also do it repeatedly. After Cloud, there's a non-cup boss battle against Cerberus. I consider this to be its own fight unrelated to the games. It just so happens to take place in the arena. Cerberus is tricky because its heads are the main target, but they're pretty high up. Fortunately, I had high jump by the time I actually did this fight, and I was just kind of over-leveled in general for this. He stomps around the arena and has this dark fire-breathing attack, and you just have to hit the heads using attacks or spells. Apparently, one strategy is to climb onto his back, but I did not do that. At the end of the Pegasus Cup, you're up against Leon and Yuffie at the same time. The challenge of this fight is that there's 2 enemies, and they have 2 entirely separate movesets and come at you at the same time. Alone, neither of them are too difficult. At the beginning, Leon swipes at you with his gun blade, but fortunately, most of his attacks aren't too threatening at a distance outside of the occasional fire projectile. Yuffie, on the other hand, doesn't do a ton of damage, but is pretty annoying to deal with if you're not 100% focused on her. She'll just keep tossing ninja stars at you no matter what. And Leon does eventually activate his limit break, which increases his strength and range considerably. My strategy was to defeat Yuffie first, since I found myself struggling against Leon more and wanted to be able to focus on him, especially before he could break out the limit break. Once she was defeated, she just sits stunned for the remainder of the match and I beat Leon alone. In the middle of the Hercules Cup, you have to fight Cloud again, and this fight is similar to the preliminary fight, but he's a bit tougher and has access to his Omni-Slash special attack. With this, he flies around at high speed, dealing quick swipes and ground slam attacks. Otherwise, the fight's about the same. The final fight is against Hercules, and it's not a tough fight or anything, just a bit of a test of patience. Hercules takes on a gold glow, which makes him impervious to any attacks. Barrels will spawn around the arena, and hitting these to knock them into him gets rid of the glow temporarily, allowing you to get some hits in. Of course, this is easier said than done, because you won't always hit the barrels where they need to go, and while you can manually pick them up and throw them, it's not the most reliable strategy, since Hercules can jump over you and knock them off. Fortunately, Hercules also taunts a bunch, which gives you plenty of time to figure out the barrel situation, so like I said, it's all down to patience. Once the Hercules Cup is completed, you unlock the ability to use yellow trinities, then you get a short cutscene with Phil and Hercules, but the actual world's keyhole is revealed through using the yellow trinity to push a large block. The Hades Cup is the final standard cup and has about 50 total fights, making it a pretty lengthy gauntlet. Fortunately, you're able to select the seed that you want to start at if you've already completed that seed before. As far as the fights go, seed 44 is against Yuffie, 30 is against Cerberus, 20 against Cloud and Leon simultaneously, 10 against Hades himself, and 1 is against the Rock Titan. The Hades fight sees Hades floating around the arena using fire-based attacks like this spinning attack where he has these 2 giant horizontal pillars of flame that you have to dodge. At certain points, he becomes impervious to attacks and you just kinda have to dodge. While this fight is cool thematically, it's not very hard, at least not if you're insanely over-leveled for it like I was. Once you beat Hades, you get a scene where Sora knocks him into the arena rafters and some unseen monster attacks him. You'd probably expect Hades to be the final fight of the Hades Cup, but nope, the final opponent is a Rock Titan boss. The Rock Titan's main weak point is its feet, and you can lock onto them in order to deal massive damage with combo as you avoid these big area of effect stomping shockwaves. Once you've dealt enough damage, you can stun it and climb up onto its head to attack it directly. Eventually, it'll stand up and knock you away, but you can stay up there and wail on the head if you're careful. Once you clear the fight, you get a special victory scene for the Hades Cup with Hercules and Phil, and you also get to see Hades' fire hair put out. The reward for winning the cup is a really powerful Trinity Limit ability. Also, each time you clear a cup, that cup's trophy is added to the Coliseum lobby, which gives the world a nice little mini sense of progression, which I like a lot. After the cups are the matches, and the gold and platinum matches are a bit different as they're just straight up boss battles. The gold match is a boss fight against the Ice Titan. This fight starts out with a pretty cool cutscene. It really gives me Attack on Titan vibes with how the Titan grasps at the sides of the walls of the arena. Then it climbs over and stomps down, beginning the fight. It's especially threatening as this thing is huge and Sora is totally alone for this fight. The Titan's main strategy is to fire these ice blade projectiles at Sora, but fortunately he can deflect them back with guards to deal some extra damage. It is a bit tricky though because the Titan makes these ice spikes come out of the ground that follow you around the arena, along with similar overhead ice balls that do the same, which makes it hard to stand still for any extended period of time. The pattern that it shoots the projectiles at you also seems to switch pretty often, meaning that you can't just expect them to come from the same direction every time. Every once in a while it'll do an ice breath attack that'll completely freeze Sora in place, and I have absolutely no idea how you're supposed to avoid this. Anyways, once you've dealt enough damage through deflecting, the Titan buckles over low enough for you to get direct hits on its head for a short time. Once it stands back up, you have to rinse and repeat. For me, this was a pretty lengthy battle. Eventually though, I did finally beat it, and I was rewarded with a scene where the Titan shrinks down and flees before Sora can stomp on it. Completing this battle unlocks the Diamond Dust Keyblade, which is actually one of my favorite Keyblade designs in this game. Next up is the Platinum match, which is a fight against the man, the myth, the legend, Sephiroth himself. The intro to this fight is iconic and incredibly cool. Sora runs into the arena and the sky is a distinct purple, but there's no one there. Then a huge portal opens up and a beam of light slams into the ground. The light fades and it reveals Sephiroth. He flourishes his one black wing right as one winged angel kicks in. He turns to face Sora and begins the fight without a single word. This is fan service of the highest degree, and man am I here for it.
When Sephiroth comes out, there's like no music at all. It's all quiet, and then you see the huge beam from the sky and you're like, what is this? And then he just comes down and it's like, oh my god, that's Sephiroth. And then it starts playing One Winged Angel when his arm comes out. It's like the coolest part of that fight.
This scene still gives me chills because the first time you play this fight, there's zero indication of what it actually is, because the first time you challenge the cup, it just shows you question marks on the menu. In fact, when I replayed this on stream to capture footage for this video, I had totally forgotten about the question marks.
Hold on. Oh no. Oh god. Oh no. What have I done? What have I done? I'm not ready for this. Why did I select that? I thought it would just say Platinum Cup. I didn't know it was question marks. I forgot. Oh no. Why did I do this? I really did mess up.
So, this fight is also one of the hardest fights in the entire game. In fact, Sephiroth has so much HP, the HP bar isn't long enough to reflect it properly, and you have to hit him quite a bit for it to start showing any progress if you're using the scan ability. The mechanics of the fight itself are, well, it's a tough fight, I can tell you that. For someone like me, the abilities Leaf Bracer and Second Chance are pretty much needed for this fight. Leaf Bracer is an ability that makes your cure spells uninterruptible, giving you the ability to heal 100% of the time, while also giving you a tiny window to avoid any incoming attacks. Second Chance allows you to keep 1 HP if you're hit with a massive attack, as long as you have 2 or more HP when the attack actually hits you. When the fight begins, Sephiroth walks slowly around the arena, coming at you with incredibly fast and wide-reaching sword swipes, then he hops right back out of range. If you stay close, he uses his Faraga Wall ability, which surrounds him with these huge pillars of fire. He telegraphs the move with a voice line so you have time to get away from him, but it's very tight timing. Once you get his HP down a couple of bars, he shakes it up and starts moving a lot faster for the second phase. He also begins using his Heartless Angel move. With this move, Sephiroth jumps far away from you and charges up the attack for a couple of seconds before sending it at you, but you can interrupt it if you hit him in time. If you don't interrupt it, it instantly drains your MP and your HP down to 1, meaning that you're completely unable to use cure spells and you're 1 hit from death, making elixirs that fully restore your HP and MP a necessity for this fight. In the last couple of phases, he gets a lot more aggressive with his sword swipes, using a combo attack where he chases you down and repeatedly swipes at you. For this phase, call it a cheese strat, but I was able to avoid most of his garbage through this strategy alone. Spamming Strike Raid since you're totally invincible for the duration of the ability. At some points, Sephiroth had invincibility during his special moves, but I was perfectly happy just staying alive, even if I wasn't doing any damage. Also, I tried to keep the arrow spell on myself for most of the fight for the boost in defense, but I still basically just relied on Strike Raid until I ended the fight. Let me be clear about something here. In this video, I'm gonna be doing my best to attempt all of the super bosses in this series, but I can't promise I'll be able to beat all of them, and even then, I'm 100% not above using cheese strats, because a strat is a strat.
So Mr. I played every video game has to use cheese strats on the baby Disney game. Wow.
That being said, this fight is just on another level compared to almost everything else in this game. In fact, I'd argue that it's one of the hardest fights in the series depending on who you ask, but above all, it's still just a ridiculously cool fight. Also, a weird bit of trivia. Did you know that Sephiroth is voiced by Lance Bass in this game? This means that a member of NSYNC gave Sephiroth his first official voice. Isn't that wild? Once Sephiroth is defeated, he buckles over and then floats into the air, disappearing in a huge flash of light and energy. Then you're rewarded with the One-Winged Angel Keyblade and Ansem's Report 12. When you leave Olympus, you get a special cutscene where Cloud enters the arena and confronts Sephiroth. They exchange dialogue and then charge at each other, beginning a super short, albeit really cool fight scene between the two. It doesn't last too long, but man, is this an awesome bit of Final Fantasy fan service. You don't see the resolution of the fight, but that's fine. And that's it for Olympus. I mentioned this earlier, but this is a world that you visit multiple times throughout your playthrough, at least unless you're me and wait to do a majority of the content at the very end of the game. Still, most of the content is optional, and I believe you can actually clear the game without doing anything here after you land for the first time. If you want to do the bare minimum to complete the world, you can just clear it up to the initial required cups and ignore everything after that. The only downside is that you'll miss the games. Either way, Olympus Coliseum is a fun world and a nice change of pace from the other worlds in this game since it's a bit different in format. And spoiler alert, this isn't even close to the last that we see of Olympus in this series. So let's move on to something we only see one time. Deep Jungle is Tarzan's world, and it's a jungle, but it's more than a jungle too. It's a campsite, a treehouse, and a series of shrouded tree-covered areas. The central area connecting all of them is the campsite, and at the campsite you've got a plethora of knickknacks that definitely don't belong outside, like a grandfather clock, a dinner table complete with a Beauty and the Beast Easter egg, and all kinds of lab experiments. I guess this stuff couldn't really fit into a single tent though, but what does Jane do when, I don't know, rain starts pouring down? This is the jungle. It's absolutely gonna rain eventually. Is all of this stuff just gonna be ruined? Probably more questions I shouldn't think about too much. There's a couple of fun little environmental puzzles in the campsite that are tied to collecting projector slides hidden around the area. But then you have another little fun thing where you can inspect various items to unlock recipe steps to create more items, including stuff like directions to light the outside stove using the fire spell, with every subsequent step outlined in order. Outside of the campsite, you have areas like the treehouse, which is where you begin in the world, the Hippo's Lagoon, which has a small platforming challenge where you have to jump on top of hippos to make it to the other side of the area, except the hippos can sink in the water, so if you're standing on a hippo when it sinks, you have to swim back to the beginning and try again. Sort of like the platforms in front of Merlin's house in Traverse Town, just a different kind of challenge. If you climb up some of the vines here, you can make it up to an area with a whole vine swinging minigame, and oh boy do I hate this minigame. It really just boils down to the vine swinging mechanics. In order to traverse this part of Deep Jungle, you have to swing across these vines, and to say it's super finicky would be an understatement. It's like a mixture of timing and hoping the game actually registers your input in order to properly grab onto another vine. If you mess it up or outright don't make the proper jump to grab onto a vine, you just fall back down to the Hippo Lagoon. It doesn't really feel great, and it's absolutely the low point of this world for me. It's actually one of the very few things in this game that makes this game feel a little bit dated to me. I can't be too harsh on this world though, because one of the coolest things that you can do in Deep Jungle is relive the actual Tarzan movie's most iconic scenes with this tree sliding minigame. It's not complicated. You're on rails sliding down the side of a colossal tree in the jungle. You can move left and right to avoid hitting obstacles, and you can jump over them too. I'm a big fan of the movie, so this being something that you can actually do in the game makes me incredibly happy. Plus, when this game came out, Tarzan was relatively new, and this kind of minigame was a no-brainer to include in a Tarzan world. Imagine if they didn't have this, people would definitely feel like something was missing. After you've made some progress in this world, there's a couple of little minigames you can do, like this one in the bamboo thicket area where a black Ballade Heartless splits into a bunch of clones and you have to attack the real one. Another similar challenge can be found in the camp where a white mushroom appears. These Heartless don't attack and instead just display a hint to tell you which spells you should use on them, like shivering to indicate when you should use fire. These white mushrooms can actually be found in different worlds all over the game, and defeating them makes them drop useful items that can be sold or used to eventually get one of Goofy's special weapons. Aesthetically, Deep Jungle is probably one of the least stylized worlds in the game, at least in my opinion, but it makes sense given that Tarzan is a relatively grounded movie in its setting. It's set in the real world in a jungle. When Sora first arrives, he lands in Tarzan's treehouse and is almost immediately attacked by Sabor the leopard when Tarzan shows up and saves the day. Fighting Sabor is more of an annoyance than an actual boss fight, especially since he shows up multiple times throughout the world. His whole strategy is just running around super fast and swiping at you until you fight him back and he runs away. I'm trying to avoid just fully recapping any Disney movies here, but Sora, Donald, and Goofy, with the help of Tarzan and the party, try to stop Clayton from hurting the gorillas that he openly enjoys hunting. He eventually attempts to hurt the gorillas directly, but Sora and Tarzan arrive just in time to intervene and the world's boss battle begins. The first phase has you fighting Clayton directly along with a small swarm of Power Wild Heartless. Clayton swings his gun at you from the barrel end, but otherwise isn't much of a threat. However, in the second phase, you're up against the Stealth Sneak Chameleon-like Heartless ridden by Clayton. This thing can become invisible, but it can be attacked while it's invisible too. Its main attacks are a tail swing spin and a short-range charge attack. Clayton fires at you from atop it, but the Heartless eventually knocks him off, making him a target of his own. You can attack the Stealth Sneak first to avoid Clayton's shots, or Clayton first to avoid its swiping attacks, along with a new move where it fires energy beams from its eyeballs. Once you've won the fight, you get a nice little victory lap where you get to explore a new scenic cave area behind the waterfall, finishing off Deep Jungle once and for all, since it literally never makes another appearance in the series ever again. Agrabah is home to Aladdin, and the world is broken up into two distinct parts, the city and the Cave of Wonders. The city is a sandy desert city full of all kinds of brown sandy scenery along its maze-like sectionals. Broken up into discrete zones, the rough line of the city leads to the entrance of the palace and its giant doors. Navigating Agrabah on a base level is easy, but each sectioned off area has multiple levels that you have to platform through, giving this world a pretty good amount of verticality. You even have to climb a pole to get into Aladdin's house. I've gotta ask though, how would anyone ever navigate this city if it were real? In this game, it's clearly set up as a sort of multi-level semi-platforming challenge, but in practicality, it's a labyrinthian wasteland for anyone who can't jump 9 feet into the air. It doesn't feel like anyone could realistically live here, but hey, it's a fictional Disney place, so I'll move past it. The other big area here is the Cave of Wonders. There's the entrance, which looks impressively true to the movie, followed by an interior that you can access through its mouth. The inside of the cave is set up as a dank and sort of challenging dungeon. On the top level, you're faced with a large cavernous area with tons of moving parts and bellowing statues, and there's all kinds of traps and obstacles, most of which can knock you down into the lower levels. While Kingdom Hearts does have a few dungeon-esque locales, this is one of my favorites from the game because it's straightforward but still challenging the first time around. Getting knocked into the lower levels of the cave is inconvenient, but it's not too punishing or frustrating since getting back up isn't really that hard. On the bottom, there's a few water channels that you can explore by swimming through them, but the real blocks to navigation are these statues. By having Aladdin in your party, you can have Abu interact with the statues to move them, which opens up new paths to explore. The only thing I really don't like about this dungeon, and by extension Agrabah itself, is how often you have to deal with the large body Heartless. This Heartless repels all attacks dealt from its front, forcing you to hit it from behind to defeat it. It adds variety to just mashing X to attack, but I do prefer enemies that have actual tactics in this game, not just invincibility zones. Yeah, you can use spells to hit it from anywhere, but sometimes I just want to explore and hit things. Eventually, Sora and company are attacked by a large pot scorpion in this world's first boss battle. It's a centipede-like enemy made up of a head, a tail, and a midsection consisting of a bunch of pot spider Heartless. The only way to deal direct damage is by attacking the head and tail, so the strategy is to follow around this fast-moving enemy to hit it. Simple enough. I know I'm retreading, but eventually the party makes their way to the Cave of Wonders, but its guardian is being controlled by Heartless, forcing them to battle it. Fighting the guardian is kinda sorta like fighting a mishmash of the Cerberus from Olympus Coliseum because you have to climb up to attack its eyes, and the stealth snake from Deep Jungle because it fires straight up lasers out of them. The best strategy seems to be staying on top of it so you can just keep dealing damage. Inside the lamp chamber in the Cave of Wonders, you fight Jafar in a two-phase boss battle. The first battle can be mostly fought with pure melee attacks. Genie doles out some magical attacks and punches over the course of the fight, humorously trying not to be too accurate and apologizing the entire time. Sometimes Jafar becomes invisible or starts flying around to transport to a different platform, but you can just follow him and stay on him aggressively to keep piling on the damage. After this, Jafar wishes to become a genie himself. A giant hole opens up and Sora drops in, leading to the final boss of this world against Genie Jafar. Genie Jafar sends huge projectile attacks at you as Iago flies around the room carrying his lamp. The real target here is the lamp, and the only real challenge is staying close enough to Iago to hit the lamp since he flies pretty quickly. The platforms move up and down, making it even more challenging, but this is probably one of the most trivial boss battles in the entire game if you don't struggle with the platforming. So once you've cleared Agrabah, there's not much of a reason to return outside of, I don't know, synthesis materials farming until much later in the game when you're able to take on one of the secret bosses, Kurt Zisa, whose name is derived from a real-life Kurt Zisa that won some kind of contest back in the day. When you arrive in Aladdin's house, the magic carpet can take you to the middle of the desert so you can face off against him. The boss is straightforward at first with a multi-arm, almost guard armor style setup. You can wail on it with physical attacks, but eventually it goes into a secondary form that can only be hurt by magic. After this, it binds your magic away and you have to break these orbs in both of its hands to get it back. This one requires a bit of strategy, but it's not super tough if you're max level. At least not compared to some of the other endgame bosses like Sephiroth and the Phantom, which I'll talk about later. Once Kurt Zisa is defeated, it collapses and the magic carpet takes the party back to the safety of Aladdin's house. The reward for this fight is the Zantetsuken ability and Ansem's Report 11. That's it for Agrabah. There's one last thing I forgot to mention. When you initially escape the Cave of Wonders, there's this fun little magic carpet escape segment, and basically you're just on rails dodging a bunch of falling debris. Anyways, I don't dislike Agrabah, but I do struggle to find myself super invested in the world overall anymore, because it's one of the worlds that this series actually revisits super often, but the aesthetic just doesn't have much variety in these future appearances. Eventually, I just kind of roll my eyes when it makes a comeback because I've gotten to a point where I just don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating. Oh wait, no, I meant to just say I just like variety, and I don't feel like Agrabah offers much of it in the later entries. Monstro puts you quite literally inside the whale. The concept is pretty cool. You don't visit this world in the way that you visit other worlds. To visit Monstro, you actually get swallowed by the whale during the gummy ship segment. The first time it happens, it's actually unexpected and a fun twist on the gummy ship missions. Plus, anytime you want to come back here, you have to get swallowed up all over again, even if you warp here. Your main hub area is the mouth where most of the debris lies, but once you get further in, it turns into a really confusing labyrinth of areas that look very similar and are quite literally designated by nothing more than a number. The walls move and palpitate in a way that reminds you that you're inside of a living creature, and the colors are, for some reason, unsettlingly bright and cartoonish. But really, almost every room here is super hard to distinguish from the last, making the world feel way more labyrinthian than it actually is with its identical doors on multiple floors, leading to nearly identical rooms with identical environments and identical scenery that just leads to a needlessly confusing mess of a world. If you can't tell from my tone, Monstro aesthetically is not my favorite world. It's a fun concept, sure, as being inside of a whale who is technically flying through space is a fantastical and fun thought. It's just that the world itself isn't very fun to navigate, in my opinion. It feels like you're just going in circles because of the similarity between the rooms. The story of the world is the only saving grace to me because this is a world where you get a whole lot of Riku, more so than most of the previous worlds save for the very beginning of the game. Also, you can technically kinda sorta skip most of Monstro by just leaving when the game lets you, but you do have to play at least a little bit of this world. The story of this world sees Sora confronting Riku as he lures away a naive Pinocchio, eventually leading to a showdown with the Parasite Cage. Having Riku actually involved in this world's story in a direct way does elevate this world quite a bit for me, but still not enough to really tip the scales to make it enjoyable. The Parasite Cage boss battle is really easy, at least in its first form. It swings its tentacle arms all around in every direction, and the main goal is to attack the head. What's really cool about this fight though is that you actually get Riku in your party as a sort of semi-guest. He doesn't actually show up in your HUD or anything, but he does help with the fight, which is a super cool moment. After defeating the cage for the first time, Sora and company make their way back into the whale, all the way into the depths of its stomach. Riku flees through a dark portal and Sora takes on the Parasite Cage a second time. The second Parasite Cage fight unfortunately doesn't include Riku, and it's a tougher fight in general. There's a vat of acid surrounding the small arena, and the tentacle attacks along with the new thrust tackle knock you back quite a bit more, usually straight into the acid. After this second and final battle, Monstro sneezes and spits out the entire party and their gummy ship, along with Geppetto and Pinocchio, who eventually end up in Traverse Town. Listen, I've already gone over what I don't like about this world, and there's not a whole lot more I can say about it that I haven't already said. It's not a terrible world, it's just the aesthetics of it I'm not a huge fan of. Atlantica is a world where Sora, Donald, and Goofy completely change forms to adapt to the world's environment through the use of magic. There's a story explanation for why this happens, having to do with fitting in to not mess with the world's order, but this also gives the game an excuse to give the main characters unique new designs, and I love that. Given that Atlantica is underwater, Sora's a mermaid, Donald is an octopus, and Goofy is a turtle. It's beautiful, and I really love these designs, especially since both Donald and Goofy are clearly still a mishmash of two different animals. But if you think about it, I guess that's technically what a mermaid is too, huh? They're like weird alternate mermaids. The world's aesthetics are probably what I'd consider to be the most forgettable in the game. The entire time you're here, there's this nice little screen wave effect to show that you're underwater, but that's pretty much the extent of what's special here. Most of the ocean is just giant bluish gray rocks that all look pretty dull, to be honest. There's a couple of nice areas like Triton's throne room and Ariel's secret cove, but otherwise it's all pretty samey in my opinion, especially this big central area. This world is one of the hardest to navigate in my opinion because of all this gray similarity. Now, obviously this isn't quite on the level of Monstro, not even close, but at least Monstro was strange and memorable. This is just bland. It's bland enough that to help you navigate, there are literally trident-shaped arrows on the walls that point you toward exits. But even then, it still blends together, and after a while, I still found myself getting lost quite a bit. Maybe I'm just bad at directions, maybe that says something about this world. There are some areas that have a dolphin that you can grab to get around more quickly, but this is not really a perfect solution for the navigation, especially since it swims super erratically and really just made me even more disoriented at times. The only time this world offers any kind of visual variety is when you're heading towards Ursula's grotto, which is lined with these burning thermal vents and an overall dark and oppressive atmosphere, which I actually prefer to the generally drab and uniform environments that fill most of the rest of the world. One of the neat aspects that sets this world apart, though, are the clams. Sort of like the flowers in Wonderland, these are interactive objects that you have to strike in order to open them. You can find items and chests in these, a trinity mark, and even a save point. The music in this world is straight up Under the Sea from the movie, just an acoustic version. It's a catchy song, so I can't complain, but it does get a bit grating after hearing it for an extended amount of time. The battle theme is also a fun theme with a similar upbeat style, but I don't really have much else to say about it. Because this world takes place entirely underwater, both the movement and battle mechanics are adjusted a bit. Just to be clear, the controls do differ depending on whether you're playing the PlayStation version or one of the modern HD versions, and as I'm playing the HD version, I'll explain those controls. You can swim around in any direction as you'd expect, but in order to ascend or descend, you have to press and hold the square or circle buttons. This can be kind of awkward to get used to, but eventually you do get used to it. It just never really feels good. It also feels like you move around generally slower than you would in the overworld, especially with the loss of any movement abilities that you might have unlocked by this point. While you do eventually get the dolphin kick ability to move a little faster, it still never really feels comfortable or good to get around this way. Physical combat is also really limited here. I'm not much of a magic spammer, so I rely a lot on just using the Keyblade to attack, but unfortunately, Atlantica does this thing where it ignores any combo boosts or other special abilities that you have equipped. Plus, with the added verticality, your attacks often don't get anywhere close to hitting the enemy you want, with them being just above or just below you. It just doesn't feel good to exist in this world. On the other hand, I respect the idea that they were going for, and I can't really think of any way to do a Little Mermaid world without it being set underwater. I consider this a black mark on a game with otherwise great mechanics. Atlantica's story isn't too bad, it's just mostly a spin on the story of The Little Mermaid, but with a more limited scope. No Prince Eric, just a small conflict with Ariel, King Triton, and Ursula. Almost like they took one small chunk of the movie and made it its own story arc. There is this one little weird thing about the story though. King Triton scolds Sora for meddling with the affairs of Atlantica and tells him that he's not welcome there, explicitly telling him that he knows he's from another world. How the hell does Triton know so much about other worlds and the Keyblade? Does this have lore implications? Like, I don't think this is ever going to be revisited, but it's just kind of weird how much more Triton knows than the average Disney character in this game, since even the smartest characters in these worlds are totally clueless about the wider universe. Just something to think about, I guess. Anyways, eventually Ursula does the evil Trident stealing stuff, and Sora and Ariel head for her lair to confront her, leading to the world's first boss battle. In this fight, Ursula, Flotsam, and Jetsam are all targets, but Flotsam and Jetsam are mostly useless to attack since they always come back. The goal, obviously, is to defeat Ursula. She uses a few physical attacks, including a spinning attack where she moves all around the room, but her big gimmick is the giant cauldron in the center of the room. You can fire spells at the cauldron, and if you do this enough, there's an energy burst that comes out of it and stuns her, giving you open range to hit her with the Keyblade. The issue I had with this fight, though, is that I didn't realize how the fight really worked until I'd spent way too long just kind of meandering. It's a clever gimmick, but not at all obvious in my opinion, which led to the fight taking an excessively long amount of time in this playthrough. Once you beat her, she flees and the group pursues her to a wide open area where the second and final boss fight happens. Ursula grows to a massive kaiju-like size and conjures a giant whirlpool around the arena. This fight weirdly reminds me of the Andross boss fight from Star Fox 64. Not only does it have this unsettling factor of being super close and personal with her face, but she has this one move where she inhales and tries to suck you in. I know, it's a super weird and out of nowhere comparison, but to those who are watching that have played Star Fox 64, please tell me you understand what I mean by this. Anyways, in this fight, the target is her head, but the approach can be tricky. When Ursula is defeated, you've finished Atlantica and you're rewarded with the Crab Claw Keyblade. So, Atlantica is obviously not my favorite world for a variety of reasons, and I feel bad saying that because I know it's kind of a bandwagon opinion. But for real, I love The Little Mermaid, just this adaptation doesn't really work for me. The world itself takes away a lot of what makes Kingdom Hearts fun, which is the exploration, combat mechanics, platforming, and fun visuals. The complete rework to movement to accommodate mermaid swimming along with the super bland aesthetics make this world fall flat for me. Oh yeah, Jack Skellington and the whole Halloween Town crew are here, and this aesthetic is perfect. Halloween Town has a dark and spooky atmosphere, one that does an incredibly great job at capturing the spirit of the original Nightmare Before Christmas. Right off the bat, you see that Sora, Donald, and Goofy get completely unique outfits to match, and these are also great. Sora gets a bit of a vampire with a bat wings look, Goofy gets a Frankenstein's monster getup, and Donald gets, well, he's a mummy. But I do like how his midsection is completely missing. It's a super neat touch. The Halloween Town Square is not the biggest or most expansive area, but it's faithful, and for this world, that's the most I could ask for. And even moving beyond the spooky aesthetic, the sound design and music here are just fantastic. An instrumental version of This Is Halloween plays in the background the entire time, everything you interact with makes ghoulish noises, and there's just so much texture here, more so than most other worlds in this game in my opinion. Even the Heartless have modified designs to give them a sort of cloth texture to match with the world's aesthetics. And of course, there's some iconic areas here, but it'd be a huge missed opportunity if they didn't include what is probably the most iconic area, the coiled up Moonlight Hill. I really just love the way this world looks overall, and to be honest, I don't know how anyone couldn't. Outside of the standard town, there's Oogie Boogie's Manor, which is almost like a mini dungeon that you have to climb to make it up to him, and along the way there's all kinds of enemies and platforming challenges too. Eventually, the manor becomes sort of a boss itself, but we'll get to that. Like Atlantica, Halloween Town takes a chunk of the story of Nightmare Before Christmas and just kind of turns it into its own little original mini story. There's no actual Christmas elements here, everything is just limited to Halloween Town itself. The story leads to an initial sort of mini-boss where you're up against Lock, Shock, and Barrel, and it's kind of an obnoxious fight to be honest. All three of them run around using small, almost harmless attacks, but it's a whole lot happening all at once, which can lead to the damage coming in from every direction, draining your HP shockingly fast. You have to defeat them one by one, and they have a surprising amount of HP, but fortunately once you defeat one, they stay down and you can focus on the remaining two, then the remaining one. After they're defeated, you climb up the manor and enter Oogie Boogie's torture chamber to confront him. This fight has one of the most unique battle areas and takes place on a giant roulette wheel as Oogie stands up on a secondary higher platform that you can't normally reach. He constantly throws down these dice at you, which can be used to activate a variety of effects based on the rolls, but also you might have to avoid them while you fight the flying heartless enemies as the dice can explode. Sometimes the rolls can lead to hazards on the wheel that can hurt you, like these cowboy things that straight up shoot you, or this rotating blade that you have to jump over. Sometimes the roulette wheel can lock off a segment that'll rise, allowing Sora to directly attack Oogie. However, it doesn't always rise on the incorrect segment, which can lead to you basically being unable to do anything during this part. Eventually, Sora's knocked back down onto the wheel either way. After this fight, the next section is kinda sorta a boss fight, but it's more like a big platforming challenge, where you have to climb the possessed manor and destroy all these big dark orbs. This part isn't hard, but it can be a bit frustrating since it's super easy to fall all the way back to the bottom. Along the way, you're attacked by flying Heartless too, making it a little bit more challenging. Once all the orbs are destroyed, the Oogie Manor collapses and falls apart, leaving behind the world's keyhole. Interestingly, Halloween Town is one of the 2 worlds you can technically entirely skip if you wanted to, the other being Atlantica. You have to clear at least one of them, but you can totally ignore the other and still beat the game. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this for a first playthrough though, since you miss out on keyblades, spell upgrades, and, you know, experiencing the world in general. Also, I'm pretty sure you have to clear it to unlock the secret ending, but it is pretty interesting that it's even possible to skip it. Calling this world Neverland is a bit of a stretch, since nearly the entire time spent here is on Captain Hook's pirate ship. There is a small segment at the end around Big Ben the clock tower, but that is also explicitly not in Neverland. The pirate ship does have a childlike wonder to it though. It's a small location made large in a fantasy sort of way, like how the inside is much bigger than the outside. It's almost a wooden labyrinth, but the rooms are still easily navigable thanks to every one of them having some sort of identifiable or unique feature, like ladders or multiple levels with platforms. It's honestly not much to look at, but I really prefer it to something like Atlantica because this place doesn't really feel like it's way too big, nor does it take away most of the fun game mechanics. The outside of the ship exists solely as a storytelling area and a battlefield for the boss, but otherwise looks like your standard cartoon pirate ship. My favorite part of this world though is definitely the Big Ben location you visit when you finish the world. When I was a kid, flying around here gave me a sense of wonder, and sure, I'm not an English kid from the 50s, but seeing Sora and crew fly around a real world location with a real city in the background awakened something in me when I was little. It's kind of like how in Sonic the Hedgehog 2's chemical plant zone, you can see all kinds of lit up windows in the buildings in the background. It just made my imagination run wild. Do these people see Sora flying around this iconic clock tower? Who's out there? Is London the entire world in the Kingdom Hearts universe? Or could Sora, in theory, visit somewhere like Canada? Is Jane from Deep Jungle from this version of England, or are there multiple Englands? Sora, Donald, and Goofy are intercepted by Hook's ship as they travel in their gummy ship, and when Sora boards the ship, he immediately encounters Riku. Riku summons this dark facsimile of Sora using his own shadow before Sora's dropped through a trapdoor into the ship's interior. But a really neat touch here is that when Sora loses his shadow, it stays gone until you progress further in the world and beat Anti-Sora, even if you leave to go visit other worlds. This is a really subtle but incredibly cool detail that I bet most people wouldn't even notice. I didn't even know about this myself until a couple of years ago, and I've beaten this game countless times. Eventually, Sora is backed onto the ship's plank, where a crocodile awaits in the water below, but just as he's about to fall off, he hears Peter Pan tell him that he can fly if he just believes. Sora drops down off the plank, but miraculously is able to fly, beginning the final fight against Captain Hook. Flying is unfortunately a situational ability only available in Neverland and during some specific gameplay segments later on. While flying, you can use the face buttons to ascend and descend, and if you descend to ground level, you stop flying until you double jump to reactivate it. Outside of being mid-air, the flying doesn't affect combat too much, and Sora just relies on his aerial combos. The fight against Captain Hook is easy on paper, but the battleship Heartless that hovers around the battle area and drops these artillery shells on you pretty much all the time. Hook himself swipes at you with his weapon, and if you stay too close to him, he does this flurry attack before tiring out. If you strike him when he's tired, you can knock him into the water, sending him flying back into the ship out of fear of losing his other hand to the crocodile. Once Hook is defeated, you knock him into the water one final time and the crocodile chases him into the distance. But I want to take a second to appreciate what I consider to be an early character-defining moment for Sora here. See, in this world, Sora is finally kinda sorta reunited with Kairi, but Riku ends up fleeing and taking her with him. But Sora doesn't lament Riku escaping with Kairi, instead saying he can't wait to tell Kairi that he flew. This is really one of those moments that reveals Sora's true nature and how well written he is, even all the way back in the first game. He doesn't wallow in sorrow or disappointment, but instead thinks only of sharing his joy with the people closest to him. He knows he still has to do the whole saving Kairi thing, but he's so confident he'll be able to do it, he's more focused on what he'll tell her after she's saved, which I find incredibly endearing. He does sort of come back to reality a bit after talking with Peter Pan, but his optimism is just so enjoyable in this moment, and it's something that stays consistent about him throughout the entire series.
Without a shadow of a doubt, Sora is my favorite character in any media. His upbeat and positive attitude, his determination to see things through all the way and to never give up, and of course his selflessness and courage are all things that I look at and aspire to have myself. Sora has been a role model for me and continues to be to this very day.
After you leave the ship, you head to the clock tower, also explicitly not Neverland, and it's at this clock tower that Sora finds the world's keyhole and seals it, completing the Neverland world and earning you the glide ability along with the Fairy Harp Keyblade. Like Agrabah, this world also has a secret boss that you can access later on, this time in the form of the Phantom who appears at the clock tower. Let me tell you, this boss is obnoxious in its mechanics. Basically, the whole fight revolves around the boss casting Doom on someone in your party. Once Doom is cast, it can't be removed and the hands of the clock tower start moving. When the clock strikes midnight, the party member is KO'd and cannot be revived for the rest of the fight. The main strategy for getting around this is using the stop spell on the hands to extend the time over and over, which for me is super stressful because while you're dealing with the clock, you have to simultaneously deal with the Phantom itself, which is not that easy, since the Phantom can only be damaged in certain ways. It has this visual indicator in the form of a colored heart-shaped ball of energy below its cloak, and the only way to damage it is through using certain attacks or spells as indicated by the color. If it's blue, you cast Blizzard, red as fire, yellow as thunder, and white as a melee attack. Every time you successfully attack it, the energy changes color, rinse and repeat. But remember, during this time, you're also having to deal with the Doom spell. Plus, using this much magic really drains your MP, so you have to be stocked up with MP recovery items like ethers and elixirs, and that's not even counting needing to use the cure spell periodically. Fortunately, you can kind of cheese it to avoid some of the Phantom's attacks by hiding around one of the corners of the clock tower, but this doesn't work every time. Still, I relied on it a few times and barely was able to defeat this thing with no more recovery items left. Once it's defeated, it dies pretty unspectacularly and you unlock the final stop spell upgrade. The 100 Acre Wood is quite different from the other worlds in this game due to its weird setup. You're introduced to it by Merlin in Traverse Town through the book, which initially has no cover. Sora is able to shrink down and dive into the book, and once you're in, you're standing on two giant illustrated pages. These pages serve as a sort of overworld map for this world, and each little location on the map is a location that you can visit if you've collected the torn pages. Torn pages are scattered throughout the worlds as you play through this game, and each torn page you collect unlocks the next chapter of the 100 Acre Wood world. Technically, completing this world is optional, especially since the torn pages are entirely missable if you miss the chest that you can find them in, but this world is super cute and a nice little breather from the general gameplay loop. When you enter an area on the storybook map, you're transported to a full standard environment and you're able to explore as you'd expect. These areas are small but can be intricately detailed. The best example is Pooh's house, where there's tons of honeypots, furniture, and even little interactive elements like this cuckoo clock. The story for the 100 Acre Wood is one linear story, just broken up if you don't have all of the torn pages before you really get into it. It's a bit simple, but it's full of mini-games. Sora visits an empty meadow where Pooh sits alone on a log, looking deep in thought. He asks Pooh what's wrong, and he says that he's thinking of how he'll say goodbye to himself since all of his friends have disappeared and he thinks he'll disappear next. As Sora collects torn pages, he brings back Pooh's friends and the locales of the 100 Acre Woods one by one. As Sora brings back more and more friends, he gains access to more and more of the mini-games. First is Pooh's Honey Hunt. This is a sort of platforming and dexterity challenge where you have to stop bees from touching and popping Pooh's balloon while he collects honey from this tall tree. You can jump on the branches to follow Pooh and swat away the bees as they appear with the Keyblade. Hitting the bees automatically centers you onto the nearest branch, which is nice, but it's a bit finicky getting Sora to stay on the branches. If the balloon pops, Pooh falls to the bottom and you have to wait for him to ascend once again until the timer runs out. Next is Pooh's Swing. This is a timing minigame where you push Pooh on a swing and launch him across the map. When Pooh's at the height of his swing, you tap R1 to push him more. You can also watch Owl's wings for an idea of when you're supposed to hit the button. The next one is simply called Block Tigger. Here, Tigger is just trying to destroy the vegetables, and it's almost like a reverse whack-a-mole. You can manually run to the spots to stop him, but there's also a command that pops up that has Sora rush right to the patch to block him. It can be frustrating, but once you find a groove, it's not too bad. After that is Tigger's Giant Pot. There's two parts to this one. The first is a platforming pattern memorization minigame. It's super simple. You just have to jump on the logs in the same pattern as Tigger. The only tricky part is missing jumps, as Sora doesn't hang on to the edges, and if you're used to having double jump, it's really easy to misjudge the timings. Falling to the ground restarts the current round, and after you've completed this minigame, you can then do the second part where you're just hitting nuts back at the pot until you reach 20 points without falling off. That's it, super simple. The last minigame is Pooh's Muddy Path, and in this, you have to help Pooh reunite with all of his friends by leading him to their sort of hiding spots. This includes a bit of janky semi-platforming through leading Pooh around, but it's a pretty easy puzzle, and once you've reunited them all, you've completed the 100 Acre Wood and get a final cutscene. Sora reunites Pooh with all of his friends and becomes Pooh's friend along the way. He spends a final night under the stars with everyone as they celebrate being reunited, and as Sora leaves, everyone says goodbye, and Pooh reminds Sora that they'll always be there waiting for him to return. When the book closes, the cover's restored, and it now depicts Sora with Pooh and his friends. I love the 100 Acre Wood as a concept. The minigames are nothing to write home about, but it's just cute, you know? It's totally optional and really just a nice place to take a breather with an adorable story that does nothing but add to an already excellent game. I know that some people probably don't care that much about the 100 Acre maker would, but to me, this world is worth it solely for the heartwarming book cover scene. Hollow Bastion is the final traditional world you visit, and it's almost like the boss world of the game. The Heartless are more powerful, the platforming is more perilous, and the overall mood feels more serious and dire, in part due to the tense, high-tempo, yet foreboding musical track. I love Hollow Bastion's aesthetics and world design in general, but I'll be honest, I do get a bit tired of exploring this place after a while, but that's just me. Some people love this. The labyrinthian nature of the lift stop makes the world feel a little bit more complicated than it should be, but I'm also a person that isn't a big fan of mazes, or at least maze-like structures in video games as a whole. On the other hand though, this labyrinthian design makes Hollow Bastion feel almost threatening in a way. There's even this whole segment where you're on a moving platform and have to fight off waves of enemies just to get to the destination. The entire game up to this point was almost straightforward with pretty easy to navigate worlds, but Hollow Bastion has so many little intricacies that they're almost like pitfalls, ways to make simple exploration here feel almost threatening. You start in this lower open icy cavern area, and after the first major cutscene, you've lost Donald and Goofy and you have no Keyblade. You can't actually damage the Heartless without the beast's help with no Keyblade. The oppressive tone here is only amplified when you're robbed of your primary tool and basically are rendered helpless. Remember that part of the Destiny Islands where you only had the wooden sword to fight with and the attacks went straight through the Heartless? Yeah, that's this again. You feel completely out of control, and it's a very powerful way of showing you just how far Sora's come. Fortunately, Beast is a heavy hitter as a party member. He does a lot of physical damage with his attacks, and fortunately he's able to handle the Heartless on his own with ease.
Kingdom Hearts 1 is already a game that has such good level design. They kind of just took every world in that game and like doubled, tripled the craziness, and that is what you get when you get into Hollow Bastion. And not only that, but like you're playing a Disney game, right? You just went through all these like uplifting, bright, light-filled Disney worlds, and you come to this world which is just kind of dark and mysterious. It's the embodiment of mystery in the series. I love Hollow Bastion and Kingdom Hearts 1. That entire segment, story-wise, gameplay-wise, was just amazing. One of the most difficult experiences in Kingdom Hearts growing up, but also one of my favorites.
I just have really fond memories of exploring every single nook and cranny of Hollow Bastion, and there are so many small things that are really hard to find on your first playthrough, and uncovering all of those secrets is so satisfying.
I thought it was extremely cool how Sora loses the Keyblade, because like you've been taught the whole game that that's the only way to beat the Heartless, and then you lose it to Riku, and it's like the best moment where like the hero has been beat down, but then the moment that you get it back is like my favorite moment in the whole series.
The world is also rife with a variety of environmental puzzles. In these underground areas, there's these sort of bubble portal puzzles where you get transferred from one area to another through walls and activate switches in order to rearrange these moving walls. Inside the castle itself, you have to collect a bunch of emblem pieces in order to fill out an inlet on a door that leads further into the castle. Then there's all of the lift stop electrical switches, which make this complex world even more labyrinthian and tough to navigate, at least the first time around. Given that this is kind of the climactic world of the game, there are quite a few encounters with multiple bosses, and the first happens right as you get the Keyblade back. This fight's against Riku and your first real showdown with him with stakes, at least. He swings at you and your party members with short but powerful attacks with his sword. Coupled with some giant leaps back and forth across the battlefield, the best way to handle this is to either learn how to parry or be like me and spam strike rate while brute forcing physical attacks. Later, you're up against Maleficent, and in this fight, she rides a floating platform, and in order to hit her directly, you have to deal enough damage to the platform itself so it drops down. She uses all kinds of spells, and you're forced to either avoid them or directly take on a bunch of Heartless throughout this fight, but it's really not that tough at the end of the day. Once she's defeated, you have to chase her down, and you get a scene where the Ansem-possessed Riku unlocks her heart, and she transforms into her dragon form, which is the next boss fight. This fight weirdly reminds me of the Cerberus fight because she does this big stomping shockwave thing that you have to avoid by jumping. On top of that, she has this spin move that punishes you for staying too close, and she breathes this green fire that does a ton of damage. I struggled with this fight because in this game, I'll be honest, I mostly just mash attack, but I definitely would have benefited from using more tactics here, I think. As is tradition in this game, the main target is her head, but on top of all the things I've already said, she leaves this lingering fire on the battlefield that damages you if you touch it. And did I mention the homing projectiles? This fight really felt like a difficulty spike in this game, but it was definitely still fun and challenging at the end of the day if you actually, learn how to play the game. To win this, I ended up summoning Bambi in my third attempt, and the basically endless MP really helped me in the end. Winning the fight rewards you with the Fire Glow gem, which can be turned into the Mushu summon. Once the dragon's defeated, she disappears in her green flames, and you're now taking on the Ansem-possessed Riku. He's way stronger this time around and has a lot more HP, not to mention he's good at dodging your melee attacks outright. He has a much wider repertoire of abilities, including an aerial jump that kind of releases this burst of energy, a slicing projectile swing attack, these light pillar attacks that follow you around the battlefield, and of course his signature move Dark Aura, which has him floating into the air and slide dashing at you from multiple directions really fast, kind of like a buffed up version of Cloud's Sonic Blade. When he does this attack, he's totally invincible, and at the end of it, he does a final aerial slam that sends out a bunch of shockwaves that are pretty tricky to avoid. This is actually one of the most iconic fights in the game to me, not only because of how impactful it is to the story and how fun of a fight it is, but also because in the original version of this game on the PS2, you could not skip cutscenes. This means that if you lost this fight, you had to rewatch all the lengthy stuff before it over and over again until you won. And I bet that this particular cutscene has probably been seen more times against people's will than any other cutscene in the entire game. Anyways, once the fight's over, that's pretty much it for standard boss fights in this world. Sora stabs himself with the Keyblade and he's turned into a Heartless and has to explore the world briefly as a shadow, which is a neat little change of pace, though it's more of a gimmick since there's not really a whole lot you can do while you're a shadow. Once he's restored from being a Heartless, Beast holds off the Heartless so you can escape with Kairi. Outside of that, everything that happens here is pretty critical to the overall plot. Once you return to Hollow Bastion from Traverse Town, you head straight to the end of the world. However, once you've visited the end of the world, you can return to Hollow Bastion to fight the ultimate secret boss that teases the future of the series, the Unknown. This fight has an introductory scene where a man in dark robes approaches Sora and walks straight through him. The man calls Sora special, and when Goofy asks if he's Sam, the man says the name rings familiar. He says that Sora reminds him of someone and then attacks and says Sora is incomplete. He tells Sora that he wants to test his strength and initiates the battle with one of the coolest boss tracks in the game. And oh boy, this dude is strong, and I'm gonna be honest, I did not expect to be able to win this fight for this video. Like, I legitimately thought I was toast, but let's talk about it. The Unknown pretty much teleports around the arena and deals these incredibly fast attacks with these two lightsaber-like weapons. He has a plethora of shockwave and homing abilities, and in fact, this battle moves so fast, I don't even think I could tell you how I actually won. It kind of defies logic. He attacks you relentlessly, and I didn't even really have time to think or register what was going on. Once you get his HP low, he starts using even stronger attacks like this one where he starts firing out these moving lasers of light, followed by these red homing blaster shots. He also has this ability where he can take over your command menu with these shock commands, and if you activate a shock command, they damage you. To get rid of this, you have to wait for the release command, which frees back up your command menu. This fight still took me like 5 tries, and the only way I was able to finally do it was, you know, through summoning Bambi and spamming Strike Raid at the very end. Once the Unknown is defeated, he staggers backwards before dispelling the damage entirely. He commends Sora, saying, "This will be enjoyable," before bidding Sora farewell and disappearing entirely. He leaves with the words, "I am but a mere shell." The reward for this fight is the 13th and final Ansem report. Speaking of, I've mentioned the Ansem reports multiple times, but I never actually went into what they are, so let's quickly talk about them. As you clear milestones and progress through the game, you find these collectible Ansem reports, and there's 13 total to collect. Collecting these is optional as you don't really need all of them to complete the game, but they do provide some really valuable lore, like explaining the background of the Heartless and the experiments that the writer of the reports undertook in order to understand them, along with the nature of hearts themselves. While a lot of it is vague and doesn't really make sense at first, the way the Kingdom Hearts story is told across the series makes a lot of the information in here pay off in a really cool way, and we see collectible reports like this throughout the rest of the series too. In fact, sometimes it's even unclear who wrote them, or better yet, it's intentional misdirection. But with that, we've completed Hollow Bastion, and now we can head to the final world. Don't worry though, we see Hollow Bastion again in future games. The final world of Kingdom Hearts is fittingly called End of the World. End of the World is a shockingly spooky depiction of the fractured remains of other worlds. Everything is disjointed and incomplete, and this is by design the nature of this world. The music that plays is similar to the music that you hear in the Dive to the Heart too. When you first arrive, you have to trek across a vast flat landscape with tons of invisible walls that turn it into a sort of maze that you have to feel your way around to get through. Along the way, there are treasure chests littered around that give you either an item or transport you into a battle against powerful Heartless. Eventually, you make your way through this area and arrive in this tall cavern with a huge number of little platforms, including some that are so thin you have to shimmy across. Another gameplay mechanic mechanic we never see again after this game. Eventually, you arrive in an area where you're teleporting between these large towering pillars. Each pillar is a portal that takes you to one zone from each world that you've visited, but the music never changes, giving you this foreboding feeling that the place that you're visiting is only an illusion. After defeating a wave of Heartless, you're sent back to the pillar platform and you're able to move on to the next pillar and the next visit. One special oddity in this world is this room with some kind of machine lined with what looks like pods. If you walk up to it and examine it, you get an entire Ansem report-like log entry too. This room feels super out of place in this world, but I want to bring special attention to it because wouldn't it be really weird if this room got some sort of lore payoff? I don't know, 20 years after the release of this game? Moving on, the final pillar portal takes you to one of the coolest boss fights in this game, a battle against Chernobog from Fantasia, complete with Night on the Bare Mountain, the classic song in its entirety as the boss theme. And let me tell you, I would absolutely play it if I thought I could. This fight comes out of nowhere, and I can't emphasize just how cool and impactful it feels. There's legitimately no explanation or even reason for this fight, it just happens. You're able to fly around the arena freely as the monster breathes fire from its mouth and hurls energy attacks at you. The only real target is on its head, and so you have to stay up super close to maximize damage. It's not the longest fight, but it can be tough if you're underleveled. Once you defeat it, it explodes into a dark fiery energy, leaving behind the volcano below and earning you an upgraded super glide ability. After this, you explore a few more corridors with various debris and other artifacts of unknown origin, some of which looks weirdly like Halloween Town actually. Then you're in what is one of the more frustrating rooms in this game. Here, you have to beat wave after wave of enemy in order to break the Heartless emblem at the end of the room piece by piece. The first fight is up against a behemoth, but there's plenty of powerful enemies here, and if you're not prepared for it, this room can easily wreck you. I'd describe this room almost as a marathon, and I'm actually not a huge fan of it because it feels like it exists solely to slow down the pace and make you wait just a little bit longer for the game's climax rather than any real well thought out thematic reason. Once the emblem is broken down, you can walk through it and into the final room and the final save point of this game. In this room is a door that you can enter, but it warns you that once you go through it, that's it. You can't go back. This is the end game. At this point, you can go back and do pretty much anything you haven't done before tackling the final boss, including challenging the game's secret bosses if you want to. Once you're through the door, you're taken to what looks like Destiny Islands. Soon though, the world is corrupted and takes on this fractured look. Once you approach the Ansem-possessed Riku, he monologues at you and reveals his true appearance. After this incredibly pivotal scene, you're fighting Ansem for the first time. In this fight, Billy Zane floats around the arena with his dark figure. The dark figure shoots projectile blade attacks at you, but the real target is Ansem himself. It's pretty straightforward to handle, you just have to follow him around the arena and attack him when you can. But at times, the figure can jump in front and block your attacks. The bigger challenge is when the dark figure actually possesses you. See, randomly it'll reach out from behind Ansem and grab you, though this can be dodged. When this happens, your attack command is replaced with a freeze command at various intervals, just like the unknown boss. If you accidentally use the freeze command, your attack is replaced with the figure appearing and damaging you, stopping you in place. The possession is only temporary, but it can happen multiple times during the fight. Once you beat the first phase, the fight is taken into a smaller arena, this time without Donald or Goofy. Here you fight the dark side again, and this fight is pretty much the same as we've seen before. Once you've defeated the dark side, it's round 2 against Ansem and his dark figure, with Sora still alone. All of the attacks from the first phase are back, including the possession thing, and Ansem's new moves here are fast-moving energy attacks, including a move that works sort of like the Ansem-possessed Riku's dark aura, where he flies at you over and over again from different angles. Once his HP gets low, he uses a desperation move where the dark figure rises up from the ground, and you have to constantly move to avoid getting hit. Even with these additional attacks, though, you can beat him with some good old-fashioned bonks with the Keyblade. When this phase is over, you're transported to a completely separate area, which is this cloudy, dark void. Fortunately, Sora, Donald, and Goofy can fly around here freely. This final phase of the fight is way more complex than the last couple, though, as Ansem has kind of plugged himself into this giant Heartless called World of Chaos, which looks almost like a living warship with a face. It's genuinely creepy, and I actually really love the design, even if it makes absolutely no sense to me and Ansem has taken his shirt off for some reason. The fight is broken up into more distinct phases, and in the first, Donald and Goofy are transported away, and Sora almost falls into the abyss but hears Riku's voice and regains his Neverland flight. The actual target of the fight is super clear. Ansem, now shirtless, is tethered to an armored version of the dark figure. He wields a double-sided version of the sword he used when he possessed Riku, and he spins it around Darth Maul style if you stay too close. At various intervals, these beams of rotating light will surround you and make the area around Ansem a sort of minefield. These can be kind of hard to avoid with how floaty the fight is, but fortunately they're manageable enough, and most of this phase is just wailing on on Ansem and trying to avoid the big attacks, including this one where he swings his weapon wildly at you. If you keep your distance, you can avoid it for the most part, and once you've depleted all of his HP, you're taken straight into the next phase. Here, he places himself into a sort of coffin pod thing, and you have to dive inside the world of chaos. That is a sick sentence, by the way. When you go inside, you're taken into a discreet dark room with waves of Heartless. Once you've defeated them, a small core appears and you have to destroy it to leave the room. When you've done that, you're sent back out and have to destroy a bunch of little appendages on the outside of the monster boat thing, or attack the face itself. Listen, I didn't say this fight wasn't weird. Once you've broken all the appendages, a portal appears and you're able to go back inside the world of chaos, rinse and repeat. And each subsequent time, you regain a party member. Once you've got both party members back, a shield around the center of the Heartless disappears and you're able to attack the main core. While you can wail on it, there's these little turrets all around that fire energy beams at you, but you can destroy them too if you want. Can I just say though that attacking this core is kind of unsettling to me. I don't like how it violently jiggles. Anyways, once you've destroyed it, Ansem reemerges for the final phase of the fight, which works similarly to the first phase, just a bit more challenging. Once Ansem's defeated, the whole big giant ship thing explodes and Ansem regains his clothes for the game's final cutscene. And at this point, you've beaten Kingdom Hearts. Normally, after the final cutscenes play, the credits start to roll. However, if you've cleared the in-game requirements, you'll see the secret endings first. Kingdom Hearts had 2 unlockable secret movies, Another Side, Another Story, and the final mixed secret movie, Another Side, Another Story Deep Dive. These were unlockable through fulfilling certain requirements in the game before completing it. The higher the difficulty of your save file, the lower the requirements are, and this is true for pretty much every Kingdom Hearts game with a couple of exceptions. However, in the HD remastered version of the first game, the theater mode unlocks these scenes by default for some reason. The original requirements were to collect all the missing Dalmatians and seal every world's keyhole, at least for this difficulty. After the secret endings, we get the game's credits sequences. Credits in the Kingdom Hearts games actually have a pretty distinct formula that most future games also follow. The credits show a variety of shots from throughout the game, ending with an impactful shot, this one of being Sora and Kairi together. The full unremixed version of Simple and Clean plays during the first credits segment too, which actually started during the final cutscene. After that, a second credits segment plays with a backing orchestral melody, and as the credits roll, we actually see scenes of what the various characters across the worlds get up to after the game's ending, including Minnie Mouse and Daisy Duck, Geppetto and Pinocchio, and the kids from the Destiny Islands. This is a really nice bit of closure for the game, and I'm glad it actually became a trend in the series. They didn't even have to do this, but this little extra mile of effort really makes beating the game feel so much sweeter and rewarding to me. Finally, after the credits, at the very end, we get one last bit of artwork and a screen that says "The End." What's neat is that this artwork changes depending on which difficulty and game version you're playing on, along with what requirements in-game you fulfilled before beating it. Kingdom Hearts is a masterpiece. Kingdom Hearts is a masterpiece. I'm saying this right off the bat because I'm going to say some things later in the video that may lead you to believe that I think otherwise. So I want to make it very clear, this game is a masterpiece, hands down. Any and all opinions or preferences I have about the future games in the series versus this game should only tell you just how good this game is. I may have things here or there that I prefer about future games, but at the end of the day, this game is pretty much untouchable in overall quality in my eyes. First off, the idea just shouldn't work. On paper, it's ridiculous. It's a Square Enix action-adventure game with huge anime influences and Final Fantasy cameos, but the main focus is Disney of all things. But it does work. It works so incredibly well. It kicked off a franchise that's running strong over 2 decades later and is a tentpole of Square Enix's identity, up there with the likes of Final Fantasy itself.
So to me, Kingdom Hearts is creativity. No other piece of media on this earth do I think about and just think of just fun, creativity, and colorful imagination. Just the mixture of Square Enix characters with Disney characters already brings that sort of charm. I feel like you get the crazy music and deep emotions of Final Fantasy games with the cheesy, upbeat Disney magic. And when you combine those together, you get Kingdom Hearts. I don't know anything that is just as bombastic and creative.
I think Kingdom Hearts is an experience. It's one that is like no other. There's no other game that's come close to the experience that I've had playing Kingdom Hearts and the general vibe, the general feelings, the emotions that come from this game. There's just no way to describe it.
Because of nostalgia and the fact that my most recent experience with this game is through the updated HD remasters, my perspective will admittedly be a little bit skewed on the game's quality, but fortunately for me, quality is subjective, and this is honestly the most widely available version of the game now anyways, so playing it today feels great. There are very few things in this game that feel dated, outside of maybe the graphics, but the Kingdom Hearts series kept this visual style for a really long time, so the graphics argument even feels a little bit flimsy. The game nails its tone too. The Disney characters all feel lively and true to their movie counterparts, especially thanks to so many of the voice actors reprising their actual roles. The non-Disney characters, especially Sora, give the game a fish out of water element that allows the player to place themselves in the oversized shoes of someone who is suddenly thrust into the wackiness of this Disney mishmash. Even crazier, Final Fantasy characters like Cloud Strife add a whole extra layer of wackiness to this, while simultaneously allowing the game to tackle darker themes without feeling jarring. The fan service is a nice touch too, but the overall writing is corny yet thoughtful. The dialogue can feel a little awkward at times, but it never feels wrong or out of place. It works in this universe. This kind of goes back to tone, but the character interactions always feel true to the character's nature, even in this whole new context with the crossovers. Like Hades attempting to manipulate Cloud, it just makes sense. And speaking of interactions, the dynamic between Sora, Donald, and Goofy is just such a joy to watch unfold. There's so many special moments that accentuate the chemistry between the three throughout the game, and it makes me believe that this concept could never have worked if Donald and Goofy specifically weren't chosen as the two main allies in this series. I adore Sora, Donald, and Goofy's friendship, and their friendship is one of the best examples of why this game and series works so well. And while we know Donald and Goofy from Disney media in general, their depictions in Kingdom Hearts give them an entirely unique personality that feels separate from their other appearances in other media, almost special in a way. These personalities, in my eyes, make these versions of Donald and Goofy distinctly different from anything we've ever seen before, and these personalities carry forward and are expanded in every future appearance that they make in the series. There's so much more I could say about why I love this game so much, but I've probably touched on a lot of these subjects already, and I don't want to sound like a broken record because I'm going to talk about them again later. This game excels in everything it seeks to do, and while it's not perfect, no game ever could be. Its flaws are few and far between, and when I think about this game, the first thing that always comes to mind is how much it did right. I'm actually writing the script for this video after having replayed every game one after another, and I can say with certainty that while I love every game in the series for different reasons, the tone, gameplay, writing, and just overall style of the first game is uniquely different to anything that came after it. Whether you're an old fan who's been playing these games since 2002, or you're a new fan just barely getting into the series, maybe even with this video, Kingdom Hearts is a joyful experience, and I'd even go as far as to say it's an essential piece of gaming history that can and should be enjoyed by anyone, anywhere, with pretty much any taste. Kingdom Hearts is a masterpiece. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories was released in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance, and a full remake called Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories was released in 2007 for the PlayStation 2 alongside the final mix version of Kingdom Hearts 2. Something many people don't realize about the Kingdom Hearts series is that while games like Chain of Memories don't have numbers in their titles, they aren't quite what most would consider spin-offs either. Chain of Memories is Kingdom Hearts 2 in all but name, at least for the purposes of the story. While that isn't necessarily relevant yet, I'm saying it now because if by some chance this is your first exposure to the series and you want to get caught up, you should know not to skip the non-numbered games. Anyways, let's talk about the gameplay. For starters, the original Game Boy Advance version of Chain of Memories is truly impressive for the hardware it's running on. Not only did they manage to cram full motion video into this thing, the fact that they managed to find a creative way to adapt the Kingdom Hearts gameplay into a completely different style while keeping its essence alive is something to behold. The visual style remains as colorful as the original Kingdom Hearts, and the adaptation loses nothing in the transition, whereas the PS2 version looks pretty much identical to the original Kingdom Hearts because, well, why wouldn't it? The character models and overall fidelity and detail seem to be improved thanks to taking better advantage of the hardware, but the visual style is incredibly similar. Chain of Memories and its remake share almost identical stories outside of some minor script and dialogue differences, and of course the addition of full voice acting in the PS2 version. For the breakdown here, I'm going to be using the remake Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories as a basis, but I will refer to the original a couple of times just for the sake sake of comparison. As far as gameplay goes, there are a huge number of changes and additions in the remake versus the original Game Boy Advance version, but the game's basic foundation and gameplay concepts are shockingly similar. Just note that unless I say specifically otherwise, everything that I say from here on out about the gameplay will be referring to the PS2 release and its HD counterpart. Now, before I go into too much detail about the gameplay, Chain of Memories has a feature that blew my mind as a kid. When you start Chain of Memories, you play through the entire game as Sora. Once you beat the game, you unlock something called Reverse Rebirth, which is an entirely new second campaign where you play as Riku. Riku has his own unique story that takes place at the same time as Sora's, and his own unique gameplay that's similar to Sora's, but with mechanics that change it up and make it feel fresh. For the first part of this explanation, I'm going to focus on Sora. In fact, Riku's field gameplay is identical, the only real changes being in battles. Just know that if I ever refer to something as Sora or Riku exclusive, that means that the thing I'm talking about only appears in that character's playthrough. Anyways, the basic gameplay of Chain of Memories seems reminiscent of the first Kingdom Hearts on the surface. The basic controls are the same, the movement feels the same, and it really just feels like the same thing again. Of course, Chain of Memories makes one tiny, massive fundamental change. Almost every gameplay element from exploration to combat is now based on cards. Explaining this might be a bit difficult, but I'm gonna do the best I can by kind of breaking Chain of Memories down. There are two distinct gameplay styles, which I'll call field gameplay and battle gameplay, because the gameplay when you're in the field exploring worlds is different from the gameplay in battles. Battles in Chain of Memories look a lot like battles in the first Kingdom Hearts. The basic concept is the same. You're taking on a wave of enemies that you can target with standard attacks, magic, and summons. In basic principle, it's the same. However, you'll notice that both Sora and the enemy have a set of cards. Sora's is on the left, and the enemy's is either not visible outside of an active card, or on the right in special battles like bosses. Every attack, spell, or ability used by both Sora and the enemies require the use of one or more battle cards. Sora has a few different card types, the main being red attack cards, blue magic and summon cards, and green item and friend cards. Every card also has a number value, and this core concept affects the gameplay in and outside of battle. When you battle an opponent, every attack, spell, and item consumes a card in your deck. Every card consumed has the number value, and if the opponent either doesn't use a card or uses a lower value card at the same time, your card will activate. Your attack will hit, your spell will come out, or your item will be used. However, if the opponent uses a higher value card than you at the same time, your card is broken and your attack or item use is negated. If I attempt to use an attack card with a value of 5 and the opponent uses an attack card at the same time with a value of 6, my card is broken and my attack is entirely negated. My opponent's attack will hit me and I'll take damage. Same goes for items and spells. If I use a cure with a value of 1 and my opponent uses an attack with a value of 3, my cure is interrupted, the cure card is broken, and my opponent's attack lands. It's simple. It's all about timing at the end of the day. However, there's more to it. Every card can have a value of 0 to 9, with higher values being preferable for more powerful decks that are less likely to have their cards broken as often. But cards with a value of 0 work a bit differently. If I attack an opponent with an attack card with a value of 0, they can break my attack with any card of a higher value if they're used after I initiate that 0 card. However, 0 cards also have the reverse effect. If any opponent uses a card of any other value, even a 9, a card with a 0 value will break that card every time if it's used after that first card is initiated. This means that 0 cards are high-risk, high-reward cards that are especially great at breaking slates. A slate is a special ability that can be activated by combining up to 3 attack or spell cards together. While you can combine 3 random attacks together for a normal combo, slates require specific cards of a specific value. For example, Sliding Dash is a slate that Sora can use, and in order to use it, you have to combine 3 attack cards of the same type, and those cards' values have to add up to any number between 10 and 15. On the other hand, Strike Raid requires 3 of any kind of attack card as long as the sum of their value is between 24 and 26. And speaking of value sums, using a slate is the equivalent of using a card the sum of their value. This means that while standard cards can only go up to 9 in value, slates can be much higher. If an opponent is using a slate with a value of 20 and Sora uses a card with a value of 1 through 9, any of those cards would be instantly broken as long as the opponent's slate is still active. However, the rules for 0 cards still apply, so an opponent using a slate can be broken with the use of any 0 card. Of course, the reverse is also true, and if you're trying to fight a boss with a ton of super powerful slates, the bosses can easily counter these with 0 cards. And the rules go both ways, so Sora and Riku play by the same rules as the Heartless and the bosses for the most part. Also, slates can only be used by Sora, Riku, and bosses. Standard enemies don't have access to them, nor do they have access to cards with a value of 0 or 9. Sora learns new slates through leveling up, story progression, and sometimes finding them in chests. Riku, on the other hand, has far fewer slates, but he learns them all at the same time early on in his story. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. Sora and Riku both have access to all of their normal movement mechanics, with running, jumping, targeting, and attacking working just like they did in the first game. This includes the ability to unlock enhanced movement mechanics like dodge, roll, and glide for Sora. Riku gets a unique dodge ability too, but this seems to be functionally the same as dodge roll. You can use the standard attacks to chain together 3-hit combos, and those don't change. You only ever have access to 3-hit combos in this game, but that's more of a limitation of the game's mechanics than anything. Of course, you can't just attack and use your cards endlessly. You have a limited sized deck made up of cards that you can edit while you're out of combat. Riku's deck works a bit differently to Sora's though, so I'll explain Sora's first. Outside of battles, you can edit your deck with any cards you've collected over the course of the game, and you can save up to 3 different decks that you can switch between. The order the cards appear in your deck editor is the order that they'll appear in battles, meaning that you can set up decks in any way you want. The smartest way being to set them up in a specific order to take advantage of slates. However, similar to how abilities worked in the first game, every card has a card point value, and Sora has a card point limit. More powerful cards, along with cards with a higher number value, obviously require more card points, with 0 cards typically costing the most. As you gain experience and level up, you get the option to increase Sora and Riku's stats manually. For Sora, these stats are health and card points, while for Riku, they're health, AP, and DP. I'll get to Riku's other ones later, but for Sora, the only way to increase his card point limit is through leveling up, and you have to choose between health and card points every time. This can actually be a tricky balancing act, because if you're just struggling to stay alive, you might want to increase your health, but if you increase your card points, you can just load up on a bunch of cure cards. This balancing act is one of the many things that gives this game a ton more depth than I think it gets credit for. When you've built your deck and take it into battle, you can freely use any cards in it, but as you use them, whether or not they were successfully activated or broken, they disappear. Once all the cards have disappeared, you have to reload the deck. Reloading the deck is a manual process that requires you to stand perfectly still as you hold down the action button to fill up the reload card. The first time you run out of cards in a battle, the reload card has to be filled once, but every subsequent reload adds an additional bar to fill up to a total of 3 bars. During this time, you're totally open for attacks, meaning that sometimes you have to interrupt your reload in order to dodge, or you can just stand there and take hits until you fill the gauge too, but that's super risky either way. You can reload the card at any point even if your deck isn't empty. However, this is also kind of risky since every time you use a slate, the first card in that slate becomes unreloadable. Even if you reload the deck, that card is gone. There's also a special type of card that you can add to your deck called a premium card. This card functions the same as a standard card but has a lower card point cost in the deck. However, the downside is that these cards are also unreloadable, even if they're not used in a slate. I found myself kind of ignoring premium cards entirely because they just weren't really worth it later on, especially during some of the harder fights. Now, as far as full decks go, Riku's works a bit differently. Riku's card decks aren't editable, and the cards and values of the card in his deck are preset based on the world he's visiting. This is a stark difference in gameplay because Sora's story is all about molding your deck to your playstyle, while Riku's is all about making the most of what you're given. Fortunately, Riku does have a couple of additions to offset this. First, when he levels up, he has the option to increase his HP like Sora, but also his AP and his DP. His AP, or attack points, is his attack power and affects how much damage he puts out with his normal attacks. His DP is dark points, which affects how long his dark mode lasts. I'll get into dark mode a bit later, but the point I'm trying to make is that Riku's options with his deck may be more limited, but he has his own unique ways of making up for it. Plus, while Riku still has to reload his deck, his reload doesn't require the charge and happens instantly as soon as you activate the reload card. There are a few types of battle cards that Sora can put into his deck. First are attack cards, which are red cards and are represented by a keyblade. In battle, at least visually, Sora only uses the kingdom keys, and the cards are more representations of the attack. Every attack card does have different stats depending on the keyblade though, and these stats include strength, swing speed, and the speed in which Sora recovers after suffering a card break. Riku only has one attack card, the sword he used at the end of the first game called the Soul Eater, but like I said earlier, his attack strength is affected by his AP. Next are magic cards, which are blue. These are the various spells that Sora can use, all of which are based on spells that he's used in the first game. If you combine multiple copies of a magic card, you get a more powerful version of that spell, and of course, magic cards can also be included as part of a lot of Sora's slates, and can even be in slates made up of both attack and magic cards. The magic-based slates can actually be incredibly powerful and are some of my favorite attacks in the game. This is foreshadowing. After a magic cards, there's another variety of blue card called a summon card, which are still technically magic cards. These work the same way as magic cards, but instead of casting a spell, you summon one of the summons from the first game, though with the addition of Cloud too for some reason. The things I said about slates also apply to these cards. Next is item cards, which represent items from the last game, but they have different functions this time. The 3 types of items are potions, ethers, and elixirs. Potions reload your attack cards without having to charge the reload card, and more powerful potions like the High Potion and Mega Potion can even reload premium cards. Ether works the same as Potion, but for magic cards, and elixirs naturally do the same, but for both attack and magic cards. In Riku's story, you're only given access to potions and high potions, mainly because Riku doesn't use magic. The final cards you add to your deck are enemy cards. These are acquired either as rare drops from the enemy they're based on, or as rewards for defeating bosses. Enemy cards are accessed through a secondary shortcut menu and work a bit differently from standard battle cards. These enemy cards are accessible at any time and can't be broken. They usually provide passive effects attacks for a set duration, normally anywhere from 1 to 3 reloads depending on the card. Some of them increase the strength of certain abilities, some increase or change the values of your cards, and some can function as backups that automatically reload your deck. The boss enemy cards work the same way, but usually have more powerful effects. There's 2 kinds of special battle cards, the friend card and the gimmick card, but these battle cards cannot be manually added to your deck. Friend cards can only be obtained while in battle and disappear after the battle is over. Friend cards work similarly to summon cards, but feature allies like Donald and Goofy on top of the world-specific allies like Aladdin and Agrabah or Jack Skellington in Halloween Town. Gimmick cards are cards that only appear during boss battles, and these have an image of Mickey Mouse's silhouette, and they have different beneficial effects against the bosses, usually giving Sora and Riku a massive upper hand when they're activated. Now I want to note some of Riku's unique gameplay elements. Riku has the unique ability to enter what's called Dark Mode in battles. Dark Mode is activated through filling up his gauge with dark points, earned through taking damage and card-breaking opponents. In Dark Mode, the gauge depletes through taking damage and getting card-broken himself. The benefits of Dark Mode include better speed, strength, and access to special slates. He also gets a more powerful basic combo with way flashier and faster attacks. Because his decks are preset, Riku has no access to magic. Not that he's incapable of using magic, but for the purposes of gameplay, Riku can't use spells in this game, which has the added downside of making his story a lot more challenging for people like me who rely on healing spells. Fortunately though, Riku does have access to one single friend card in this game in the form of the King. This card summons King Mickey, who heals Riku, damages enemies, and reloads Riku's deck. Finally, Riku has one extra unique mechanic called duels. Normally, if Sora and an enemy use a card of the same value at the same time, both cards are broken and neither is activated. However, if Riku and an enemy use a card of the same value at the same time, it begins a duel. In a duel, the enemy puts out a series of cards and your only goal as Riku is to break them before the duel ends. If you break all of them, you win the duel and deal a super strong attack to the enemy. If you fail the duel, you're stunned and left completely open to enemy attacks for a few seconds. Riku's gameplay is more challenging overall, but a nice change of pace from Sora's. I think it actually would have been bad if they had just copied Sora's gameplay wholesale over to Riku with minimal changes, basically making Riku's story a reskin. See, when I was a kid watching my sister play through this game on the Game Boy Advance, I don't think any of us had any idea Reverse Rebirth was even a thing. So when we beat the game for the first time and found out there was a whole other game, it was mind-blowing. But you see, some people may not have felt the same way if they just wanted the game to end, because the game was and still is very divisive, mainly because of the combat. The combat in Chain of Memories is so divisive that most Kingdom Hearts fans either love playing this game or hate it. There's not really much in between. When I was first introducing these games to my spouse, Burbsai, I actually had them just skip over this game and watch the cutscenes, because while I don't hate the gameplay in Chain of Memories, I know that it's definitely not for everyone, and I didn't want to risk them giving up on the series super early. Personally, I think the biggest issue with the combat in Chain of Memories isn't necessarily that it's card-based or different from the first Kingdom Hearts. I think the issue with it is that it looks nearly identical to the first Kingdom Hearts on the surface, and a lot of people saw that and expected it to be just like the first game, and probably got turned off to it when they found out that it's actually totally different despite how similar it looks. That and the fact that this game has you visiting almost all of the same world that you just visited, but it's probably a mixture of those things. Obviously, the Game Boy Advance version of the game looks immensely different from the remake, but I also imagine that most people think of the remake first when they think of Chain of Memories. This game gets a lot of hate, and I think a lot of it is undeserved. It's not my favorite Kingdom Hearts game by a long shot, but I still think it's a good game that's mechanically complex and deep, and once you find a broken slate like I did, it can be a lot of fun. You just have to go into it with the expectation that this is something different, which I admit is easier said than done. But hey, we still got a ton to talk about here, like the game's field gameplay. You visit most of the same worlds that you visited in the first Kingdom Hearts, at least representations of those worlds. These worlds are all linked together inside of a central hub, Castle Oblivion. You explore the different representations of the worlds in the form of a series of rooms. The rooms in every world are connected in a large grid-type structure. Some rooms can only be reached by accessing adjacent rooms, while others have multiple pathways and entrances. These rooms all have symbolic visual style, elements, and architecture of the worlds that you're visiting, but otherwise they're interchangeable in layout from world to world. Like the battle gameplay, the controls for Sora and Riku are identical to the controls from the first game. When exploring these rooms, you'll notice that they all have these sort of scattered series of plateaus, with most of the rooms being pretty flat. There are some little environmental things here and there, like springs that can launch you into higher platforms, ladders you can climb, and scenery or objects that you can strike with the Keyblade to drop HP orbs or Moogle points, and even sometimes cards for your deck. Most of these rooms also have roaming Heartless. Sometimes the Heartless will wander aimlessly, other times they'll follow you around, and depending on the room type, they can be in any state from totally asleep all the way to pursuing you relentlessly. If an enemy touches you or you touch an enemy, battle is initiated and you're transported to a secondary battle arena based on the world. The arena itself is totally flat and open with nothing but you and the enemy inside. When you're in standard non-boss battles, you can run against the invisible barriers of the arena to try to escape too. If you're near an enemy outside of combat, you can strike them with the Keyblade to get a first hit on them. If you do this successfully, the enemy will spawn in battle with damage already taken. But that's not all. Among the various objects you can find in these rooms, sometimes you'll find an object that you can lift up. Usually it's something like a barrel or a crate. If you throw these objects at an enemy, it can stun them, and if you initiate combat with a stunned enemy, the first wave of enemies will spawn in already stunned, giving you free reign to attack without fear of reprisal for the duration of the days. Unfortunately, there are some things in the field that can hurt you or otherwise inconvenience you, like environmental objects that reverse your movement controls, making it way easier to run into an enemy you didn't plan on fighting. What's more is that the HP you lose in battle doesn't get recovered automatically. You have to find HP orbs in the environment, which can be kind of tricky if you have enemies pursuing you. Fortunately, there are a set number of enemies in each room, and once they're defeated, they won't respawn unless you generate a new room. Speaking of, visually, the lack of distinct and unique features and flat, empty battle arenas in this game can lead to worlds looking kind of bland and samey. That is, in my opinion, a flaw of the game, but it's not one you could easily remedy because the rooms are put together in this way in service of the unique gameplay. The way I see it, the main purpose of these rooms is not necessarily to explore the environment, because let's be real, you've already visited most of these worlds before. Instead, these rooms exist solely as challenges that are tailored to how you make your choices with the map cards. Every world has its own unique world map showing you how many rooms exist in that world and how they're connected. The layout is unique to each world and it stays consistent across visits. However, the rooms themselves are completely dynamic, with their content and layout changing depending on which map card you use to open them. Inside each room is one or more doors leading to an adjacent room depending on where that room is on the world map. By default, the doors are locked and have to be opened with map cards in a mechanic called room synthesis. Once you've opened a door with a map card, you can actually open that same already opened door with another map card to regenerate the room and its content, like enemies, chests, shops, and destructible objects. Map cards are collected throughout the game mainly as a reward from completing battles. Every map card has its own unique properties, each forming a room with reliably predictable elements if you've seen the room before. There are three main types of map cards: red, green, and blue. Red map cards are mainly rooms that change the enemy spawn conditions. Green map cards are mainly rooms that modify the types of cards that appear in battles or their effectiveness. And blue map cards are mainly rooms that contain rewards or treasures. When you use a map card to open a room, the room becomes that map card's theme. On the room synthesis screen, you see a list of your available map cards and their numbers. Yeah, this is a number thing still. As a quick disclaimer, after I finished my playthrough of this game, I did cheat to get a set number of every map card for the purpose of explaining room synthesis to you so I could easily show off a bunch of room types. You can normally only carry up to 99 map cards at a time, so if you see more than that, this is the reason. Every map card you collect has a number from 0 to 9, as expected. Every door you open has a specific map card requirement. Sometimes it's a certain number, or a certain color, or even a mixture of the two. The number requirements can be a specific number, like 2 or 3, or they can require a minimum number. For example, take this room in the Agrabah world. Its requirement is a card that has a value of at least 2. This means I can use any map card in my inventory with a value of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 to open this door. Cards with a value of 1 won't work. However, the exception, of course, is cards with a 0 value. For rooms with number requirements, 0 cards almost always work as a wild card that can represent any number, and are typically the most useful and valuable cards to collect. While the 0 cards are incredibly helpful to have, there are some rooms that require a sum of numbers, making zeros totally useless for those. The sum requirements only usually show up for special rooms that require a 4th map card called a key card. Key cards aren't standard map cards though. In every world's first visit, there are a set number of rooms that require both standard cards and key cards. These rooms are, for the most part, the rooms where the world's story is progressed. The key cards are the key of beginnings, the key of guidance, and the key to truth. Typically, when you first visit a world, you get an introductory cutscene and then begin field gameplay in the first room, a pre-generated unknown room. This room is a basic room with seemingly no theme, though I have read that it's based on the Tranquil Darkness map card. After you've seen the initial cutscene, you can explore the world as you wish by generating any variety of rooms that you want. Depending on the route you take, you'll find specially marked doors with a keycard requirement. Once you use a keycard on its room, that room disappears and becomes inaccessible after the cutscene. You have to use the keycards in order, and the keycard rooms are, in my opinion, a way to break up the game into a 3-act story structure. The first keycard that you use is the Key of Beginnings, which typically just shows you an expositional scene with the world's characters. The next keycard is the Key of Guidance, which takes you to another cutscene, which I'd say is the Rising Action scene, usually introducing the world's villain. Then, finally, you can use the Key to Truth, the final story room for the world where you fight the world's boss and see the closing cutscene for that world. Once you've beaten the world's boss, you're able to access the final room of the world, a pre-generated room called Conqueror's Respite. This room contains no enemies and has a save point along with a doorway leading to the next floor of Castle Oblivion. Now, when you play as Sora, you're automatically taken to Conqueror's Respite, but if you play as Riku, you're just dropped back into the last room that you were in before you use the Key to Truth, and you have to manually trek your way to Conqueror's Respite. There is is one additional keycard called the Key to Rewards, and using this is optional, and you actually don't even find any of these until way later in the game. This means that you have to backtrack to previous worlds if you want to access their Key to Rewards room. Plus, you can only have one Key to Rewards card at a time, and the drop rate for them is pretty low, so in my experience, I had to be real choosy with how I used them. The Key to Rewards rooms, called the Room of Rewards, contain chests with rare treasure, usually in the form of a rare attack or enemy cards for your deck, but also sometimes slates. Now here's where it gets a bit dicey, and I talk about the different versions of Chain of Memories for a second. For context, there's the original Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance, Re-Chain of Memories, the remake for the PS2, and the HD edition of Re-Chain of Memories for modern devices. The Room of Rewards has had a few changes since its original appearance, mainly in what's available as rewards in the chests. While the original Game Boy Advance and PS2 versions contain just various rewards in these rooms that I don't have to get too specific about, the HD edition of the game changed some of the rewards outright from the PS2 version. In the collection of games that includes the HD version of Chain of Memories, there's a movie version of another Kingdom Hearts game. If you watch this movie and save your data, you gain additional rewards in the form of Keyblade cards from the game that the movie's based on. I know it's kind of convoluted, but it's a neat thing that sets this HD version apart from the previous versions, and it's a nice reward for those who sat through an almost 3-hour movie that is, in essence, a collection of cutscenes, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves. I was originally going to cover each map card, but I think that would be boring, so I'll just talk about a couple of them. For the red map cards, we have rooms like Tranquil Darkness, a room where only a few Heartless appear, and Almighty Darkness, a room where stronger Heartless appear, and there's a number of variations where it changes the type of Heartless and their quantity. After that is green cards, like Martial Waking, which is a room where your attack cards are more effective, and that increases their number value across the board. But while this room is good on paper, it absolutely ruins number-based slates. There's also stuff like Lasting Days, which is a room where striking enemies in the field stuns all the Heartless in the battle. For blue map cards, we have Calm Bounty, a room with a treasure chest and no enemies, and Guarded Trove, where there's a treasure chest and enemies. There's also False Bounty, which is a room with multiple treasure chests, but only one of them is real and the rest are basically mimics. Moment's Reprieve is a room with no enemies and a save point, and is the only way to save the game in the middle of a world outside of either backtracking to Castle Oblivion's halls or completing the boss battle for the Conqueror's Respite room. Mingling Worlds is a room that, similar to a Random Joker, puts you in a randomly generated room. The biggest difference between this room and a card that actually exists called Random Joker is that the Random Joker doesn't have a number value and can fulfill any requirement, while Mingling Worlds does have a number value, so you are still limited by the room requirements. Also, Mingling Worlds doesn't seem to show up until way later in the game, at least in Sora's story. The final map card is a Moogle room, which is where there's a Moogle shop and no enemies. You can only find these in the generated Moogle rooms, and this is where you can use your Moogle points, the game's currency. Moogle points are awarded through battling enemies, destroying environmental objects and rooms, and also selling old or unwanted cards. Moogles sell packs of weapon and magic cards, with 4 packs for each of the 4 categories. The categories are separated by 3 card colors, with each pack only containing cards of that color type, while the 4th category is packs containing a mixture of card types. In each category, the 4 packs are sold in tiers, with each tier costing more Moogle points than the last. The contents of each pack are randomized, and when you've bought out all of the packs, you have to generate a new Moogle room to refresh the stock. As you climb Castle Oblivion and reach higher floors, the packs themselves and their contents become better too, which is indicated by the icon on the pack in the shop. Additionally, you get a free card pack for each first visit you make to the Moogle shop in a newly generated Moogle room. Now, while I said that the combat was divisive in this game, I don't usually see many people complaining about the field gameplay that much, outside of, recycling most of the worlds from the first game. But mechanically, the field gameplay is unique and different and pretty easy to understand. There's a bit of depth to it, but it's mostly just platforming and light exploring with a bit of math mixed in, I guess. In fact, it was compelling enough that I've seen at least one other game take direct inspiration from it and do something super similar, almost too similar. You travel through the game's setting, which is a castle. To do this, you control a little 2D Naruto as you climb floors. Every floor has multiple rooms, and there are a few different room types. The final is an unstable space, which requires a scroll to proceed into. Every scroll type summons a different room. Completing the Mugenjo unlocks a secondary mode called Hidden Mugenjo, which is the same mode and story, but from Jiraiya's perspective as they descend the castle. It's really cool that they went and added a whole second campaign after you beat the first. I think the idea that while Naruto and company are climbing the castle, there's a whole secondary story going on where someone else is in the castle. I just think it's a really neat concept. I don't think I've ever seen a game do this before. One last thing I need to mention is that the Game Boy Advance version of Chain of Memories has a multiplayer mode called Link Mode. This can be played through the use of the GBA Link cable, and in this mode, 2 players can battle each other with Sora using the deck of their choice from their existing save game. You can choose to battle on any of the worlds in the game, and outside of it being multiplayer, it works just like a normal single-player battle for both of the players involved. I imagine there's more depth to this mode, like if you adjust your deck specifically to counter the other player, but I unfortunately wasn't able to get super deep into this. This mode is a novelty at best in my opinion, but I'm pretty sure there were plenty of people who enjoyed it back in the day. Then again, I don't think I've ever met anyone as a kid who had a GBA link cable, so I wonder how many people have actually tried this mode. Anyways, that about covers the gameplay of Chain of Memories. One thing I couldn't really find a place to talk about was how cool it was to see all of the Kingdom Hearts characters, aesthetics, and worlds shrunk down in the Game Boy Advance version of the game. The basic gameplay is surprisingly good for how they adapted it from the original Kingdom Hearts, and of course, you're not gonna get much real platforming here, and that's done much better in the remake, but it's still really good. That's not even mentioning the ridiculously good GBA sound chip versions of the iconic Kingdom Hearts tracks, which sound really close to their original PS2 counterparts. But hey, I think it's time to talk about the story of Chain of Memories, and let me tell you, this story is a lot more complex than the first games, so buckle up.
Sora, Donald, and Goofy are still wandering a seemingly endless path when suddenly a mysterious black-coated figure appears in the night. The man tells Sora that along the road ahead lies something he needs, but in order to claim it, he must lose something dear to him. Sora and his companions push further ahead, encountering a massive castle, Castle Oblivion. The trio hesitantly enter the castle's pale white interior, sensing suspiciously strongly that their friends are inside. Following them is seemingly the same black-cloaked figure. Donald attempts to cast magic on the enemy, but the trio quickly realize that all of their abilities have been taken from them. The black-cloaked figure explains that in Castle Oblivion, to find is to lose, and to lose is to find. In a menacing tone, he tells Sora that in this castle, he will meet people that he's known in the past, along with people he misses. Using Sora's memories, the man creates a card with the image of Traverse Town and gives it to him. Using the card as a key, Sora opens the first door of Castle Oblivion. Through the door, Sora finds himself thrust into what looks like Traverse Town, with Donald and Goofy nowhere to be found. The cloaked figure quickly appears and explains that this isn't Traverse Town, but a facsimile created from Sora's memories. Sora's friends are not lost, but at the mercy of Castle Oblivion's cards. The figure explains the laws of Castle Oblivion. Sora can call upon the power of his friends, but only if he harnesses the cards. After a short lesson, the figure leaves Sora on his own. Using the cards, Sora wanders through the false Traverse Town until he encounters a familiar face, Leon. However, Leon not only believes he is in the real Traverse Town, he also doesn't recognize Sora, Donald, or Goofy, scoffing at the supposed mistaken identity of him. However, he remembers Sora's name and realizes that something's amiss. Sora, Donald, and Goofy meet with Leon and his allies to discuss the situation at hand. The group find that while they do know Sora, they don't remember him. They come to the conclusion that both Sora's heart and his memories are binding them, making them somehow remember their connection even though the memories of their experiences together have been lost. Sora explores Traverse Town more in an attempt to gain a better understanding of Castle Oblivion. He encounters familiar heartless enemies and defeats them before meeting back up with the Traverse Town group. Before Sora departs, Aerith makes Sora realize that this world and Aerith herself truly are just figments of Sora's mind in physical form. Sora hesitantly accepts the truth, and Aerith wants him to be vigilant because the truth in Castle Oblivion may not be what it seems due to the castle's illusionary nature. Sora, Donald, and Goofy leave Traverse Town and make their way back into the white corridors of the castle. The black cloak figure appears once again, this time joined by a similarly garbed man, but one who shows his face. The man introduces himself as Axel and taunts Sora before attacking him with his fiery chakrams. Sora seemingly defeats Axel, but Axel survives the encounter, saying it was merely a test and that Sora passed. He tells Sora that he's truly ready for Castle Oblivion and that if he trusts his memories, he'll find someone truly special, the person most important to him. Axel leaves Sora with a warning: when Sora's sleeping memories awaken, he may become a different person. Sora, Donald, and Goofy leave pondering what this could have meant. As they discuss pushing forward, Goofy mentions that his experience reminds him of the castle they visited in Hollow Bastion, because Goofy's always the smart one. In a twist, Sora and Donald have no recollection of the castle. On top of that, Jiminy's journal is mysteriously wiped, every page rendered blank. Goofy questions whether the experiences happened at all, or if it was just their imagination. With the hope of finding Riku and the king, Sora, Donald, and Goofy push deeper into the castle. Every door leads to a world Sora has visited before, with its locales and inhabitants recreated from Sora's memories. While none of them truly remember him, they still know him from the connections he's made from his heart. As the trio push deeper into the castle, Sora begins to realize that the deeper they go, the more memories they lose. They consider turning back, but Goofy reassures them that no matter what happens, they can never forget their friends. With a renewed sense of motivation, the trio continue the climb. Sora remembers his promise to Kairi and how he's going to return return to her, clutching the good luck charm she once gave him. But slowly, he begins to remember another girl who he also grew up with from the islands. He remembers that she would always draw him and Riku on her sketch pad, but one day she suddenly disappeared. While he does remember her clearly, he struggles to remember her name. Meanwhile, the black cloaked figures are revealed to be numerous, calling themselves the Organization. They work together in the shadows as a group in order to manipulate Sora's memories to accomplish their own murky goals. Its members include the cocky Axel, the sadistic Larxene, the manipulative Vexen, and the ringleader Marluxia. As Sora, Donald, and Goofy climb the castle, the organization conspires. However, Axel reveals an overall conspiracy to overthrow and take over the wider organization, a plot that seemingly involves multiple members within Castle Oblivion. Larxene reveals that she too is involved in the plan before confronting Sora directly. Larxene meets Sora and taunts him, asking him how it feels to get rid of worthless memories in order to awaken, in her words, the true memories. She teases him about his inability to remember the girl's name, telling him that not only is she in Castle Oblivion, she's being held captive and Sora has to save her. Larxene attacks Sora, saying that she's one of those very bad guys that he has to fight. Sora drops the good luck charm, but unbeknownst to him, its appearance has changed. Sora finally remembers the girl's name, Naminé, the girl he now thinks gave him the good luck charm. But in remembering Naminé, he loses his memories of Kairi, all of them replaced with memories of Naminé. Sora and Larxene battle, but Sora wins. Larxene retreats and reconvenes with Axel and Vexen, a scientist. Vexen proposes an experiment to test Sora, but really is only looking for an excuse to implement his new creation. Shortly thereafter, Sora encounters Riku inside the Castle Oblivion. He excitedly greets him, but Riku responds with aggression, accusing Sora of forgetting about him in favor of Naminé. Riku, also remembering Naminé as their childhood friend, tells Sora that he never cared about her. Riku attacks Sora, his appearance changing to that of Ansem possessed form. Sora wins the fight and Riku retreats. Feeling defeated, Sora pushes further into the castle to save Naminé. After visiting more worlds from his memories, he encounters Vexen, who claims to come to collect Sora's debt. Vexen tells Sora that he owes him for reuniting him with Riku. Sora accuses Vexen of controlling Riku and the two battle. Sora wins the battle, but Vexen tells him that this was by design. Vexen materializes a card from an unknown world from Sora's memories, claiming that they were locked in the other side of his heart. Sora uses the card to enter the world of Twilight Town, a world he doesn't recognize. Meanwhile, Axel, Larxene, and Marluxia meet, and Marluxia gives Axel the order to eliminate Vexen for his treacherous acts against the organization. Axel leaves to pursue Vexen. In Twilight Town, Sora clutches his good luck charm and recounts the story of when Naminé gave it to him. He explains that when they were little, there was a meteor shower which scared Naminé. Sora promised to protect Naminé from the meteor shower, and she thanked him with the good luck charm, a symbol of the promise he believes they shared. Sora explores Twilight Town and reaches an old mansion. There he begins to feel like he's been in Twilight Town before. While he has forgotten the places he's been before, this memory feels different. Before he can linger on the thought, Vexen appears. He reminds Sora that his memory of Twilight Town exists on the other side of Sora's heart, and it's his heart that remembers. Vexen offendingly refers to Riku as his Riku, engaging Sora before they battle. Sora defeats Vexen and demands he put Riku back to the way he was. Vexen tells Sora that if he continues to seek Naminé, he'll lose his heart and become Marluxia's pawn. Before Vexen can say more, Axel strikes him down. Axel coldly tells Vexen that they're nobodies, but he will make Vexen more than a nobody, nothing at all. Axel executes Vexen before retreating into a dark portal to rendezvous with Larxene and Marluxia. Marluxia and Larxene reveal that they used Vexen both as a way to test Sora's strength, but also test Axel's allegiance to their goal of overthrowing the organization. Larxene reveals that their plan is to turn Sora into a pawn, to help them accomplish this goal by manipulating his memories. They decide to finally let Sora meet Naminé, who's both their prisoner and the person responsible for manipulating Sora's memories at their behest. Naminé shows great remorse for her actions, wondering how she can face Sora after what she's done. Axel intentionally allows Naminé to escape, revealing that he does not actually have an allegiance to Marluxia and Larxene's planned coup. Sora returns to Castle Oblivion, but is stopped by Riku. Riku says he's protecting Naminé from Sora because he made her promise to keep her safe. He recounts a story from his childhood where Naminé was scared of a meteor shower, but Riku promised to protect her. Naminé thanked Riku with a good luck charm, a symbol of the promise he believed they shared. Sora tells Riku that this was his memory, but Riku adamantly disagrees. He reveals the good luck charm to Riku's disbelief. Riku reveals his own identical good luck charm, calling Sora's fake and attacking him. Defeated again, Riku quickly retreats, leaving behind his good luck charm. Sora picks up the charm, which morphs into a card representing Destiny Islands. Before going to the islands, Donald and Goofy hesitate and question Sora about his sudden change in demeanor about Naminé. Sora becomes uncharacteristically angry, accusing Donald and Goofy of trying to make him abandon Naminé. Sora rushes ahead, not caring if Donald or Goofy follow. Sora visits Destiny Islands and encounters a recreation of Riku, though he struggles to remember him at first. Suddenly, like the night Sora left the islands, the world falls to darkness after defeating powerful foes. Sora is finally united with Naminé. They share a heartfelt moment that Sora believes is a reunion, but this Naminé is revealed to be a facade. The real Naminé appears alongside the facade and tells him that she never truly existed, let alone in Sora's memories. Sora shows her the good luck charm, adamant that she is the person from his memories, but Naminé tries her best to make Sora remember the real person he cares about most, Kairi. The good luck charm morphs back to its original form, and for a brief moment Sora sees the facade become Kairi once again, though he's unable to fully remember her. Sora returns to the Castle Oblivion and confronts Naminé. He hesitantly accepts that Naminé isn't the girl from his childhood, but before she can fully reveal that she manipulated his memories, Riku interrupts them. He tells Sora that his memory is wrong and that he's the one meant to protect Naminé. Sora and Riku have one final battle. Sora wins, but Riku then strikes him down with a dark blast before Riku can deal the final blow. Naminé demands him to stop. Riku seemingly glitches out and collapses on the floor. In the same moment, Larxene appears and tells Sora that this version of Riku isn't the real Riku, but instead a replica of Riku created by Vexen with implanted memories. She also reveals the true nature of Naminé's powers. She can manipulate memories through rearranging them, changing them, or outright creating new memories of events that never took place. Sora realizes that his memories are illusions created by Naminé, and Larxene laments Axel's betrayal, costing them their plan to turn Sora into their puppet. Larxene attacks Sora with Naminé making a futile attempt to protect him. Larxene taunts Sora for caring about Naminé even though he doesn't actually know her. Sora says that while his memories may be fake, the promise he remembers making them to protect Naminé still feels real to him. Donald and Goofy return to help Sora, reminding him that they promised him that they'd stick together. The group battles Larxene and defeat her. Larxene collapses, fading away from existence. Sora, Donald, and Goofy talk to Naminé and she explains in detail how she replaced Sora's memory, including creating the fake memories of his promise. Naminé and Sora never knew each other, nor did Naminé ever live on the islands. She explains that she only did it because Marluxia threatened to lock her in the castle forever if she didn't obey. Sora tells Naminé that while he isn't happy about the memory manipulation, he still currently has fond memories of her and doesn't want to see her sad. Naminé says she could fix everyone's memories if they could make it to the 13th floor of the castle, a task that will require them to defeat Marluxia himself. Sora pushes forward to tackle the final challenge, Castle Oblivion itself. In the shadows, Axel appears before Marluxia to his surprise. He accuses Axel of treason, only for Axel to point out the irony, given that Marluxia is the real traitor for planning a coup. Axel attacks Marluxia for his treacherous plans, but Marluxia uses Naminé as a shield, to which Axel scoffs. Seemingly intent on attacking anyways, Axel reappears to attack just in time for Sora to come and save her. Sora defeats Axel, who disappears in a dark portal. Sora then confronts Marluxia, who demands Naminé erase his memories completely, which would also, in effect, destroy his heart. Naminé refuses the order because of Sora's kindness to her, even when she deceived him in the first place. But before they can continue, Rika's replica suddenly appears, getting Naminé away from Marluxia while accepting the nature of his false existence. Sora and Marluxia have a cinematic final battle, and Sora comes out as the victor, destroying Marluxia once and for all. Riku's replica laments that his memories aren't real, and Sora tries to reassure him that while his memories may be fake, he has a heart of his own. Riku replica tells Sora that he's a good person and departs into the unknown. Naminé explains to Sora, Donald, and Goofy and Jimmy how she can restore their memories. She doesn't erase memories, but rather rearranges them in such a way that she could hide them away and manipulate them. But with enough time, she could reconnect them and make them the way they were before. However, in order to restore the group's memories, they'll have to give up all of the memories and everything that happened in Castle Oblivion, including Naminé. Naminé gives Sora the choice of either reclaiming his old memories or keeping the memories of her and Castle Oblivion. Reluctantly, Sora chooses to have his original memories restored. Naminé brings Sora to the large pod in order to get their memories back. They have to sleep in a large pod while Naminé restores them. While they know they'll forget Naminé when they wake up, Jiminy makes sure to leave a single note in his journal. Thank Naminé. Sora promises Naminé that when he wakes up, he'll still find her and they'll become friends for real. While he won't remember the promise, his memories can only be rearranged, not erased, so the promise will still be inside of him somewhere. nowhere. Sora climbs into the pod with Namine reminding him of another promise he made to someone else in the past. Sora clutches his good luck charm as the pod closes, putting him into a deep sleep as his memories are slowly restored. The memory of Namine fading away, forgotten, but not lost. After Ansem's defeat in helping Sora close the door to darkness, Riku floats in an endless space when a voice calls out to him, telling him to remain asleep. The voice tells him that he didn't have the strength to overcome the darkness, so he drifted here in the place between light and darkness. A card featuring Hollow Bastion materializes in front of Riku, which the voice describes as a door to the truth. Riku takes the card and is sent to Castle Oblivion. Riku uses the card and enters a world that looks like Hollow Bastion. Immediately, the voice explains to Riku that this version of Hollow Bastion isn't real, it's a recreation based on his memory. Riku attempts to ask the voice for more information, but it becomes silent, leaving Riku on his own. Riku wanders through Hollow Bastion, painfully remembering his time living as Maleficent's pawn, which the voices make sure to remind him of. Riku asks why he hasn't seen any of the people from his memories, and the voice says that it's because he cast them all aside in pursuit of darkness when he followed Maleficent. The voice continues, telling Riku that his heart is empty and hollow, only residual darkness, which Riku vehemently denies, saying he rejected the darkness. Riku moves onward, finally encountering Maleficent, who is aware she's a fragment of Riku's memory. She tells Riku that his heart still yearns for darkness, but he rejects the notion. He says he turned to darkness because his heart was weak, but he has learned from that experience. Riku fights Maleficent and defeats her before returning to Castle Oblivion as the voice haunts him yet again. It guides him into accepting the darkness and then reveals itself none other than Ansem, who desires to turn Riku back into a dark vessel. Riku attacks Ansem but is easily knocked away. Ansem tries to convince him to embrace the darkness to become powerful yet again, but Riku continuously refuses. Ansem continues to pressure Riku, but suddenly a floating light appears and interrupts, emitting the voice of King Mickey. Mickey tells Riku that he's not alone, and the light implants itself into Riku. A newly inspired Riku challenges Ansem to battle. Ansem loses, scoffing at Riku's attempt to dismiss the darkness. He gives Riku a world card, insisting that he'll change his mind about embracing the darkness before retreating. Ansem manipulates the darkness in Riku's heart, giving him the choice to use it or not. Meanwhile, organization members Zexion, Lexius, and Vexen rendezvous. Zexion tells the group that an unknown visitor has arrived in Castle Oblivion's basement. After some time, Zexion identifies the visitor as Riku, who somehow emerged from the realm of darkness seemingly on his own. Zexion ponders why Riku appeared in Castle Oblivion, and Vexen reveals that it's because Riku's existence resonates with Sora's, who has also just arrived in Castle Oblivion. He tells the others that Marluxia is using Namine's powers to manipulate Sora's memories in order to turn Sora into his pawn. Vexen believes that Riku is a higher value target than Sora and leaves to pursue him. Riku begins his ascent into Castle Oblivion with King Mickey tagging along through an intangible hologram, using some of his powers to reach into the castle from a distance. Mickey asks Riku to fight the darkness inside, using the light of Kingdom Hearts to show him the way. Mickey promises to find a way to reach Riku for real, and Riku ventures even deeper into the castle. Soon after, Riku encounters Vexen. Riku asks Vexen if he's working with Ansem, to which he replies yes, but only in the sense that he's working with an Ansem that Riku isn't familiar with, referring to this other Ansem as a nobody. After some discussion about Riku's darkness or lack thereof, Riku challenges Vexen to a fight, to which Vexen obliges. The fight ends in a draw, and Vexen thanks Riku for the invaluable data the fight provided. After his fight with Vexen, Riku almost immediately encounters someone who looks and sounds exactly like himself. The second Riku immediately reveals that he's an exact replica made from Vexen's data. Riku calls him a fake, but replica Riku says that he's not fake. He thinks that while he may not be real, he is better because he fears nothing, including embracing the darkness. Replica Riku attacks Riku, their fight ending with Riku's victory. Riku taunts the replica, who vows to defeat Riku the next time they fight. Riku tries to attack the replica before he can escape, but is repelled by the darkness. Replica Riku retreats, calling Riku a coward as he leaves. Riku runs after him, but is intercepted by Ansem, who compares Riku unfavorably to the replica, as the replica is willing to embrace the darkness. Riku once again tries to attack Ansem, but fails. Ansem assured Riku that it's only a matter of time before he calls upon the darkness. Zexion and Lexius discuss Marluxia's use of Namine's powers. While they agree that Sora would be useful if the plan succeeds, they are unsure as to whether they can trust Marluxia in the first place. Replica Riku soon returns, and Vexen plans to have him soon challenge Sora. Axel, Vexen, and Larxene rendezvous. Vexen offers Replica Riku as a test of Sora's strength, but really this is just an excuse to implement his new creation. Replica Riku walks in on the meeting, and Larxene tells the replica that Namine might be able to replace all of his memories with those of the real Riku. Replica Riku takes this as an insult, wholly believing that the real Riku is a coward. In spite of his protests and attempt to attack Larxene, Replica Riku is struck down and forced to comply to Naminé's horror. A short time passes and Larxene goads Naminé and her manipulation of Sora's memories, and Replica Riku intervenes to defend Naminé. He presents the good luck charm he believes she gave him, confirming his memories have been altered. Larxene insists that because of Naminé's power, it won't be long before Sora forgets even Kairi, but Naminé rebukes the idea and says Sora could never truly forget Kairi. Instead, Sora's feelings of Kairi will only become stronger because she is, in her own words, Kairi's shadow. Sometime later, Lexaeus tells Zexion that Vexen had been struck down by Axel. Lexaeus worries that Sora's relative ease in defeating Vexen, even under the influence of Naminé's manipulation. He believes that Sora is a dangerous asset for Marluxia to control. As a countermeasure, they commit to somehow controlling Riku to use him against him. Riku, having fought his way through many recreated versions of worlds, continues to progress further into Castle Oblivion. However, his path is suddenly blocked by Lexaeus, who Riku quickly identifies as another nobody. Lexaeus laments Riku's fear of embracing the darkness, especially when Riku has the rare potential to control it. Riku once again rejects this notion and in response is attacked by Lexaeus. As they battle, Lexaeus deals heavy blows to Riku, easily overpowering him. As Lexaeus approaches him to deal a final blow, Riku suddenly embraces the dark power and destroys Lexaeus in one blow. As Lexaeus fades away, he regrets picking the fight in the first place. Ansem's voice calls out to Riku, whose heart is now drowning in a dark void. Ansem teases him, mocking Riku's constant focus on the thought of him. As Ansem reaches out to take control of Riku, King Mickey once again intervenes and saves him. Riku awakens from a daze once again in Castle Oblivion and seemingly no worse for wear. He realizes that while Mickey is not physically with him, he is still with him in spirit. Elsewhere, Zexion laments the thinning of the organization's ranks, to which Axel teases him about who could be the next to be struck down. Zexion tells Axel that their plan to use Riku is no longer necessary because Marluxia's planned coup has failed. Riku is not only a loose end, but also dangerous. Zexion confronts Riku directly, telling him that their leader Marluxia has been struck down by Sora. Until this point, Riku didn't know that Sora was in the castle. Zexion uses this against Riku, shaming him for the darkness in his heart and asking him if he could really face his friend in such a state when Sora's purpose, in his words, is to battle the darkness. Zexion gives Riku a card representing Destiny Islands and retreats. Riku visits Destiny Islands, encountering his old friends before running into Kairi, though she quickly disappears. Zexion appears on the islands and continues to goad Riku, making him doubt his friendships with the people he grew up with and blaming him for destroying the islands. He compares Riku to a giant dark side Heartless before forcing him to fight it. Riku wins the fight, but then is forced to face a facsimile of Sora, who is disgusted with what Riku has become. This version of Sora calls Riku a pawn of the darkness and calls down a burst of energy, sending Riku to a void of light. As Riku gives up, he suddenly hears Kairi's voice. She tells him that instead of running away from the darkness and the light, he should use both equally as his strength. The darkness itself isn't his weakness. His weakness is only his fear of the darkness. He can't get rid of the darkness in his heart, but he can face it bravely and never give into it. In the end, the light and darkness will make him stronger. In the void of light, Riku confidently calls upon the darkness, bringing him back to the island. The fake Sora is revealed to be Zexion, who is shocked that Riku was able to overcome the blinding light. In desperation, Zexion battles Riku but loses. As he fades away, he again tries to taunt Riku and his fear of darkness. But Riku tells Zexion he's no longer afraid of it and strikes him with a final blow. Zexion barely manages to escape through a dark portal but is greeted by Replica Riku and Axel in desperation. He says that they could use the replica to defeat the real Riku. Seeing this as an opportunity to destroy Zexion and tie up loose ends, Axel tells the replica that if he could get the kind of power the real Riku doesn't have, he could become his own unique person, not just a replica or a clone of Riku. Replica Riku takes out Zexion, with Axel telling him he knew too much. Riku, having won the battle, returns to Castle Oblivion's corridors but is still haunted by Ansem's voice. Ansem begins to use his influence to control Riku's body directly, but Mickey's orb of light saves him one last time. Then Mickey finally reunites with Riku in the flesh, keeping his promise. Riku is relieved to finally have a friendly face around, but he asks how Mickey was able to find him. Mickey explains that he found a card, and the card somehow led him to Riku. Riku takes the card and uses it to enter Twilight Town, a world he doesn't recognize. When Riku arrives, Mickey is nowhere to be found. Ansem suddenly appears in front of him and demands to battle him alone. Riku refuses the battle, realizing that this manifestation of Ansem isn't the true Ansem who is lying dormant in his heart. This is someone else taking the form of Ansem, a man who reveals himself as Diz. Diz tells Riku that he is special because he exists between light and dark, in a place he calls Twilight. He says that once Riku meets Naminé, he'll have to make a choice. Before Riku can ask any questions, Diz disappears. Riku wanders Twilight Town's old mansion and is confronted by Replica Riku. The Replica realizes that Riku is no longer scared of his darkness. Replica Riku aggressively confides to Riku his frustration of not having an identity of his own, being someone whose entire existence and memories are based on someone else's. He thought that finding a new strength would make him unique and whole, but in the end, he believes that as long as Riku is around, he can only live in the shadow. Replica Riku battles the real Riku one final time and loses. He lies on the ground telling Riku that death doesn't scare him because he never felt like a real person in the first place. He asks what will happen to his heart after he dies, unsure as to whether his heart is the same as normal people's. Riku tells him that his heart will go somewhere, maybe even to the same place, that Riku's will someday. Replica Riku makes peace with himself before disappearing, and Riku leaves to find Naminé. Naminé awaits Riku in the pod room where Sora sleeps to regain his memories. She invites Riku in and shows him the pod with Sora peacefully sleeping inside. She explains everything that happened to Sora and tells Riku that he has his own choice to make. She tells Riku that Ansem lingers inside the darkness in his heart and someday he'll wake up and take Riku over just like he did the first time. Naminé offers to use her powers to put a lock on Riku's heart, keeping Ansem forever at bay. However, Riku would have to sacrifice his memories to do this. Riku considers it for a moment, reminiscing about his time with Sora and teasing him for, in his own words, taking a nap. Riku chooses not to take Naminé's offer and to instead fight Ansem head on, even with the risk of Ansem's darkness overtaking him. Riku also realizes that when he was consumed by the Void of Light, it was Naminé taking the form of Kairi who inspired him to embrace both the light and darkness. Riku departs and heads back in the Castle Oblivion and is greeted by both Mickey and Diz. Diz tells Riku and Mickey that the organization will pursue them from this point forward. He gives them the same black robes the organization use in order to keep the organization off the radar and repel the darkness, revealing that the organization themselves are susceptible to darkness in the same way as normal people. Diz sees Mickey and Riku off, telling Riku to finish his business with Ansem. Mickey tells Riku that they can defeat Ansem together, but Riku refuses and says he'll face him alone. He tries to ask Mickey to destroy him if he loses the fight against Ansem, but Mickey refuses and instead promises to save Riku if the fight goes south. Riku leaves Mickey to face off with Ansem. Ansem reveals himself to Riku, making one last appeal to him to fully embrace his darkness. Riku does not concede and outright insults Ansem before challenging him to the final battle. Riku fights Ansem in a grueling battle, but Riku barely manages to defeat him. Defeated, Ansem vows to return before exploding into a great abyss of darkness. Riku is overtaken, but Mickey appears before him and saves him. Triumphant, Riku and Mickey head for Castle Oblivion's entrance. Riku says that he can't go home yet because he still faintly senses Ansem. Mickey tells Riku that from now on, he'll walk alongside him on the path he takes. Wearing their dark robes, Riku and Mickey leave Castle Oblivion, finding Diz on paths outside. Diz tells Riku he has to choose a road to light or a road to darkness. Riku chooses neither and takes the middle road. Diz asks him if he's choosing the road to Twilight, and Riku tells him no, it's the road to dawn. In Twilight Town, a boy with blonde hair stands atop the clock tower, peering into the town's horizon.
So obviously Chain of Memories introduces a lot of characters and new concepts and mystery and intrigue, and there's so many things that begin with Chain of Memories that ripple throughout the rest of the series to this day. Beloved new characters, including new allies and adversaries, along with the introduction of the concept of nobodies. And there's even questions here that I doubt you would even think to ask the first time you experience this story. Did those slain organization members really die? Is Sora really going to lose all of the memories of what happened in Castle Oblivion? What's gonna happen to Naminé? Who was that blonde-haired kid at the end of the game? At the beginning of this Chain of Memories segment, I said that the non-numbered games are just as important as the numbered games, and I hope that by this point you understand why. Because Chain of Memories establishes this in a really big way. Yeah, Sora has seemingly forgotten the events of this game, but there's so many little dangling threads now. You could never just pretend this didn't happen. Did you really think they'd introduce Diz and just never mention him again? Overall though, the story of this game signals the trend toward large overlapping unfolding arcs that the Kingdom Hearts series would eventually embrace. The first game was, for the most part, a self-contained adventure with the door left open for more stories, whereas Chain of Memories opened all kinds of doors, no pun intended. Now let's talk about the worlds of Chain of Memories. This time it's going to be a bit different because the worlds are, for the most part, reused from the original game. Same characters, same aesthetics, same themes. The biggest difference is how they're laid out due to this game's central gameplay mechanic with the ever-changing rooms. Of course, the entire point of Chain of Memories is to revisit worlds, so this isn't a criticism, but it also means that it'd be redundant to just recap stuff I've already said. But let's get started. The title screen for both the original Game Boy Advance version and the remake have the same features pretty much. First, there's a new rendition of Dearly Beloved that sounds almost the same as the first, but after a few measures, a new underlying melody featuring a melody from the previous game plays alongside the main melody before fading away. The visual is a piece of artwork depicting Sora seemingly midair, but what's cool about this is that once you've unlocked Reverse Rebirth, the title screen changes to Riku on the opposite end. This is a great detail and sets a standard for this series because we actually see something similar to this return in future titles. Also, I like the addition of a bit of animation with the falling cards behind the logo. It's a nice touch that makes it feel a smidge more dynamic. This introduction uses the same PLANiTb remix of Simple and Clean as the first game, and it starts with a few shots of the first game's introduction. Then there's a montage of a bunch of moments from across the entirety of the first game, and it functions as almost sort of a recap. Though, out of context, you might not understand what's going on unless you played the first game. It's a serviceable introduction, but probably not my favorite. I do like that it's still timed to the tempo and beats of the song, though. My favorite thing it does, though, is end with Sora and Kairi getting separated. There's just something super impactful about that. What a perfect way to end that cutscene. After the normal musical intro, we get a recap of the closing scene of the first game with Sora, Donald, and Goofy, before transitioning straight into the crossroads sequence with the robed man. A really interesting thing about this is that a fully pre-rendered movie version of this intro actually exists on the Game Boy Advance version's cartridge. The remake version has additional voice acting, but it's stupidly impressive that they managed to cram a fully animated intro onto a Game Boy Advance cartridge at all, along with a handful of other scenes, including the ending. Anyways, after this scene, Sora, Donald, and Goofy, along with Jiminy, can't forget Jiminy, head into Castle Oblivion. Castle Oblivion is the hub that connects all of the worlds that Sora and Riku visit in Chain of Memories. Beyond that, it's also fully explorable as the final world that you tackle, but I'll talk more about that at the end. Before I move on, I just want to say that while Sora gets some story stuff in these worlds, usually in the form of a fun amnesiac retread, Riku gets basically no real Disney-specific story stuff in any of these worlds. Most of his stuff happens in the in-between areas in Castle Oblivion, and at the end of the game with just a couple of exceptions. Traverse Town is the first example of how this game brings over the essence of the world, while still allowing you to explore entirely different map layouts. The entire aesthetic of this world matches what we saw in the first game's first district, with cobbled pavement, orange glowy street lamps and lanterns, and buildings surrounding the area with maze-like wood molding. Notably, the original areas from the first game are intact in these worlds, but they only appear in cutscenes that can't actually be explored. There's a couple of tutorial fights in this world, but I wouldn't consider those boss fights, and the boss fight for this world, like almost every world, is reused from the first game. In this case, guard armor. While the mechanics of the boss are pretty similar, it has each appendage being individual targets, the actual battle itself works a bit differently, obviously, because of the card-based gameplay, and this is, again, true for every single reused boss. Like I mentioned in the overview, most bosses have special mechanics related to the gimmick card. When you activate the gimmick card for the guard armor, it stuns it and makes it collapse for a short time. When Sora departs Traverse Town and returns to Castle Oblivion, he encounters Axel, who initiates the first Organization 13 boss battle. In this fight, Axel uses his two chakrams as melee weapons that he can swing or cover and fire, and he can use them as projectiles. Hilariously, if you're like me and accidentally bring out Donald to use a fire spell, it heals him. Axel has a slate called Firewall that summons this huge pillar of fire that covers the entire floor of the arena to deal damage, along with a couple of other fire-based projectiles. This is the first boss battle in the game that really tests your mettle, but fortunately it's still pretty forgiving. After this fight, you're able to select the next world that you visit from a number of options, so the order that I cover these is not necessarily the order that everyone might choose, but it is the order that I chose for this particular playthrough. Olympus Coliseum is back, and this time it works just like the other worlds, meaning that technically this is the first time in the series that you can actually explore Olympus Coliseum, but I want to emphasize technically. Cloud's the first boss here, and he's got a similar moveset to what we saw last time, but man, does he spam Sonic Blade this time. I think maybe it's because Sonic Blade as a slate is a minimum number of strikes, but it definitely still felt like a lot of Sonic Blades were happening here. The next big fight is against Hades, and his moves are similar to the last games too. You're gonna hear that a lot, just so you know. He's one of the few Disney bosses without a gimmick cards, so you just have to keep hitting him and avoid his Firaga Ball slate, where he hurls a giant ball of fire at you. I actually got a game over to this fight the first time around, but managed to beat it on my second try. Oh, and by the way, the stories in these Chain of Memory worlds sometimes end a bit abrupt. It's Halloween Town again, and the trio's got their special outfits, though they unfortunately don't get these in the original Game Boy Advance version. The world's boss battle is Oogie Boogie once again in his torture chamber. This seems the same as the first games on the surface, but it works a little bit differently. The actual battle arena is no longer a roulette wheel, but Oogie is still on the second platform with high gates stopping you from getting near him. He tosses dice on the field, and these have varying effects based on their rolls. It seems the best strategy is to break his cards, with each break lowering the gates a little bit. I really enjoy that they kept the essence of this fight intact, even with the total gameplay overhaul. It's similar enough that you can figure out how the fight works, but different enough that it still feels fresh. Wonderland kind of loses something in this game. I think the fun mechanics like the growth stuff and the room-changing orientation gave this world a lot of flavor in the original, but in Chain of Memories, it functions just like every other world, with nothing really setting it apart outside of its aesthetics. The story is like a Mad Libs version of the story from the first game too. There's two special fights in the world, the first being against the card soldiers in the Queen's Courtyard, but unlike the first game's cogwheel mechanic, this one is just a straight up battle against the cards with no extra secondary objective. The second fight is, you guessed it, Trickmaster. This fight's the same arena as the first games, which means that the best way to hit the boss is by jumping up on the table. It actually has some pretty powerful cards in its deck, with card values of 6 and higher being really common compared to some previous fights. I do want to quickly draw special attention to Riku's deck in this world. As I mentioned earlier, his deck changes depending on the world you're visiting, and man, does the Wonderland deck suck! There's very few attack cards, and none of them go beyond a value of 5. He's got a good number of enemy cards, but oh boy, is it still rough here. This makes his trek through Wonderland a bit more frustrating than some of the other worlds, in my opinion. Monstro retains the pulsating purple living insides aesthetic while removing the horrible labyrinthian layout I disliked from the last game. I see that as a win for Chain of Memories, and I'd say that the more straightforward level design here allows me to appreciate the world's aesthetics and music a little bit more than I did before. The story of Monstro is unfortunately less interesting and has no antagonistic Sora and Riku stuff for obvious reasons, but it still somehow hits some really similar beats all the way down to you eventually learning high jump here. The boss fight is, you guessed it, Parasite Cage again. This time it's a little tougher because the only platforms you can walk on without taking acid damage are small and constantly rotating. Fortunately, the gimmick card makes all the platforms in acid disappear, giving you a clear platform to stand on to deal consistent damage for a short time. Monstro in this game feels almost like filler, which is unfortunate, but also I don't know how they'd make it interesting without that dynamic between Sora and Riku that we had from the last game. Agrabah's back with the aesthetic and music of the city fully intact, but with the total removal of the Cave of Wonders. Well, for the most part, at least. Weirdly, the aesthetic actually kind of works with Chain of Memories as like room mechanic, since the original world was already layered and geometric with a high sense of verticality. And as you've probably guessed, the world's boss is a two-part Jafar battle. As we've seen before, it's pretty similar to the original, but using the gimmick card on Jafar raises all the floor platforms, making it a lot easier to move around in the fight. Weirdly, even though the setup is in front of the palace for this fight, the fight itself takes place in the Cave of Wonders like the first game. The mechanics are incredibly similar too. After Sora heads back into Castle Oblivion, he's faced with Larxene. Larxene is incredibly reliant on a mixture of speed, projectile blade attacks, and thunder magic. Unfortunately for her, I now had one of the most broken slates in the game, Lethal Frame. This slate stops time and allows Sora to deal a number of heavy blows at high speed before time resumes and the opponent takes all of the built-up damage at once. I set up my deck to allow me to straight up spam this slate, and it made the fight way easier. Once I ran out, I used Sonic Blade to end the fight. I know, I'm super good at video games. In an interesting move, Atlantica is back, but there's no swimming mechanics this time. You're just kind of walking underwater. Funnily enough, Sora actually comments on this, but they don't really dig into it too much. Unfortunately, unlike Monstro, this world's aesthetics are not saved by the simplified navigation for me. It's still mostly gray rocks as an environment. I can't say I'm too thrilled to explore this place a second time. In fact, it's sort of got the opposite problem of Monstro. The lack of swimming and changed up mechanics accentuates how boring this world's design is. The boss fight is an adaptation of the second fight against Ursula from the last game. Here you're on a platform and she attacks you with her tentacles. To hurt her, you have to take out the tentacles first, then she gets close enough for you to actually hit her head, which is the main target for a short time before the tentacles come back and the cycle repeats. I find this a lot weaker than the first game's Ursula fight, which honestly makes me wonder why they chose to include this world at all. It kind of made sense in the first game with the swimming mechanics, but in this game taking away the swimming mechanics just makes it feel almost pointless. Of course, The Little Mermaid is incredibly popular and maybe they felt like they had to include it. That or the game might have been a bit too short with an entire world missing. Who knows? All I know is that this version of Atlantica is almost a lateral move from the last game with no real improvements, yet is somehow more forgettable to me. I know that probably sounds hypocritical given that I dislike the swimming mechanics, but at least the jankiness was memorable. After you go back to Castle Oblivion, Sora faces off with Riku's replica, who Sora at this point still believes is the real Riku. The fight is comparable to the Ansem-possessed Riku Riku fight from Hollow Bastion in the last game. He uses the Soul Eater sword and deals a lot of the same attacks, but in true professional gamer fashion, I spam the hell out of Lethal Frame and Sonic Blade to make quick work of this guy. Similar to Agrabah, Neverland is interesting in that even though it's broken up in the same way as all the other worlds in this game, the original version of this world felt very similarly broken up, making this feel a lot more familiar to me. Of course, the distinct areas are still only seen in cutscenes, but the actual rooms still evoke the rooms from the original game. Well, outside of the giant pits that lead to the abyss on the edges of the rooms, but still, Sora learns Glide here right off the bat, an ability that I don't even think is available in the Game Boy Advance version of the game. The story's also been changed since, again, no antagonistic Riku to deal with, but unlike Monstro, it's actually quite a bit different and more heavily involves Wendy. Unlike the last game, the boss fight is a one-on-one with Hook, and there's no flight or anything. Not that I needed it anyways, because I used my 5 million IQ Lethal Frame strat, and at this point, all I'm doing is adding more and more Lethal Frame slates to my deck, with any additional space going to Sonic Blade. I don't think Hook has a gimmick card, but I'm so awesome at this game, I wouldn't have even needed it. After this fight, Sora goes back to Castle Oblivion and faces off with Riku Replica once again. Man, I really wish I could tell you how this fight differs from the first, but unfortunately I was too busy being an absolute winner in this fight with Lethal Frame. It's actually wild how good I am at this game, right? And listen, I'm no one-trick pony. If you think I finished off this fight with Sonic Blade, you'd be mistaken, because for this fight, I pulled out my maximum style trump card, the Goofy Tornado Level 2, baby! This is gonna sound controversial, but there's something I really like about Hollow Bastion's aesthetics being sort of evened out and turned into these bespoke rooms for gameplay. Sort of like Neverland, the style totally works for exploring a grand castle like the one in Hollow Bastion. Also, even though we're late in Sora's story, this is the very first world Riku visits. The video is just going in the order that I picked for Sora. This is the world, though, where the game's 3-act structure really starts to become a limitation. The story beats feel like they're spaced out in a really awkward way because the game is structured rigidly with the keycard rooms. They have to fit each scene into discrete segments behind these rooms, even if it hurts the pacing. This kind of sucks because the world story is pretty interesting, with Belle trying to save Beast from Maleficent and straight up sacrificing herself in the process. Anyways, Maleficent turns into a dragon, and that's the world's boss fight. The fight itself looks and plays a lot like the first games, and while Lethal Frame works, it's not nearly as effective against non-humanoid enemies like this. I tried spamming it, but it was a very slow process. Using the gimmick card makes a platform appear, and if you jump on it, you can directly control where it moves, giving you free reign to attack anywhere and basically fly around for a short while. Or you can use it to, you know, get right up in her face so you can use more slates on her. This was the first boss battle in a while where I couldn't just blindly spam slates, and I think that's great because it forced me to actually show you that I can totally beat bosses without them. I really am the whole pro gamer package, I think.
Oh my god, he played the game! Way to go. Do you want a cookie or something?
Like I said, I kind of like the direction they took with this version of Hollow Bastion, and Belle is actually given a role here. While she's still a sort of damsel in distress, she at least has agency and is a real character, unlike the first game. Also, they straight up let her die in this game, at least kind of, and that's wild to me. However, while I do like the refreshed aesthetic changes because of the discrete rooms, that sense of danger we saw in the last game is admittedly kind of missing here. Outside of maybe some stronger enemies, it does just feel like another reskin of all the worlds we've already visited, which is something this game suffers from over the long term. Pooh is back in the 100-acre wood, and this version of the world is another vehicle for minigames. Though it's unlike all of the other worlds in that it's an actual explorable world without any of the cards or rooms or anything. It's just the environments recycled from the first game. There's no torn pages or anything to collect this time around, just some good old-fashioned minigames and a super simple story about Pooh once again losing his friends. The first minigame is Veggie Panic. In this one, 2 vegetables roll down a hill towards you and you have to knock them in the proper direction. The second is Balloon Glider, a game where you're flying up a tree with the power of helium balloons. The goal is to reach the treetop while also collecting as many prizes as possible. Next is Tigger's Jump-a-thon. In this one, you have to jump on the same stumps as Tigger in what is quite literally a version of that electronic Simon game. We've seen this before. Next is Bumble Rumble. In this one, you're given a special card deck and you have to beat 50 bees with them before they reduce Pooh's honey gauge. I am absolutely terrible at this minigame, by the way. Like, legitimately, I really messed this one up and I was not having a good time. I tried it a few times too. It just never really clicked for me, I guess.
You lost during the Winnie the Pooh minigame? Are you f***ing serious?
Next up is my favorite, Whirlwind Plunge. In this one, you're plunging from the sky and have to collect prizes as Sora falls, like an almost on-rails kind of thing. There's fun shapes of orbs to collect while you do your best to avoid other falling debris like trees and honeycombs. If you hit an obstacle, Sora lets go of Pooh and has to retrieve him before he can collect any more points. Honestly, I hope they bring this back in a future title in some form. Like, they could base an entire game's premise on this specific mechanic, like having Sora just dive from the sky to the next world he visits or something. Wouldn't it be a dream to see Sora drop from that kind of distance over and over again? Maybe even have Riku be playable, doing the same thing? The 100-acre wood is, like the last game, not really essential, but a cute little change of pace. It's nice to have something that breaks up the normal formula, even if it is just a collection of little mini-games. Unfortunately though, Riku can never visit this world. Heading back to the castle, castle, Sora has an encounter with Vexen, who's the next organization boss battle. You're never gonna guess how I fought him. Come on, I want you to guess. Leave a comment or something. I'd love to know how you think I fought this boss. The incredible strategy that I employed to best this challenging foe. If you guessed, spamming lethal frame slates followed by Sonic Blade, congratulations, you are absolutely correct.
Spamming the same move over and over again? Really? Do you even want to play this game? Like, legitimately, do you even want to play this game? Because it seems like you don't.
Vexen's moves are ice-based, and his attacks range from melee shield attacks to ice needles that follow you around the arena, similar to the ones we saw in the Ice Titan match in the first game. But fortunately, thanks to my incredible tactics, I made short work of this guy.
Dude, I've seen better gameplay from my 4-year-old cousin, and he eats cold s'mores Pop-Tarts every morning and calls it breakfast like a freaking weirdo.
After you beat Vexen, you're given a card for Twilight Town, a world we've never seen before. So I'm gonna do something a bit weird for this segment. Twilight Town is initially featured in Chain of Memories, but it's way more impactful and fleshed out in Kingdom Hearts 2, so I'm gonna save most of my thoughts on this world for the next game. I know, it's a really important world, and that's why I'm saving it. I at least will mention that there is a second Vexen boss battle here in front of the old mansion. This fight was a bit more challenging for me as I kind of messed up my slates and didn't get to use lethal frame like I wanted to, leading to me losing my first attempt. See, I am able to admit the downsides of relying on one slate. Of course, learning nothing, I tried again and employed my 10 million IQ strategy and triumphantly defeated him with my incredible skill set.
Oh my god, you're such a
No, shh. You're all just jealous of my skills. It's okay. It's okay.
You suck!
After Sora returns to the castle, there's yet another fight against Riku Replica. This one just feels like the previous ones to me. In an interesting reversal of the first game, the last traditional world you visit is the Destiny Islands. Obviously, this isn't the same experience as exploring the islands in the first game, but one thing I really like about this world is how in this revisit, Sora is far more powerful and experienced than he was at the beginning of the first game, even with the memory loss. It's really interesting to contrast this visit where the world feels 1,000 times more complex because of the events that have happened since he first left. I don't know, I'm rambling here, but I do like thinking about these kinds of things. I want to make a special note of a change to the music though. Most of the worlds in this game have nearly identical music to their first game counterparts. However, the Destiny Islands is an exception because while the original version of the song was an upbeat percussive track, this new version is way more mellow. It's a piano-heavy rendition with a slower BPM. Nearly every future appearance of this song is incredibly similar in composition to this one, the more heartfelt version. I'm gonna go into some speculation, so bear with me, but I have to wonder if this change in tone is because of Sora's perception of the world rather than the players. For us, it was a fun tropical island paradise that served as a tutorial, but for Sora, that's a place of comfort where most of his cherished memories were formed, even if those memories have been warped. And if that's the case, does that mean that the compositions of certain worlds in this series are reflective of the feelings evoked by the characters who explore them? Is the music in service of the player's perspective, or the perspective of the characters who visit them? I know this is a tangent, but it's just something fun to think about. The boss fight of this world is against the dark side, which is similar to its previous appearance, but it feels a lot more aggressive with its attacks. Instead of just sticking its hand into the ground, it pounds the ground furiously at a high speed. The air projectiles also seem to drop a lot faster here, but that could just be my imagination. When I did this fight, I tried my good old-fashioned lethal frame strategy, but it was shockingly ineffective. Most of the time I'd be aiming the wrong way or I'd just miss entirely. However, I am dedicated to my incredible strategy and brute forced it anyways. After going back into the castle, you have one final fight against Riku Replica. Then it's immediately followed up with another battle against Larxene. This fight brings my lethal frame Sonic Blade strategy full circle and works just as well as it did the first time. Taking out yet another organization member, Sora heads into Castle Oblivion itself. Really quickly, I want to go over some of the Riku exclusive fights. In this game, Sora and Riku battle most of the same bosses, but Riku does have a couple of exclusive ones. The first takes place towards the end of the game and is against Lexius. Lexius uses a thick sort of hammer sword thing and deals heavy melee attacks against you. He then charges up a ton of energy and starts dealing even more damage, and this dude hits hard. I played this one kind of stupid and just tried to tank it, hoping that dark mode would save me, but I totally screwed it up on my first try. I eventually won the fight through duels, which seems like the most efficient strategy for taking him on and dealing tons of damage to his like 10 health bars. On the Destiny Islands, Riku fights Zexion, a boss fight that doesn't actually exist in the original Game Boy Advance version. This fight is deceptively hard because while Zexion isn't aggressively offensive, he basically steals your cards from you. Sometimes you can get them back by picking them up as they bounce around the arena, But this makes it even harder because you've got more things to worry about, like his stun attacks and huge AoE moves like this one, where he rotates around the arena with this dark energy pillar thing. He's also got a cyclone attack that drags you into the center of the arena. All of this makes it super tough to consistently keep useful cards in your deck. This fight is legitimately tough, and I spent a huge amount of time unable to do any damage because he'd stolen all of my useful and powerful cards, and I couldn't break his cards or use any kind of slates. It took me 3 very lengthy attempts to beat him. After Zexion, Riku has one final boss fight in Castle Oblivion, but I'll get to that one in a bit. But hey look, we're back in Castle Oblivion! Aesthetically, Castle Oblivion is a starkly different place from any of the colorful Disney worlds that you visit, and serves as almost the antithesis of what those worlds represent. It's a sterile environment. Everything is kind of this shiny white marble. The bright yet somehow dull theme gives it an uninviting feeling, which I think is the point. This actually clashes with the soft musical theme you hear when you're there in between the worlds. It's a theme that almost feels like a respite, but with ominous undertones, like you're never really welcome here, you're just here to fulfill a purpose. Most of the game's pivotal scenes take place in Castle Oblivion, and you still get that same feeling even with the scenes focused on the antagonists. No one seems to be here because they want to be, they're here because they need to be. They don't fully understand what Castle Oblivion is, they just use it to further their plans. It's almost as if it's just as uninviting to them as it is to us. The story of Castle Oblivion spans the entire game because most important events happen here in between the worlds that you visit. Also, while the first game showed a few cutscenes from the perspective of other characters like Maleficent's roundtable with other villains, it didn't really cut away from Sora's perspective all that much. Chain of Memories, on the other hand, has lengthy cutscenes that take place in entirely different areas of the castle than the one Sora's visiting. This cutting away from Sora's point of view is necessary for the story to make sense, but I never realized just how much more it happened in this game until I played the 2 games back to back. By this point, you've spent the entire game visiting these small corridors in Castle Oblivion between each world, but here at the end, you get to finally explore the world in the style of the previous worlds with room cards and everything. This is a pivotal world, and its story is covered in the synopsis, but I did want to take a moment to appreciate this full-on fight scene we get between Axel and Marluxia. There's not a whole lot of action scenes like this early on in the series, so this is super cool. After this scene, you take on Axel a second time, but unlike last time, I had my trusty big brain strategy and made very quick work of him. After some more story stuff, you're thrust into the first big showdown with the game's ultimate antagonist, Marluxia. But not before he says the thing!
You would knowingly shackle your heart with a chain of memories born of lies. That's the name of the game!
Marluxia's weapon of choice is a giant scythe with a healthy dose of fabulousness. Also, this fight does almost seem like it was designed specifically to counter my lethal frame strat. While it does work every once in a while, he's able to hop away from it right before the melee hits come out. Then he's open to use his own powerful slates like Death Scythe, which has him dealing far-reaching slice attacks from mid-air, or Blossom Shower, an almost Sonic Blade-like move, followed by a homing projectile laser thing. This fight had to be done mostly legit on my end, and once you get a groove going, you can read most of his attacks, like how Death Scythe can be avoided if you time your dodge rolls. Blossom Shower, on the other hand, I have no idea how to avoid this, and it led to me losing the first attempt. After doing some research, I found that he's super susceptible to fire spells, so I stacked a few of those in my deck, and I was able to take him out pretty handily. Once he's defeated, you learn that this was merely an illusion of Marluxia, and that you actually have to fight him again. The second Marluxia fight sees him pilot a weird-looking flying nobody thing. It looks like a statue wearing robes, and it's actually kinda creepy. It has these 2 giant blade arms that are targetable, and if you reduce their health, they break. Once they're both broken, you can target the enemy directly, but at this point he starts using these very fast dash attacks from off the side of the arena, along with a plethora of other new attacks like projectile glowing X-beams, and these floating wisps that rotate around you and fire lasers at you. In fact, I had to ditch my standard strategy entirely for this fight because it's a whole different ballgame. It actually feels a lot more like a standard Kingdom Hearts fight instead of a Chain of Memories fight, because there's a lot more focus on movement and dodging, which was refreshing and made this fight incredibly satisfying to beat. Of course, there were still plenty of frustrating card breaks, but for a minute, I almost felt like I was playing a normal Kingdom Hearts game. After the second fight, you're almost immediately thrust into a third and final phase, this time against an on-foot Marluxia and the statue-like nobody monster behind him. Oh, and with Lord of the Castle as the backing track, an insanely good track with a wild piano scaling up and down. I hate to use this word, but this track is legitimately epic and makes this fight so much cooler. This last fight actually makes him susceptible to lethal frame though, and you best bet I abused the hell out of that. It's almost poetic. I had to fight my way through without my cheese strat, only for it to all pay off off at the end with my cheese strap. However, it wasn't quite so straightforward. Marluxia has this move called Gale of Severance that pushes you back with a heavy wind, and another move that makes you outright drop your cards. It would have been devastating if I didn't immediately find the cards that made up my final lethal frame slate of the game to defeat him once and for all. With that fight, Sora's story is complete. Riku's final battle is a bit smaller in scale and is up against Ansem, a fight that echoes one of the final battles from the first game. Ansem floats around the arena with his guardian, but has a few tricks up his sleeve, like floating high up into the air and breaking out shockwave attacks almost immediately. Still, the fight is a bit more straightforward of a final fight compared to Marluxia, and I took advantage of dark mode here along with a couple of card duels to deal some pretty heavy damage. I don't know how to explain it, but Riku's version of this fight feels so much cooler than Sora's from the first game, and maybe it was because Square Enix was more experienced with the presentation for the series at this point. I don't know, but this fight just feels way more intense to me. Once Ansem is defeated, you've finished Chain of Memories. Listen, I'm not gonna call Chain of Memories a masterpiece. In fact, if I had to rank the games, it's one of my least favorite.
I just think that it's not what the games should be. You know, the card system in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories is just something I guess I just never really got on board with, because I know a lot of people are really into that system and really found it enjoyable, but I just think personally that it slows down the game. It takes away a lot of the fun out of the Kingdom Hearts gameplay. I think it makes it to where you have to micromanage everything, and I don't think that's what really Kingdom Hearts should be.
But it's still a genuinely good game with some really interesting, innovative, and creative ideas. The huge gameplay changes are incredibly divisive though, and a lot of people write off this game entirely because of it, and I get it. This game is kind of a hard sell because Kingdom Hearts is a series known for its deep and challenging combat mechanics and the exploration you can do, at least in the first game. The card system in this game introduces a friction to those mechanics in both learning and execution that I completely understand can just be a turnoff, but I truly believe it's the kind of gameplay that just has to click. For example, I was having just an okay time until I unlocked Lethal Frame. Then I was having a blast, because a lot of the fun for this game for me is finding ways to break it and master the card system to become way more powerful, way faster than you could in a traditional Kingdom Hearts game. That's why I think that if you're someone who has never tried this game but enjoys the series, or someone who wants to try the series and wonders if they should play this game, my recommendation is to at least try this game. Give it a few hours to breathe and unlock some slates and build a nice deck. If it still hasn't clicked by that point, well, at least you tried, right? Of course, there's also the retread of a bunch of worlds you've already visited, which can be another point of friction. I'll be honest, playing the first game in this back-to-back can be pretty draining and almost led to me burning out. You can't tell from watching this video, but I actually started this game as soon as I finished the first game, but I stopped during Sora's story in Olympus Coliseum and didn't pick it back up until all the way after I'd completed almost every other game in the series for this video. And on top of all of that, even if you're okay with retreading worlds you've already visited, you may not be a fan of the keycard system or the rooms or the 3-act structure of each world. These are fundamental parts of the game for better or for worse, and if those systems are your issue, then yeah, there's unfortunately no way around that. Still, the game gets a lot of undeserved hate, and I'd argue that its biggest crime is just being different. It's got a really cool story that lays the foundation for a ton of things going forward, and it greatly widens the scope of the Kingdom Hearts universe on top of featuring more mature themes and a darker tone. It also has the introduction of some incredible fan-favorite characters, most of which are still important to the story to this day. Still, this isn't my favorite Kingdom Hearts game, and that's okay. It unfortunately is limited automatically by the way it was designed, and a lot of the elements I enjoyed from the first game are impossible here thanks to the way it's put together, like the joy of exploration and environmental stuff. But hey, at the end of the day, I already said my piece on this game. If you've avoided it just because of discourse or whatever, my suggestion again is just to at least try it. Worst case scenario, you don't like it. Best case, you widen your horizons with an enjoyable game that you can break with Lethal Frame and Sonic Blade. Kingdom Hearts VCast was released in 2004 in Japan and 2005 in the West solely for Verizon mobile phones. Like this bad boy right here. This game is sort of a weird entry, mainly because it wasn't developed by Square Enix, and as far as I can tell, isn't considered an official title. While it was published by Disney, it's pretty much its own thing, using elements from the first Kingdom Hearts as a basis. The game is broken up into distinct levels based on worlds, the tutorial obstacle course, a new island area called Swashbuckler's Island, and worlds based on Aladdin, Alice in Wonderland, and Sleeping Beauty. Gameplay-wise, this game is kinda sorta an emulation of Kingdom Hearts. Maybe? It's got platforming elements and Keyblade combat, but the controls are pretty atrocious. They're tank controls, meaning that holding forward makes Sora move forward, but holding backwards makes him strafe backwards while still facing forward. You have to manually rotate him left and right to change his direction, meaning that you have a ton of fine control, but it's incredibly unresponsive as a result. The levels are small by modern standards, but still impressively large given the format. There's even a pretty nice focus on platforming here, though it tends to be frustrating at times due to both the janky controls and the sometimes odd camera angles. Plus, sometimes this game just has weird collision in general. There is this really neat segment where you have to defeat a shadow version of Sora that mimics your movements, and the correct way to defeat him is to kind of just force him to fall into this hole. It's an obvious solution, but it doesn't really take a whole lot to impress me in a game like this anyways. I played through the entirety of the Swashbuckler's Island level in this game, and I guess right after that, it unsuccessfully attempts to open the Alice in Wonderland world. See, the issue with that is that this world is actually lost media as of this video. The game was released in downloadable level chunks from the now defunct Verizon Vcast service, and the only way to retrieve those lost levels is to find phones with the files still on them, something easier said than done almost 20 years later. While a large portion of the game has been recovered, there's still one level that's never been found, and it's the Alice in Wonderland level. I'm sure this is a long shot, but if you are someone who somehow has an old phone with Vcast's Wonderland level still on it, definitely get in touch. I can put you with the right people. There are other worlds that I can access with like modified save files, including Agrabah and Maleficent's Castle, but I think you get the idea here. Vcast isn't what I'd consider to be a particularly great game. I don't think anyone's gonna make that argument actually. That being said, it is kind of impressive. In the modern era of smartphones with full-size 3D gaming experiences, it's really easy to forget that the flip phones of the mid-2000s were meant almost exclusively for making calls and sending text messages, maybe playing Snake if you were getting real fancy. A fully 3D game on a device like this is no small feat, and while Vcast wasn't the only 3D game in this format, it's definitely one of the more impressive accomplishments. To cap off part 1 of this massive retrospective, let's have our first discussion of the music of Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is a series full of memorable locales, characters, and emotional themes, and in my opinion, nothing can reinforce a feeling or association with those things more than music. The series is full of incredible pieces, many inspired by or taken directly from the Disney franchises that they're based upon. And for this first segment, I want to focus on the vocal themes, specifically the very first one, Simple and Clean. Yoko Shimomura's musical pieces make up almost the entirety of the music of the Kingdom Hearts series. But we can't forget that almost every Kingdom Hearts game has a unique opening featuring music from the one and only Hikaru Utada. While she has only contributed a total of 4 songs across the series, not counting extra versions, the songs have been remixed or reused for almost every entry, cementing them as a staple of what gives Kingdom Hearts its identity. The tracks she's provided to this series have turned into anthems of a generation, to the point where even if you've never been a fan of the series, I'd bet you're at least familiar with one of the tracks, most likely Simple and Clean. Simple and Clean is the English version of a track originally called Hikari, and this track was used for the first Kingdom Hearts, along with plenty of other appearances in later games. While the full song is used in the game's ending sequence, a remixed version is used for the intro. There's also an orchestral version used for the credits and for special montages used before the title screen too. The remix used in the intro is called the PLANiTb remix, PLANiTb being the name of the artist who made it. The original version is a pop song with heavy use of acoustic instruments, predominantly a guitar. It's a soft yet powerful track. While the English version has a slightly different lyrical cadence from the Japanese version, they're both still incredibly catchy. The PLANiTb remix of Simple and Clean is more of an electronic dance track with heavy use of synthesizers, and it evokes this ethereal feeling that makes it almost a fever dream in a way that's hard to describe. Watching it along with the first game's intro and the accompanying visuals of Sora essentially being pulled in multiple directions all at once creates this tight feeling of tension that leaves you wondering more than understanding, which I think is probably the point. If you're familiar with both the original version and this remix, you gain an appreciation for the way that each version fits the tone of where it's used. The remixed version kind of clashes with the original, but in a way that makes the original so much more special when you hear it for the first time during the game's ending. If you were like me and were never exposed to the original version of the song before beating the game, Simple and Clean kicking in the moment Sora and Kairi are separated was a hauntingly beautiful experience. The PLANiTb version of the song is what I'd consider to be one of the biggest cultural tentpoles of the Kingdom Hearts series, and probably the version most people outside of the Kingdom Hearts fandom are familiar with. Well, unless you're a big fan of Utada and her wider work, which is excellent by the way. You really should check it out if you haven't before. But I'd wager that if you played this song for a stranger, it's probably a 50-50 shot that they either had never heard it or would immediately say, oh, that's the Kingdom Hearts song. It's that iconic. Not to detract from the original version of the song, of course, but this remix was the first thing an entire generation experienced when they clicked on new new game for the first time back in the early 2000s. That all being said, who is PLANiTb? Who made this remix? Why did they make this remix? I don't think I've ever seen a single person inside the Kingdom Hearts fandom, or even outside, ask these questions, but I've always wondered myself. When I started working on this video almost 2 years ago, I tried looking into it online, but there's shockingly little in the way of detailed information about PLANiTb. I found a couple of things here and there, but I really had to dig for it. I was able to find quite a few producer credits for this person, including some credits on many other Utada tracks. However, I was wanting even more insight, so I dug even further and found what looked like it could be contact info, but it was shaky at best. I figured it couldn't hurt just to send a message and reach out, right?
Do you know, so what's funny for me is that track, it meant an awful lot to so many people. It didn't mean that much to me. That's the honest truth. So it was just a job for me, and it was one of my first jobs, and I got paid £5,000. That's all. But now for the last 20 years keep getting fan mail and people getting married to it and all kinds of craziness.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so again, like a conversation like this, it's like, fine, cool, okay, I'll have a chat about it. I've spent the last 25 years being a record producer and a composer, and I've done stuff I'm very proud of, and that was one of the catalysts for it. So whenever it's constant, when people, like almost every week, people email me or send me letters and even try and call me and stuff, and I'm like, well, okay, fine.
I mean, that's pretty awesome, and I mean, I get that, you know, it was a gig basically.
Well, it bought my first recording studio.
Oh, wow. I wanted to ask, like, what kind of stuff are you doing nowadays? Because yeah, a lot of people in my circle associate that with that song. I mean, I looked into it a bit, and I see you've done a lot of stuff, and you've been in the business for a long time.
In America, I've been doing stuff with a lot of R&B and kind of stuff like that. We did a thing a few years ago with Janet Jackson. That was pretty cool. In Europe, it's mostly kind of gaming stuff and TV and films and that kind of stuff. And then I released my own music as well. So the Bandcamp that you found me on is a place where I sort of house my personal stuff, really. Stuff that I don't intend on releasing. It's just a nice way to house it. It looks pretty. So that's just where you find me. But most of the stuff I do, I you know, we've had 4 number ones. We've had all kinds of stuff. You know?
Oh, wow.
I mean, we got to work with Bjork.
Really?
Yeah, off the back of that record, actually, off the back of Kingdom Hearts. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool, actually.
You know, so I mean, it's cool. I mean, I got to work huge amounts in Japan. Do you know what's funny? And here we are. You'll like this. This will be nice for your interview, I hope. Is I used to work in a recording studio in South London. And it's called the Dairy in Brixton. I worked there with like Amy Winehouse's producers, and we worked with like David Bowie and crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, that's pretty starstruck.
Yeah, I was 26, 27. And then this phone call comes through from this guy called Michael Martin. He basically came through to our manager and said, does anyone want to do this thing in Japan? But I thought, well, I'll do it. And so that was my first record. I did it on a little 4-track on a PC computer on a tiny table in my front room. And I got paid £5,000 and that was it.
It was just out of nowhere?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so that sort of sparked a whole, you know, road to success and blah, blah, blah. And it went very well after that. So I'm very grateful for it. But I'd never, ever made a piece of music like it before or since.
I mean, the best I can say is that it is, at least for me, I'm kind of biased, obviously, but I mean, it's very iconic to me. And I don't think I've ever heard anything like it since. So I believe you there.
Well, same. But the thing is, you know, don't get me wrong. The thing is, I'm really respectful of how much people have enjoyed it over the years. I mean, I can't believe it. I'm really grateful and respectful. But it was a strange thing. It was literally, I put my hand up like you do in the classroom. I'll do it. No problem. And all of a sudden it sells 5.5 million records. It's in the Guinness Book of Records. It's a crazy piece of music. I really like the intro on it. I really like the intro and I really like the outro. The middle section was just a way to get her vocals in. That's honestly how I felt about it. So we did a Japanese version and an English version, and then I did 2 other remixes for her as well. They did quite well.
I actually saw that. It was like it was Beautiful Day, I think.
Yeah, that was went to number 8, I think, in the charts. Yeah, that's pretty big, yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy. So there's a thing called the BBC Proms, Royal Albert Hall, which is a very prestigious event. So the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra played the song, our song, which is a big honour. I know she's gone on tour, and the remix version of some of the stuff she's done, she's used instead of her originals.
That's interesting.
And I don't wish to make it sound, play it down or anything, but the truth of it is, all the while, it's like, what? Really? Okay, fine. Cool. Well, like I said, I'm kind of in semi-retirement now, but the people I work with, there's far more kind of rock, and I think Beautiful World, I think kind of is similar to what I've been doing over the last few years, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot more sort of indie rock, that kind of thing. It's funny, you know, because I kind of feel like an imposter quite a lot.
I get that.
I am Russ.
Well, yeah.
But you know, it's because I get quite a lot of this quite often. But the truth is that I've been doing it for 25 years now, and so the angles of music I've worked in, working with orchestras, working in Japan, working in America, Europe, all over the world, doing these things, working with amazing people, and then I get stuff like this, and I think, God, I didn't forget about it. I still like the tune. I think it's a great tune, but it's like I feel like an imposter. It wasn't really me. You know, it's like a lifetime ago or something. You know.
I mean, it was a really long time ago at this point too, so
I mean, you were 5, damn it.
Yeah, I was 5. I was barely forming sentences at that point.
I was barely forming music. Think of it that way.
You mentioned this earlier. Whenever you made the song, did you have any idea what it was being used for?
No. So the first one was just a remix for Yutade Hikaru, and that was in Japanese. And then I got a phone call and said they want to sing it in English. I thought, well, that makes sense. But I didn't know that they were going to franchise it to Disney and it would become Kingdom Hearts. So I didn't know that, no. And I got paid £5,000.
Did you find out the same day everyone else did?
Well, the truth is, the music industry is a bit of a bugger. And they tend not to always tell you the whole truth. They don't lie, but they tend not to tell you the whole truth. So if they had have let me know that it was for this game and it was going to be this big, well, I should be, you know, a multimillionaire. But
yeah, I feel like you should have made more off of that.
Yeah, well, there we are. So maybe that demonstrates the industry, really. Yeah, I got paid £5,000.
And just no kickback since then?
No.
Wow.
And honestly, it's cool. So my agent in Japan is Michael Martin. He's still my agent. He's still my friend. He's still my cool dude. You know.
All right.
He probably made shitloads of money off of me, but that's right. I mean, there's no point being bitter. I got to make that tune. I get to have phone calls like this. You know,
that's fair. That's a good way of looking at it.
My ego is flattered. I've got a nice life. I've got a beautiful wife, beautiful son. I've got a nice life. It's all right. You know, bugger it. Who cares?
That's really awesome to hear.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, they haven't used it in the last few years, but even for like some of the newer games, they're still using your remix.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's a pretty long tenure for a single song, especially for a series that's been going over 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean, I should be proud of that, you know? I mean, so friends send to me videos. They're in clubs. I went to a club in Miami, and that track came on, like the DJ, a massive club. Thousands of people started singing along to my track, and I was like, what? This is mental. They had no idea who I was. I was in the crowd and went, this is mental.
Wow.
You know, stuff like that. Why not be proud of that, you know? That's cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I'm gushing again. I'm so sorry. Whenever I think of my childhood, that's like the anthem of my childhood. I think I mentioned that in the email, man. But like, yeah, you got a lot of lovers here. I can tell you that. And I'm surprised that they don't know more about you. That's one of the things I wanted to make sure I asked. You know, like, you deserve more than just being known for the one thing. Not to say that should detract from the one thing, but obviously it's such an influence to a lot of people, myself included. I feel like you deserve the recognition.
The truth is, I did get recognition. It's funny, with some of the music I've made, you may not have heard of, I get lots of calls and emails and stuff from people that I've done there as well. There's different communities, maybe the dance scene, or maybe the rock scene, or maybe in this case Kingdom Hearts. And so it's really nice that that's happened, but I've always sort of thought it's something I love. My passion for making music knows no bounds. And so making this stuff for me, that's as good as it gets.
Okay.
That's the truth. Yeah.
That's comforting to hear. I'm not saying...
And I'm really happy that you guys are so in love with it. I mean, how much more flattering is that? Like, I couldn't be more flattered. That's enough for me, you know? That's all right.
Well, that's awesome. You're clearly incredibly talented, though. You say that you're going into kind of a semi-retirement.
Well, yeah, I've earned quite a bit of cash.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
But not through this game, funnily enough. There we are. But it was my ticket. That was my ticket, that game, I guess. It was my ticket. I put my hand up. I said, I'll do it. And that's been pretty much my life. Better to say yes than no.
Just hypothetical, if they were to come to you again and say, hey, remember that thing you did back in like 2000, 2001, would you do it again? If they offered you like a more fair payment, obviously, but if they offered that, would you do it?
They've asked me several times.
Oh. I don't think I have to ask, but just you said no, I'm guessing?
Well, it's a funny thing because absolute truth, I'm not sure I could do it again.
Think it was like a lightning in a bottle situation?
Kind of thing, yeah. Well, it's not just that. I mean, I reckon I probably could do it again. But my wife, her and I always have a phrase, which is never go back.
Okay. You know what? That's fair.
I mean, I reckon I could do it again. It's just, I'm 49. It's when I was 29, different.
You should be in jacuzzis and yachts.
I'm good for yachts. I just think it's better to be positive. And I've had a great life, and this stuff just adds to it.
I want to give a massive shout out to him for not only taking the time to speak to a fan, but also being cool with me including it in this video, and just being an overall delightful person to talk to. The full conversation I had with him is like half an hour long, and I had to cut it down for this video. If you want to hear the full version, I have put it on my Patreon completely uncut, so definitely go check that out if you're interested. I wish I knew what I could plug to promote him, but all I can think of is his Bandcamp page, which I will include in the description of this video. Plus, be sure to check out some of the stuff that he's been involved with over the years. He's got a pretty impressive resume. This is what I'd consider the first act of Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts establishes basically the world of Kingdom Hearts, and Chain of Memories establishes the foundation of a lot of the stuff we'd see the next few games tackle, including some events that take place partly during Chain of Memories. But in my experience, these early games tend to get a little bit overshadowed, and it's kind of understandable in a sense. They came out a really long time ago, and they weren't really what I'd consider mainstream at the time, or at the very least, not at the level of popularity that the series would reach with the release of Kingdom Hearts 2.
Kingdom Hearts is something that I saw as a child, and I remember noting in my head what that looked like, but I never had any Sony products growing up or access to any of the Kingdom Hearts games that weren't on Sony products exclusively. And it slowly became something that felt nostalgic to me, but also became incredibly important to me because of Neosai, my husband.
That's not to say that no one cares about them today, but outside of the hardcore fandom, most people would probably think of Kingdom Hearts 2 or even 3 first when they think about the games. And of course, there's just a lot of Kingdom Hearts games, so many that it's really easy to kind of focus on just a handful rather than a whole. Even Kingdom Hearts fans struggle to keep track sometimes, myself included.
I think it's better than it used to be, but it is still a lot of games, and because it's a lot of games, people are all like, oh, it's so complicated and convoluted, when you really just need to play the games, but I understand that it's a lot and that kind of makes it hard.
I'll talk more about this later on, but really I think you can't expect people to care about every single game equally, so it makes sense that the earlier games might slip through the cracks for some people, especially when the newer games iterate on those early games. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself, though this does make a really good segue into my next point. I started work on this retrospective over 2 years ago as of this recording. Originally, it was meant to be one huge video, but as I started the actual voiceover recording process and editing the video, I began to realize that there's so much to cram into this. The video was quite literally too long to post onto YouTube. There's a 12-hour upload limit, and there's no way I can fit all of this into that space. So I had to make the difficult decision to break it down into parts. As of this recording, the plan is for 3 parts total. Now, if you're watching this video like a year from now, yeah, go check out parts 2 and 3. I'm sure they're great. Also, the other stuff on my channel, I've got a lot, and if you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing. That being said, the next part will be out as soon as I can possibly get it out. Everything's already recorded and finished, and the edit's already begun, so I hope I can get it out within the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. I've got plenty of great surprises and cameos that I just can't wait to show you. Here's a sneak peek at what you'll see in part 2. Before we go, I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who contributed something to this huge project. I can't believe I got to work with such cool people. I am genuinely starstruck that these creators that I admire so much were willing to put aside time for me, and I just can't express my thanks enough. Please go check out these creators. I'm going to be putting their links in the description for this video. Plus, I really want to thank my patrons, including That's Ash and Eggmio in the Played Every Game tier, along with all of these absolutely wonderful people. Your support is actually actually made it possible for me to spend so much time on a huge project like this. And I appreciate you sticking around even during a big content drought. And the same goes for you, viewer. I really appreciate you. From the brand new viewers who maybe even discovered me through this video, to the ones who have been around for a while, some of which have been here since like 2021 when I started doing this. I see you. You all really keep me going and motivate me to keep creating and sharing and doing this crazy thing. So thank you. Alright, I'll see you really soon. Until then, thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.